What's poppin', my Skywalkers? It is me, MT, and welcome back to the Heavy Spoiler Show. This is about to be an ultimate breakdown for all of the Star Wars prequel films. I'm talking The Phantom Menace, I'm talking Attack of the Clones, and of course, I'm talking Revenge of the Sith. So, without further ado, let's just jump into this thing. But anyways, the movie starts like all Star Wars movies do, with a slow crawl of yellow text against a background of stars. It is a period of turmoil for the Galactic Republic as interplanetary tax disputes have led the Trade Federation to setting up a blockade of battleships preventing trade to the planet Naboo. And because of this, the current Supreme Chancellor of the Galactic Republic sends Jedi Knights Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi to try to convince the Trade Federation to cut all that shit out. Having every movie start with stars is actually quite symbolic. I mean, not just because of the Star Wars name, but also because I believe these stars in a sea of darkness are supposed to represent the light and dark sides of the cosmic force, the aspect of the force tied to the cosmos itself. Because you see, the overall force is divided into two parts, and I'm not just talking about the light side and the dark side. There's also the cosmic force, which is tied to the universe and all things, and also the living force, which is specifically tied to living beings like humans, aliens, animals, trees, and planets. Much like all life in the universe emerged from both the darkness and the stars of the cosmos itself, the living force has its origins within the cosmic force. All life comes from the stars and the emptiness between worlds, and thus will return to this cosmic realm between worlds when everything dies. I believe starting every Star Wars movie off with the stars and darkness of the cosmic force is incredibly intentional, as the cosmic force is literally the very reason why all of these 9 Star Wars movies happened in the first place. Mostly because the cosmic force is home to an infinite amount of cosmic knowledge about the past, present, and future. Both the Jedi and Sith religions both access the cosmic force in their own ways in order to gain some type of insight that they can't see on their own otherwise. For example, the Sith Lord Darth Sidious, the Phantom Menace himself, used the dark side of the cosmic force to foresee the coming fall of the Jedi and the rise of the dark side, and what to do to cause all of that to happen, while the Jedi used focused meditation to tap into the light side of the cosmic force to detect coming threats and overall disturbances in the force. This next part is important. The cosmic force is a wellspring of ultimate knowledge. However, because of that, the cosmic force can be a window for ultimate destruction as well. Because knowledge is power, and absolute power, like the cosmic force, has a strong likelihood of corrupting absolutely. And it's actually what leads to the fall of the Jedi in Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. But don't worry, this is all going somewhere, I promise. I'm basically just getting ready to explain to you guys why Qui-Gon Jinn freaking rules and was wiser than the entire Jedi Council. You see, the Jedi defeated the dark-sided Sith Order over 1,000 years ago prior to this movie, and over the past few centuries of peace, the Jedi have been feeling like some pretty hot shit. They thought they were so cool, so righteous, so immune to the dark side, and so in tune with the secrets of the cosmic force that they couldn't even consider the possibility that they could ever miss signs of the rise of the dark side again. Then, at the end of this movie, when they realize that they were actually wrong and the Sith have actually returned with a new, mysterious phantom leader, their dark side phobia starts kicking into high gear, and those space monks start getting spooked out. Because if the Sith are allowed to take over, not only will countless lives across countless planets of the galaxy be thrown into suffering, but the Jedi would lose their position of power in the galaxy, as they have become known as the galaxy's peacekeepers. The Jedi were so afraid of the dark side and what this evil mastermind could do to the galaxy and the Jedi's high standing in galactic power that they start leaning extra hard on the cosmic force to try to give them the knowledge to foresee what the Sith are planning and find their leader. Not only this, but their fear of the rise of the dark side would push the Jedi to becoming full-on soldiers in a galactic war instead of merely galactic peacekeepers like they were initially intended to be. And this warfare mindset, fueled by their fear, would eventually lead the supposed righteous cult into doing dishonest, dark-sided things, like asking an adult Anakin Skywalker to illegally spy on a political figure because the cosmic force led them to do so. It is their hypocrisy that would then eventually lead Anakin Skywalker to view the Jedi as an evil cult trying to take over the galaxy, and then move to wipe that evil cult out. Now, I realize that I'm jumping ahead a few movies, but I'm saying all of this because I need you to understand why Episode Episode 1 starts off with a particular lesson that Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn attempts to impart on his Padawan Obi-Wan Kenobi. Because after Supreme Chancellor Valorum sends Liam Neeson's Qui-Gon Jinn and Ewan McGregor's Obi-Wan Kenobi to strong-arm the end of a trade blockade, the Trade Federation welcomes them onto their ship in order to begin negotiations on behalf of the Galactic Senate. And after boarding the Trade Federation's Lucre Hulk class LH-3210 cargo freighter, a silver TC series protocol droid named TC-14 leads the Jedi to a waiting room. This is when Obi-Wan Kenobi says the classic Star Wars line, "I have a bad feeling about this."
I have a bad feeling about this.
A running joke in every piece of Star Wars media ever since it was first said by Luke Skywalker in A New Hope.
I have a very bad feeling about this.
In that clip, Qui-Gon Jinn asks what's wrong, and Obi-Wan tells him that the cosmic force is causing him to feel a strong sense of anxiety as he detects an elusive threat on the horizon. In response to this, his mentor Qui-Gon Jinn tells Obi-Wan to be mindful of his anxieties and to stop focusing so much on using the cosmic force for answers about the future, because all worrying about the future does is make people blind to the present moment happening right in front of them. This is why Qui-Gon tells Obi-Wan to focus on the living force instead, because unlike the cosmic force, the living force is primarily rooted in the here and now. The living force is life itself, and Qui-Gon is trying to get his people to focus on the living force of these duplicitous Neimoidians of the Trade Federation and the fear radiating from their living forces, rather than wasting his energy and emotions on signals from the cosmic force. Now again, the reason why I just went on this incredibly long spiel about the cosmic force so early in this video is to get you guys to realize the immense importance of this conversation between Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi. Because within this conversation is the main moral of the entire prequel story to come in these next 3 movies. Present-minded hope over future-minded fear. Obi-Wan saying, "I've got a bad feeling about this," perfectly exemplifies the training priorities of the Jedi Council, who want their Jedi to be so pure that they can clearly hear and feel knowledge about the future. But with that cosmic knowledge of the future, not only comes the risk of heightened fear and anxiety, but also extreme arrogance in their abilities. And this is the main difference between Qui-Gon Jinn and the Jedi Order. While Qui-Gon does value the cosmic force in his own way, he's more about valuing the living force and the life all around him, taking the time to appreciate the present moment and study the life forces around him, so he can spend all of his time focusing on how to protect all of that life from meeting unnatural ends at the hands of dark-sided individuals. Like, it's all about the here and now with Qui-Gon Jinn. This differs greatly from the actions of the Jedi, who prefer to teach their Padawans like Obi-Wan Kenobi to over-rely on signs from the cosmic force for guidance. Focusing on the present rather than the future helps one not borrow any unnecessary fear, because in Star Wars, fear is a very quick pathway towards the dark side. In fact, fear is the dark side itself. And because Qui-Gon Jinn was more mindful of this than the Jedi Council, he was actually the perfect teacher that Anakin Skywalker actually needed to avoid his fate of falling to the dark side and becoming Darth Vader. This is the significance of the Duel of the Fates that happens towards the end of the movie. Because Anakin was born through the Force with a crazy amount of midichlorians in his bloodstream, it was almost effortless for Anakin to connect to the cosmic force. And while yeah, having a strong connection to the Force made Anakin one of the greatest Jedi of all time, messages from the cosmic force would also begin to torment Anakin Skywalker's dreams, giving him visions of the future of both his mother dying and then his wife dying. If Qui-Gon Jinn was not ultimately slain by Darth Maul during this Duel of the Fates, Anakin would have had a teacher that would have trained Anakin from a young age to not center on his anxieties and to keep his concentration in the here and now, which would have prevented him from becoming Darth Sidious's apprentice in order to keep his fear of losing Padme from becoming a reality. Instead, thanks to Darth Maul, Anakin's teacher would end up becoming Obi-Wan Kenobi, who would ultimately fail Anakin by not instilling Qui-Gon Jinn's present-minded lifestyle into his pupil.
Sweet Jesus, Harry, you surely screwed the pooch last night, didn't you?
Instead, choosing to teach Anakin the Jedi way of burying his fears and negative emotions in fear of the dark side rather than being mindful of one's negative emotions and living in harmony with those negative emotions. And this is actually the primary reason why Qui-Gon Jinn refused the Jedi's offer to have a seat on the council. Dude was just not about their rigid ways of thinking and preferred to let the will of the Force guide him to where he needs to be. Rather than sitting in a circle meditating about the future, Qui-Gon was chill enough to just let the Force decide his fate, because no matter how much we worry, what will be is what will be. But anyways, yeah, the Trade Federation starts shitting bricks at the sight of these two Jedi that they call their buddy Darth Sidious, played by actor Ian McDiarmid, who also played Palpatine in 1983's Return of the Jedi. But before him, actresses Marjorie Eaton and Elaine Baker would portray Darth Sidious for the first time for the theatrical releases of 1980's The Empire Strikes Back. When George Lucas offered Ian McDiarmid the role of the movie, he had no idea that he was actually coming back to play Darth Sidious once again, as he was only told that he was going to be playing some type of senator. So I am sure that he was pleasantly surprised when he finally arrived on set. Apparently Sidious has been helping Newt Gunray and his fellow Naboidians set up a trade blockade around Sidious's homeworld of Naboo. Darth Sidious then orders them to kill the Jedi and begin landing their troops of battle droids onto the surface of the planet. And in compliance with his orders, the Trade Federation immediately blows up the Radiant 7, the red Consular-class space cruiser that brought the Jedi onto the Trade Federation ship. This ship was actually purposely designed by Lucas and his team to have the shape of Princess Leia's Tantive 4 spaceship that Darth Vader boards at the beginning of A New Hope. They then tried to poison the Jedi with dioxis gas, but they end up failing, with the Jedi emerging from the smoke with lightsabers in hand, ready to do battle with these battle droids. And speaking of their lightsabers, both Liam Neeson and Ewan McGregor specifically chose their lightsaber hilts themselves prior to shooting. In a very Jedi-like way, director George Lucas only gave the two of them 10 minutes to choose amongst a variety of different lightsabers that they had made for them, telling them to just trust their feelings and inner instincts when making their choice. Something that Jedi like Qui-Gon Jinn are constantly telling Jedi Padawans like Obi-Wan Kenobi to do in order to be more in tune with the Force. Also, by the way, if y'all like Star Wars, be sure to stop by the Heavy Spoilers merch store to pick up our new Empire shirt inspired by both Andor and Rogue One. On the front of the shirt is a little Death Star, while a giant TIE fighter covered in the Aurebesh Star Wars language is nice and big on the back. It's a sick-ass design and we're really proud of it, so head on over to the Heavy Spoilers merch store today and pick up one for yourself. But anyways, this young Obi-Wan Kenobi can be seen wearing a little braid in his hair, a purposeful hairstyle meant to point to how Obi-Wan is actually still very much a student in the ways of the Jedi, also known as a Jedi Padawan. Obi-Wan will keep this hairstyle until the Jedi Council determines that he is trained well enough to become a proper official Jedi Knight. Ewan McGregor is of course the second actor to play Obi-Wan Kenobi after the late and great Alec Guinness did so in George Lucas's original trilogy. And in order to prepare to play a much younger version of the character, McGregor carefully studied all of Alec Guinness's performances as Obi-Wan in order to get his physical and vocal mannerisms down pat, which he ended up doing rather flawlessly in my opinion. Top tier casting choice. Ewan McGregor is actually the nephew of Wedge Antilles actor Dennis Lawson, which is kind of crazy. Apparently being in a Star Wars movie is just part of the family business. But in regards to Qui-Gon, Liam Neeson was actually so enthusiastic about being in a Star Wars that he agreed to be in the movie almost immediately without even getting a script to look at. And honestly, I would probably do the same shit if I was an actor at that time, because a new Star Wars trilogy was actually a pretty big deal. However, Liam Neeson's involvement in the movie would accidentally cost the production an additional $150,000 worth of set building. Because the movie was going to be so VFX heavy, George Lucas and his team only needed to build sets that were as physically tall as their actors were. So when Liam Neeson's 6'4" ass got signed onto the movie, they had to spend extra money building taller sets to accommodate his height. But anyways, these battle droids that the Jedi fight here are actually OOM series battle droids, which are different from the B1 battle droids that we see in episodes 2 and 3, with the most primary difference being that these OOM series battle droids are all connected to a central control computer on a nearby orbiting droid control ship, which is what little Anakin would destroy later on in the movie in order to deactivate the Trade Federation's droid army. Later models of battle droids would become more autonomous and able to function even when a central control computer was destroyed. And you can also see that each of these droids are painted with different colors. The red battle droids are the regular security droids that serve as foot soldiers, while the ones that are painted yellow are the command battle droids, who are in charge of squads of red security battle droids, and sometimes even the blue ones too. The battle droids painted blue are the pilot battle droids that help fly starships and cruisers, but they can easily transition to becoming foot soldiers should the need arise. After the Jedi handle these battle droids with ease, the Trade Federation tells a couple of droidicas to shield up and roll out. The Trade Federation actually bought these droidicas from a species of alien called the Colocoids, who lived on a planet called Cola 4. And while we don't really know what these Colocoids look like in the official Star Wars continuity, in the old Legends canon, we learn that these Colocoids looked a lot like the droidicas themselves, as they literally modeled those droidicas after their own physical beings, just as you can see in this image here. Originally, when the droidicas were first designed by George Lucas's team, they did not have the ability to walk at all, only rolling and then shooting in place after they stopped rolling. However, because the robot was designed to look like a dual-wielding gunslinger, Lucas felt like droidicas should be able to walk a little as well, so they added that feature in, much to the Jedi's chagrin. The Jedi then used the Force to help them run away at high speeds, with this technique being known as a Force dash. Jedi can't use this ability all the time due to how much strain it puts on their body. Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi then make their way to the hangar, where they find an army of battle droids entering Mark 1 armor assault tanks to prepare for an assault on Naboo. This is when the Trade Federation gets a call from Queen Amidala, played by actress Natalie Portman, whose voice has been lowered a bit in post-production in order to make her sound more authoritative. The Trade Federation then deny that they know of any Jedi ambassadors before the Queen warns them of going against the Senate. But since the Trade Federation was more afraid of the old man in the hologram, they decided to send their troops down anyway, not knowing that Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan had stowed away on board with the troops like the silly ninja monks that they are. We are then brought to the surface of Naboo and shown this overhead shot of the Theed Royal Palace with beautiful waterfalls flowing in the background. And fun fact about those waterfalls, that's actually just some lightly edited footage of someone on set pouring some salt, which is actually quite a clever way of simulating water. And inside the palace, Queen Amidala and her advisors realize that the Trade Federation is planning an invasion when their communications with the Naboo Senator Palpatine suddenly gets cut off. These scenes of the interior of the Royal Palace were actually filmed inside of the Royal Palace of Caserta in Naples, Italy, where other productions such as 2003's Mission Impossible 3, 2009's Angels and Demons, and 2024's Conclave were also shot. Lucas would also return to this palace for the Royal Palace scenes in Attack of the Clones as well. Meanwhile, as the Trade Federation forces begin to spread out across the forests of Naboo, we see Qui-Gon Jinn running from one of their armor assault tanks, with those tanks greatly disturbing the nearby wildlife. We see a bunch of Naboo creatures like the deer-like Akapi, some massive Falum Passets who both the Naboo and Gungans use to transport carts and heavy machinery, little 3.5-foot tall rhino-looking motte creatures, some tiny dinosaur-like Picobi, as well as some tiny little Nunas, who the locals like to call swamp turkeys. As Qui-Gon runs, he accidentally runs into local screw-up Jar Jar Binks, a goofy-ass Gungan who would one day be responsible for the fall of galactic democracy when he would move to grant Darth Sidious complete control of the Senate in Episode 3. Jar Jar Binks is of course played by actor Ahmed Best, but what's wild is that if pop legend Michael Jackson got his way, he would have been the one to play Jar Jar Binks instead. Like Michael Jackson wanted that role of Jar Jar hard, as he was a massive Star Wars fan himself. But no matter how hard he tried, Jackson could not hee or shaman his way into the movie. Mostly because George Lucas thought that Michael Jackson was far too big of a celebrity for his particular production. But Michael Jackson isn't the only legendary artist to go after a role in George Lucas's highly anticipated new trilogy. Apparently the late and great Tupac Shakur was trying his best to get in on that Phantom Menace action as well. But unfortunately, Tupac would be murdered in cold blood a year before filming would begin. According to former Death Row Records engineer Rick Clifford, Tupac had told him that he was going after the role of a Jedi, and that after Tupac was murdered, Samuel L. Jackson would ultimately get that role. But both Jacksons aside, even though the character Jar Jar Binks would become so hated in this movie and beyond that actor Ahmed Best would go on to suffer years of ridicule from Star Wars fans for merely portraying a character according to George Lucas's wishes, this does not diminish the fact that Jar Jar Binks is actually one of the most important characters in cinema history, mostly because Jar Jar Binks was the first fully digital, motion-captured featured character ever created for film, paving the way for future iconic cinematic characters like Gollum from Lord of the Rings, Caesar from the recent Planet of the Apes trilogy, James Cameron's entire Avatar series, the Optimus Prime in the Transformers movies, and of course, Rocket Raccoon of the Guardians of the Galaxy. Ahmed Best is truly one of cinema's most important actors ever, and I'm so glad that he's been recently getting the love and appreciation that he deserves by Star Wars fans. And because he was so iconic, Lucasfilm would recast Ahmed Best as a Jedi named Kelleran Beck in the Mandalorian TV series. The very Jedi who would prevent Anakin from turning a baby Grogu into some fresh avocado spread during Darth Vader's siege of the Jedi Temple during Order 66. After Qui-Gon saves Jar Jar's life, Jar Jar thanks them by attempting to give them sanctuary in Gungan City, despite him having been banished from the city for crashing the Gungan leader's personal submarine. But speaking of Gungan City, early versions of the film originally had the entirety of Gungan City completely decimated by the Trade Federation. However, the production would ultimately decide against that idea because it was far too dark for a movie primarily aimed at children. The Jedi and Jar Jar then swim to Gungan City where they meet the Gungan leader, who tells the Jedi that he and his people don't want to get involved in trade disputes of the arrogant Naboo people. However, Qui-Gon would use the iconic Jedi mind trick in order to get the Gungan boss to give them transport to Naboo through the planet's core, with the Jedi mind trick first being used by Obi-Wan Kenobi in A New Hope. And using a Gungan tri-bubble bongo ship made in the shape of a manta ray, the three then leave the city and make their underwater journey towards the Naboo city of Theed, almost being killed by a 65-foot wide sea creature called an OPC killer. But luckily, the group would be saved by a nearby Sando aqua monster, absolutely massive creatures that are around 520 to 656 feet long and can weigh up to 54,000 metric tons, or 119,048,400 pounds, about 4 to 5 billion pounds heavier than the Titanic. And what's even crazier is that these gigantic creatures can live up to 100 years, which makes sense because what kind of fish is going to eat something that damn big anyway? After this brush with death, Jar Jar asks the group where they're going, to which Qui-Gon replies, "Don't worry, the Force will guide us." Yet another example of how Qui-Gon Jinn is extremely mindful of the worry within other human beings and himself. Truly a student of the living Force. And we can see this calmness in Qui-Gon Jinn's body language when they are immediately attacked by a giant bioluminescent eel called a Colo clawfish, which are about 131 feet and 40 meters long. Qui-Gon is 100% unafraid of what is happening to him at that moment, even visibly calmer than Obi-Wan is, worrying not about his immediate future, but focused on the present, fully knowing that if he dies right then, it would be the will of the Force, and that he was supposed to die in that manner in order for the Force to forge its inevitable future. And we can see this happen later on during the momentous Duel of the Fates with Darth Maul. As the Jedi and Darth Maul are separated by a series of red force fields, Qui-Gon takes the time to recenter himself and get any anxieties that he has about the outcome of the fight under control, again accepting his fate as just another step towards the inevitable cosmic will of the Force being realized. This is in direct contrast with Obi-Wan Kenobi, who, after seeing his master struck down by the Phantom Menace's Dark Apprentice, doesn't decide to meditate or recenter himself on the present moment at all, instead staring angrily at Darth Maul before attacking. This lack of focus inevitably causes Obi-Wan to lose his lightsaber and his footing, almost falling into a deep, dark abyss below him. It's only when Obi-Wan takes the time to focus on his immediate surroundings instead of being fearful of his opponent that he is able to see that Qui-Gon's lightsaber was available nearby. However, even though Obi-Wan Kenobi successfully implemented his master's teachings on staying in the present moment in order to slay Darth Maul, he would not keep that lesson with him when he became Anakin Skywalker's master at a dying Qui-Gon Jinn's request, a fate that would unfortunately lead Anakin to becoming the Sith Lord Darth Vader, much like I brought up earlier. And while this is happening, Viceroy Newt Gunray has another video chat with Darth Sidious while these strange tiny looking droids walk in the background. These droids here are actually called PK series worker droids, and they were a type of labor droid that the Trade Federation used to help them do simple tasks such as cleaning up, organizing inventory, and performing light repairs. But anyways, yeah, after being chased by this Colo clawfish, that fish would luckily also get eaten by an even bigger Sando aqua monster, proving Qui-Gon's trust in the Force to be valid. And to create the sound that some of these deadly fish make during the sequence, one of the sound designers named Ben Burt recorded the strange growlings of his 18-month-old daughter at the time and then pitched that sound way down in editing. The Jedi then disturb some local alien ducks called Paliki as they emerge from the ocean, just as the Trade Federation Federation begins advancing on the royal palace. An invasion Natalie Portman's Queen Amidala watches from a window. However, it would be between this shot and the next appearance of the Queen in the movie that Padme would switch clothes with her doppelganger handmaiden named Sabe, played by future Pirates of the Caribbean actress Keira Knightley. Apparently, Knightley was so damn good at playing Padme Amidala's visual double that even Keira Knightley's own mother could not tell the two apart when they were both in costume. And because Knightley was such a massive lover of the original trilogy of Star Wars films, she had to beg her parents to let her at least audition for a part in the movie, which her parents objected to at first, but ultimately allowed her to do. Another one of Padme's handmaidens, named Sashay, was actually played by the daughter of director Francis Ford Coppola, Sofia Coppola. This is primarily due to George Lucas being really good friends with the iconic Godfather trilogy director, who also put his daughter in The Godfather Part 2 in the role of Mary Corleone. As Sabe is led by the Viceroy to an isolation camp, we can see Padme safely disguised as a handmaiden right next to Security Forces Captain Quarsh Panaka, played by Hugh Quarshie, whose last name informed the character's first name. And random fun fact, but Captain Panaka's name would actually be changed to Captain Panassi in Brazil due to the word Panaka being Brazil's word for dweeb. But what's considerably less fun is how, in the future, Panaka would become a victim of black-on-black violence when he gets blown up into tiny Panaka pieces by Forrest Whitaker, aka Saw Gerrera, mostly because after years of serving various queens of Naboo, Captain Panaka would become an imperial moff of the entire sector that Naboo resided in by the time of the Empire's rise to power, and Whitaker's Saw Gerrera needed his ass gone immediately. But while the Queen and her people are being led to a camp, they are saved by Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan before they all head to the hangars to make their escape. The hangar that they run to is filled with N-1 starfighters, as well as Padme's chrome J-Type 327 Nubian Royal Starship, a ship that Emperor Palpatine would later acquire and gift to Darth Vader in 2018's Darth Vader number 20 comic as a reward for hunting down Jedi so effectively during his Inquisition between episodes 3 and 4. After dispatching of the droids in the hangar, they all hop onto the Queen's ship and attempt to flee the planet. However, during their escape, the Trade Federation would badly damage their ship's shield generators, leading to the activation of several of the astromechs on board, including the red R2-R9, the yellow and red G8-R3, and the iconic blue R2-D2, the first chronological appearance of the character ever since they first appeared in A New Hope, played by actor Kenny Baker. And much like Kenny Baker did for the original trilogy, he returns once again to control R2-D2 from the inside in The Phantom Menace. And while all the other astromechs would be destroyed during their repairs, R2-D2 would survive just long enough to fix the generator and save everyone on board like the hero that he is. However, with a leaking hyperdrive, the group would have to land on a planet as soon as possible in order to replace it. This would lead Obi-Wan himself to recommending Tatooine, the very planet that old Ben Kenobi would spend years of his life on in hiding when we first meet him in A New Hope. As the ship descends on Tatooine, the movie transitions to another Trade Federation call with Darth Sidious, who reveals the existence of his newest apprentice, Darth Maul, played by actor Ray Park, who would also go on to play Toad in the X-Men movies. Darth Maul, whose real name is never actually revealed in Star Wars canon due to Darth Maul apparently not remembering his name, is actually a member of the Zabrak species that hails from the harsh planet of Dathomir, also known as Dusty Hogwarts because it was also home to a bunch of crazy-ass witches called the Night Sisters, a different type of dark-sided cult outside of the Sith that used the dark side of the Force to do some pretty creepy dark magic, even capable of reanimating the dead. And even though the Sith and the Night Sisters operated independently of one another, Darth Sidious was still an extremely curious guy and decided to learn about the secrets of Night Sister dark side Force magic, eventually befriending the very leader of the Night Sister cult named Mother Talzin, the biological mother of Darth Maul. Darth Sidious had originally intended for Mother Talzin to become his next apprentice. However, as the two of them exchanged dark side knowledge and secrets, Darth Sidious began to detect the inner anger and strong force potential within Mother Talzin's young son that he would eventually steal Maul from her to take as his apprentice, angering Mother Talzin and forever causing a rift between the Night Sisters and the Sith cult. Darth Maul is of course modeled after artistic depictions of the Christian devil, a result of George Lucas telling concept artist Ian McCaig to draw what he considered to be one of his worst nightmares. It was important to George Lucas that Darth Maul be someone that the audience could fear, so much so that the marketing team for this movie would actually release a Darth Maul-centric TV spot that highlighted Maul's love of fear as a Dark Lord of the Sith.
Fear attracts the fearful, the strong, the weak, the innocent, the corrupt. Fear is my ally.
However, this TV spot would be a bit of false advertising in terms of how much Maul would be heard speaking in the movie, as Darth Maul only has a whopping 3 lines in this entire film, which is insane considering that many people view the Darth Maul character as the most iconic and memorable of the entire film. I guess that goes to show how powerful the makeup team of this movie really are when it comes to crafting menacing looking villains that stick in people's memories. Not only this, but Darth Maul has the least amount of time present on screen out of all of the dark side villains in both of George Lucas's Star Wars trilogies at 8.5 minutes. However, despite his limited screen time in the movie, actor Ray Park would actually end up making a huge contribution to a major piece of Star Wars lore. In particular, the length of lightsabers, because when the production first handed Ray Park a standard length lightsaber hilt for his double-sided lightsaber, Ray Park immediately told them that the short length of a single-bladed lightsaber hilt just was not going to work for him, primarily because he would not be able to spin that lightsaber around effectively. So they went back to the drawing board and crafted him this series' first ever long hilt lightsaber, aka a saber staff, which was essentially 2 lightsabers connected to form a singular red beam. The tattoos on Darth Maul's 10-horned head were actually given to him before he was the age of 1, as was tradition for all of the Knight brothers of Dathomir. And what's particularly interesting about these Zabrak species is that they each have 2 hearts as opposed to 1, a factor that likely contributed to Darth Maul's survival after being cut in half by Obi-Wan at the end of this film. It was a combination of Darth Maul's 2 hearts and the intense rage that he had in his hearts that would end up sustaining Maul long enough for him to be fixed up. But yeah, Darth Sidious orders Darth Maul to use the Force to find the escaped Queen as the Jedi and Padme land on Tatooine. Qui-Gon, Padme, Jar Jar, and R2-D2 then head to the nearby Mos Espa spaceport, where we see a number of different types of aliens around, such as the Alina from the planet Aline, Quarren who hail from Admiral Akbar's homeworld of Mon Calamari, some Nikto from the planet Kintan, Ithorians from the planet Ithor, some Bith from the planet Bith, and some Celestins from the planet Celeste. Go figure. We also see a tiny little Rolo droid scooting around, paving the way for other wheel-based droids like BB-8 and D-O from the sequel trilogy. And in order to purchase a new hyperdrive for their ship, the group then make their way to a junk shop belonging to Watto, a horrible slave owner of a Toydarian who won Anakin and his mother during a pod race wager with Gardulla the Hutt 6 years prior. You know, back when Anakin was only 3 years old. And we actually see the female Gardulla the Hutt a little bit later on in the movie, chilling with her homie in crime Jabba the Hutt during Anakin's own pod race. But yeah, Watto primarily uses his wings to move around due to the fact that his legs are actually crippled, with one leg being longer than the other one. And during Watto and Qui-Gon's first interaction, you can see a green astromech being cleaned in the background. In the Legends continuity, this astromech was actually called R2-TO. But as of now, there hasn't been anything in the new Disney canon yet to re-establish that name. However, the type of droid cleaning this astromech is actually called an R1 type shopkeeping droid, a version of the R1 series astromech that was modified by the Jawas to help shopkeepers. We actually see an unmodified R1 series astromech in A New Hope when Uncle Owen is yelling at the Jawas for almost selling him a busted up astromech. As Qui-Gon and Watto talk business, Jar Jar starts inspecting some of Watto's items, where we can see a golden protocol droid like C-3PO on the left side of the frame. Jar Jar then spies one of Watto's dumb series pit droids sleeping on top of a classic Star Wars Gungan junk droid and accidentally activates it. The primary function of these pit droids are the repair and maintenance of various technologies, and we see these little guys appear in the Mos Eisley spaceport in both the Book of Boba Fett and The Mandalorian, working under Peli Motto. Meanwhile, little Anakin, played by Jake Lloyd, wastes absolutely no time and immediately starts rizzing up Padme, telling her that she looks like one of the angels from the moons of the planet Iago. This isn't implying that actual angels exist in Star Wars or anything, but is a reference to the pale angel-like diathem race from the moon Milius Prime, who an older Anakin and Obi-Wan would meet in Season 1, Episode 18 of the Clone Wars TV series. But speaking of Jake Lloyd, unfortunately, due to the intense social backlash that Jake Lloyd suffered after starring in this movie, combined with Lloyd's worsening schizophrenia that he would not be officially diagnosed with until 2008, Jake would leave Hollywood completely in 2001, and would later attribute his role in the film for ruining his childhood. And as the years went on, Lloyd would go through a bit of a rough period. But these days, Jake Lloyd appears to be doing a lot better mentally and is just taking it one day at a time, very much loving the Star Wars brand and finding all the fan love that he gets to be immensely therapeutic. Jake Lloyd has apparently also gone on record to say that George Lucas originally had a 6-hour cut of The Phantom Menace made at one point that was apparently edited together so well that Lloyd would describe the cut as mind-bogglingly good, which is something that I wish I did not know, because now I want to see what that movie could have looked like, as The Phantom Menace is very low on everyone's list of favorite Star Wars movies made by George Lucas. I'm sorry, George, it's true. And to get the role of Anakin, Jake Lloyd would beat a number of other actors who were considered finalists, including Malcolm of the Middle's Justin Burfield and actor Michael Angarano, who would go on to star in the 2005 movie Sky High as Will Stronghold, as well as Robert Serber in 2023's Oppenheimer, which is just like Sky High, but with bombs. Just kidding, it's not like Sky High at all. Apparently, George Lucas cast Jake Lloyd specifically because he looks like a young Luke Skywalker, which makes sense due to Anakin being Luke Skywalker's future father. And he used that same logic when casting Natalie Portman as Padme, as she shared features with Princess Leia actress Carrie Fisher. And another reason why George Lucas cast Natalie Portman in the role was because he was a big fan of her work in the 1994 movie Leon the Professional and 1996's Beautiful Girls. But anyways, as Watto and Qui-Gon walk through the junkyard, we get a fun little Easter egg to another iconic space movie in the background. As you can see, one of the Eva pods from 1968's 2001: A Space Odyssey amongst all of Watto's junk. And after Qui-Gon fails to use another Jedi mind trick on Watto to buy the hyperdrive with a different type of currency, the group all leave the junk shop before Qui-Gon uses his communicator to call Obi-Wan and give him an update. And even though this Jedi communicator looks high-tech, it's actually just a woman's razor in disguise. Like, the production literally grabbed a Gillette Sensor XL razor and made it look like a communication device for a galaxy far, far away. But hey, maybe Qui-Gon could also use it to shave his beard in a pinch. You never know. He has to look good for his death scene after all. But also, fun fact about Qui-Gon, but around this time of The Phantom Menace, Qui-Gon Jinn would be about 60 years old, which is much older than the 46-year-old actor Liam Neeson was at the time. But yeah, as the group walk through the spaceport again, Jar Jar decides to use his gross long-ass tongue to try to steal some food from a local vendor. This amphibious creature that Jar Jar tries to eat is actually called a Gorg, and they made their first appearance in Return of the Jedi as one of Jabba the Hutt's favorite snacks. In fact, later on in the movie, when we see Jabba at the race, we can see him eating some of those creatures there too. I mean, he is a growing blob after all, so he has to get his calories in. Jar Jar then accidentally throws one of these dead Gorgs at Sebulba, Anakin's pod racing nemesis and a member of the Dug alien race native to the planet Malastare, a planet that was infamous for its pod races according to Qui-Gon during dinner at Anakin's house a little bit later in the movie. George Lucas's team would design Sebulba by imagining a spider crossed with an orangutan, crossed with a sloth, with the face of a camel, which says to me that at least one person was smoking that wacky tobacco on set for damn sure. And seeing Jar Jar in trouble, Anakin immediately springs to his defense and gets Sebulba off Jar Jar's back. And while Anakin is helping him, we can actually see another Jedi secretly lurking in the background on a mission of his own. This hooded Jedi with a yellow streak across his face in the background might look familiar to some Star Wars fans, as this is actually Jedi Master Quinlan Vos, who made his first appearance in motion during the 9th episode of Star Wars The Clone Wars Season 3, and would be mentioned in both Revenge of the Sith and the Obi-Wan Kenobi show on Disney+. However, despite looking like this Jedi Master, at the time this was simply just a cool-looking extra. But then comic book writer John Ostrander would dig this guy's vibe so much that he would create a character based off this extra's appearance for his Star Wars Republic non-canon Legends comic. George Lucas would then read those comics before retroactively making Quinlan Vos canon and deciding to throw a Quinlan Vos mention in Revenge of the Sith and throwing him in the Clone Wars animated series. But anyways, in order to avoid a coming sandstorm, Qui-Gon and the group accept Anakin's offer to stay at his house for shelter. And after meeting Anakin's mother, Shmi Skywalker, played by actress Pernilla August, R2-D2 follows Anakin to a tour of his bedroom. And as R2 enters the room, we can see Anakin Skywalker has a little statue of the centuries-old benevolent pirate queen Maz Kanata to the left of the frame here, a character that would not be introduced into Star Wars canon until 2015's The Force Awakens. Anakin then brings the Jedi to meet his custom-made protocol droid called C-3PO, voiced by actor Anthony Daniels, who played C-3PO in the original Star Wars trilogy. But this time around, due to this being an early unfinished version of the droid, Anthony Daniels would not be inside of the C-3PO suit like he was in the first 3 movies, as the production would opt to use puppeteer Michael Lynch to move a C-3PO puppet around instead. And while Anthony Daniels was super bummed to not be able to act on set as C-3PO, he would still get the opportunity to do so in episodes 2 and 3 when C-3PO was given more plating to cover up his inner wiring. And a little bit after this, we are finally brought to the planet Coruscant, the capital planet of the entire galaxy, and a planet entirely covered by endless cities. George Lucas had actually intended on having this planet show up in Return of the Jedi in a couple early versions of the script, and actually named that capital planet of the Empire Had Abaddon. Timothy Zahn, famous writer of the beloved Heir to the Empire novel from 1991, would then take George Lucas's idea for an Imperial City planet and decide to call that city planet Coruscant, because Coruscant is another name for glittering, a very fitting name for such a planet. Lucas would then see that name and then adopt it here in The Phantom Menace. The first time we actually saw Coruscant in motion was actually in a 1994 video game called Star Wars TIE Fighter, 3 years after Timothy Zahn's novel. But yeah, the 2 Sith Lords track Queen Amidala down to the planet Tatooine, and Darth Sidious sends Darth Maul to go take care of them all. This scene of their conversation on this balcony was actually the very first scene that was shot for the movie, with it ending with Sidious sending Maul to Tatooine after tracking the Queen's signal there. We then transition to dinner at Anakin's house, where Anakin deduces that Qui-Gon Jinn was a Jedi Knight, and reveals that he has dreams of being a Jedi Knight himself that was strong enough to free all the slaves on Tatooine. One of our very first indicators of an extremely Force-sensitive Anakin getting information about the future from the Cosmic Force, with that future unfolding in a different way than Anakin expected. Because the only Tatooine slave that Anakin would end up freeing in the future would be in the movie's sequel, Attack of the Clones, when Anakin uses his Jedi skills to briefly free his dying mother from bondage from some local Tusken Raiders, technically fulfilling the prophecy of his dream. Anakin would of course turn his Jedi skills against the Tusken Raiders in rage after his mother would pass away in his arms moments later. Little Anakin then goes on to confidently claim that no one can kill a Jedi, one of the first indications that Anakin mainly seeks to become a Jedi to have the power to protect himself and those he cares about that have gone through the same pains that he has. I mean, yes, Anakin definitely has the heart for helping other people in general, like we saw him help Jar Jar, but it's Anakin's family trauma from being a slave that was Anakin's main driver for seeking power. And after Qui-Gon and Padme reveal that they are stranded on Tatooine after their ship was attacked, Anakin then offers to help them repair their ship, telling them that he can repair anything. Yet another gift from the wellspring of knowledge that is the Cosmic Force, as is Anakin's skill in pod racing, with the Cosmic Force giving Anakin the foresight and reflexes to be the only human capable of pod racing on the planet. Qui-Gon then agrees to Anakin's plan to pod race to get the money to buy their hyperdrive, sensing that Anakin was very strong with the Force. A little later, Anakin's mother would reveal to Qui-Gon that he was actually born without a father, much like Jesus Christ was in the Bible with the Virgin Mary, a very purposeful bit of symbolism put there by George Lucas to underscore Anakin Skywalker as the true Messiah born directly from the Force itself, meant to bring balance. After this, we see Anakin working on his pod racer when his friends Amy, Melee, the Rodian Wald, the red-headed Sikh, and Kitster come up to hang out with him. Amy in gray is actually George Lucas's daughter, Katie Lucas, But she would not be the only one of George Lucas's daughters in this movie, because later on, during the Boonta Eve pod race, George Lucas's other daughter, Amanda Lucas, can be seen as a red-headed Thelan woman near Jabba named Diva Funquita. But they are not the only Star Wars family members that get roles in this movie. Nathan Hamill, the son of Luke Skywalker's Mark Hamill, played a law clerk on Naboo named Ray-Tool Mano in this movie before playing the role of his own future descendant as Resistance soldier Sail Mano in 2017's The Last Jedi.
It was crazy. I was sitting around having lunch with the editors on Phantom Menace, and we came up with this name for my character and backstory. I was just an extra. I'm in a scene. I don't know where I am. So if anyone can find me, please let me know if they have the 4K version. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm being marched off.
Last Jedi is pretty clear.
Last Jedi, I see.
Being marched off by battle droids. There's this one long shot they take from the stairs where they had the celebration at the end. And we're just sitting around. We came up with Ray-Tool Minnow. Ray-Tool is Luther backwards, which was a character in The Black Pearl, my dad's comic, the graphic novel. And Minnow is a play on the minnow from Gilligan's Island, which is a reference to the Anchorhead cap in the deleted scene.
But yeah, even though we never see Anakin's friends appear at all in any of the other Star Wars films, we do know that Anakin would end up reuniting with his friends at some point in the future, but only after he turned into the Sith Lord Darth Vader. Because in the pages of 2022's Darth Vader number 23, Darth Vader would end up helping an adult Kitster and Wald in getting rid of a corrupt governor on the planet Gabrador 3, the planet that a bunch of Tatooine slaves like Kitster and Wald fled to after having been freed by none other than Keira Knightley's character, Sabe. Sabe would liberate all the slaves of Tatooine in honor of both Padme Amidala and Shmi Skywalker, as Sabe knew that Padme desperately wanted to free the slaves in Shmi Skywalker's honor. But what's extra rad about that story arc is that we eventually do see Darth Vader riding a giant pod racer that Kitster and Wald threw together, which I absolutely love. Like, I really want to see Darth Vader pod racing in live action at least one time, man. Make it happen, Lucasfilm. But in regards to Wald in particular, that green-headed freak is a member of the Rodian race, the same race of alien that the infamous Greedo was in A New Hope. A kid version of Greedo was actually supposed to appear in a deleted scene in this movie where an argument about pod race cheating between Anakin and Greedo is broken up by Qui-Gon. And I'm not sure why they didn't keep that in the movie, honestly, because it would have been a pretty fun Easter egg. And after Anakin gets his pod racer working, Qui-Gon decides to take a blood sample from Anakin later that night to test his midichlorian count. And after sending the sample to Obi-Wan, he learns that the amount of midichlorian swimming around in Anakin's blood is over 20,000, a ridiculously high number for a normal Jedi. Midichlorians are, of course, one of the most important aspects of the entire Star Wars universe that is also, unfortunately, the most underrated aspect as well. Because the presence of midichlorians are exactly the reason why the Star Wars galaxy is so damn magical and fantastical in comparison to our own boring galaxy in real life. This is because midichlorians act as microscopic middlemen within living organisms that connect them to the Force itself, allowing every living creature throughout the galaxy to access the Force in some way. The episode Destiny that aired during Season 6, Episode 12 of the animated Clone Wars TV series is probably one of the most important pieces of Star Wars media ever created, because in that episode, George Lucas reveals to us a special Force planet at the very center of the galaxy where the living Force and the cosmic Force are one, and that planet is called the Wellspring of Life, where all life in the galaxy first began, and where these microscopic midichlorians were first brought into existence, specifically to have a symbiotic relationship with all life in the galaxy, whether they be sentient aliens and animals, or even the trees and other types of plant life. These microscopic little guys live within the cells of all living things, which is why, with enough training and perseverance, anybody in the Star Wars galaxy can learn to tap into the Force and wield it as proficiently as a Jedi if they wanted to, as we saw with the character Sabine in the first season of Ahsoka on Disney+. And this cellular symbiotic nature is very much implied within the word midichlorian itself, because if you take the time to break the word down into its respective parts, you get midi, with mid meaning to be in the middle of, and then in the second half we have chlorian, which appears to have its roots in the Greek word chloros, which means green. Chloros is where the word chlorophyll comes from, with chlorophyll of course being the green pigment inside of plants that allows them to absorb sunlight. So I found that if you jam these two words together, Midi-chlorian literally means in the middle of the green, which is literally a perfect way to describe midichlorians and their function, because they exist inside of and have a symbiotic relationship with everything green or alive in the galaxy. Like, these little guys love being sandwiched right in the middle of the living force of all types of living beings. And because they serve as the middleman between living beings and the cosmic force, midichlorians are the ones that whisper those cosmic force messages to their host in a variety of ways, either through an instinctual feeling or even through one's dreams. And through intense focus and meditation, Jedi learn to listen to these macroscopic messengers within themselves in order to hear what the cosmic force has to tell them. However, the more of these midichlorians that one has in their body, the easier it is for that person to connect to the Force. And while this would end up becoming a blessing for Anakin as he trained to become one of the most effective Jedi Knights in history, having all those midichlorians in his blood would end up being a curse for him as well, because all those little guys would automatically and effortlessly connect Anakin to the cosmic force through his dreams, giving him visions of the future that would begin to trigger his fear at a young age, specifically his fear of loss. But yeah, Obi-Wan mentions that not even Master Yoda has that high of a midichlorian count, with this being the movie's first ever mention of the iconic green Star Wars character from the original trilogy, played and voiced by puppeteer Frank Oz. Frank Oz returns in the role as Yoda a little bit later in the film, just like he did for episodes 5 and 6. And along with Oz, Palpatine actor Ian McDiarmid, C-3PO actor Anthony Daniels, and R2-D2 actor Kenny Baker are the only actors from the original trilogy that returned for the start of George Lucas's prequel trilogy. Well, main actors anyway. There is another actor that appears that we'll talk about later. And following this, we see Darth Maul arriving on Tatooine on his modified star courier called the Scimitar, aka the Sith Infiltrator. And as soon as he steps foot on the planet, Darth Maul releases some DRK-1 Dark Eye probe droids to go find Obi-Wan and the gang for him. And after this, we transition to the day of the big race, where we can see some Jawas walking around in the foreground, while Tatooine creatures like the camel-like Eope and the elephant-sized Bantha appear in the background, a creature that made its first appearance in A New Hope. And while this Bantha is completely CG here, back in the day, George Lucas had to throw a Bantha costume on top of a 22-year-old Asian elephant to create the illusion. And as all the pod racers get ready, we can see a group of blue Twi'lek women hanging around Sebulba, with the Twi'lek race making their first appearance in Jabba's palace in Return of the Jedi. Jabba's assistant Bib Fortuna, as well as one of Jabba's dancers named Ula, were among some of the most notable OG Twi'leks. Sebulba even speaks a little bit of Huttese to his Twi'lek groupies, implying that these ladies could also possibly be working for Jabba the Hutt as well. Qui-Gon then makes a wager with Watto and suggests that Watto free both Anakin and his mother if they should win the prize money. However, because Watto was a stupid flying bitch, he only decides to let Qui-Gon pick one of his slaves should they win, pulling out a blue and red die called a chance cube to let fate decide which of the two they'd be betting for. Chance cubes made their first appearance in Star Wars A New Hope, as Han Solo had a pair of golden chance cubes hanging in his cockpit. Cubes that we learned were a sort of good luck charm in 2018's Solo: A Star Wars Story. Watto rolls the chance cube, which Qui-Gon uses the Force on to make sure that it lands on the blue side for Anakin. Watto then gets pissed and storms off, almost like he was expecting to win. And in the novelization of The Phantom Menace, they actually reveal that Watto was actually using a loaded chance cube that waited to land on red, with Watto getting pissed that his plan to cheat failed. However, because the novelizations of the prequels aren't technically considered canon, it's unsure whether or not this is actually the case anymore. But something I found interesting about this moment is that it feels very much like foreshadowing towards the Duel of the Fates fight at the end of the movie, as this blue and red chance cube appears to reflect the blue lightsabered Obi-Wan and the red sabered Darth Maul fighting over the eventual fate of Anakin Skywalker, with blue Obi-Wan coming up on top thanks to a little help from Qui-Gon. Then the pod race finally begins. The two-headed Troig alien, Fozenbeed Anadu, serves as the bilingual announcer for the day's races, with actor-comedian Greg Proops speaking in a Galactic Basic Standard as the red-headed Fode, while fellow actor-comedian Scott Capurro plays the green-headed Bead speaking in Huttese. The original idea was to have the two of them physically wear alien masks on their head, with the rest of their bodies being CG, but they ultimately decided to just make the character 100% CG because it just looked better. And with that opening shot, we can see a massive crowd has assembled to watch the Boonta Eve Classic pod race. And you guys want to hear a fun fact about all of these members of the crowd watching the race? They're all just Q-tips. Well, in some of the shots anyway. Because animating every audience member in the crowd would be quite expensive and time-consuming, the VFX team had the clever idea of painting a bunch of Q-tips and placing them inside of a miniature of the stadium. And to get the crowd to move around in excitement, they placed a fan underneath the stadium to make the Q-tips jiggle around, which is insanely genius. Boonta Eve is a holiday celebrated by the Hutts of Tatooine in honor of the legendary Hutt named Boonta Sadru, who, according to the Hutts, somehow achieved godhood and ascended into the heavens themselves. So every year on Boonta Eve, Jabba and the people of Tatooine celebrate Boonta's godhood. It's very much how, like Christians, celebrate Jesus' ascension on Easter, while watching an Easter Sunday NASCAR race after they celebrate, which is basically what they're doing here. And hey, speaking of NASCAR, in order to make the pod racer collisions look as realistic as possible, the production carefully studied a bunch of actual race car wrecks from NASCAR's history, as these pod races feel very much inspired by NASCAR races in general. And if you're a fan of pod racing and the San Francisco 49ers, I've got some pretty interesting news for you, because all the crowd sounds from this pod race were actually taken directly from a hype crowd of a 49ers game that happened around this time of this film's production. So while you think you're listening to a bunch of people cheer for a bunch of aliens doing a Fast and Furious, you're actually listening to people getting excited about football, because everyone knows that football and Star Wars go hand in hand like peanut butter and jelly. There's nothing that football players and cheerleaders love more than a Star Wars loving nerd. Then when the race starts to get underway, we have various people holding up flags for each racer. And looking at these first few flags from front to back, we have the blue, white, and orange flag of the Trifian Ebe Endicott, followed by Odie Mendrell, the Erkit, with the gray and orange flag. Then we have Anakin Skywalker's blue, white, and yellow flag. Then the orange and yellow flag of Ben Quadinaros of the Toon alien race, who would end up becoming the pod racing nemesis of Sebulba in the future. Then Mahonic of the Grand Species with the yellow and green flag, Clegg Holdfast with the purple, white, and red flag, the gray and orange flag of the Bardotan Mars Guo, and finally Sebulba the Dug's orange, yellow, and black flag. But in regards to Anakin's flag, some people on the internet have pointed out that if you were to tilt the blue part of Anakin's flag 45 degrees counterclockwise, you could actually make out the mask of the Sith Lord Darth Vader, which would be an excellent bit of foreshadowing. But before Anakin races, Qui-Gon tries to impart some of his Living Force teachings onto Anakin, telling him to focus on the present moment and to trust his instincts as they speak to him in that present moment, specifically telling Anakin to listen to his instincts rather than thinking with his brain. Because with as many midichlorians as Anakin's got chilling in his blood cells, it's going to be so easy for Anakin's feelings to respond to all of those microscopic mother dangs, telling Anakin how to steer, avoid danger, and win the race. And this is the type of training that Anakin would have gotten if Darth Maul did not kill Qui-Gon. And much like it would help Anakin win this race, it would have put an adult Anakin on a more emotionally wiser and mindful path. And as Jabba the Hutt makes his way out to address the crowd, we can see a woman with blue hair next to him named Diva Shaliqua, with Diva Shaliqua wearing the same dancing girl costume that Jabba forced Princess Leia to wear during her enslavement in Return of the Jedi. And next to Jabba is, of course, his right-hand Twi'lek Bib Fortuna, who would stay by Jabba's side throughout the original trilogy until Jabba would be choked to death by a hot white lady, which eventually would lead Bib to taking over Jabba's criminal empire 41 years after the events of this movie. And not far from both Jabba the Hutt and Diva Funquita is this red asteroid here, who in the previous now non-canon Legends continuity was given the name R5X2 and was used by Jabba to help him predict the outcome of the races, with R5X2 predicting Sebulba to be the victor. But of course, Anakin Skywalker would end up proving that robot wrong. But again, that's just Legends canon. It's unclear whether or not this is true for the Disney continuity as well. Also, because Jabba the Hutt was created with a combination of special effects and puppetry, the credits have Jabba credited as playing himself, which is kind of a funny way of putting it. And right before the pod race starts, we can actually see actor Warwick Davis standing next to Watto, with Warwick, of course, having played the Ewok Wicket in Return of the Jedi. But here, he's just playing a human thief named Weasel. This will be Weasel's first appearance until we see an older Weasel appear in Solo, a Star Wars story, once again played by Davis. Warwick also plays Anakin's Rodian friend Wald in this movie as well, because this man is versatile. And while the 9-minute 30-second pod racing sequence that follows might seem a bit long in this movie, at one point, George Lucas was actually planning a full 25-minute sequence, but ultimately would decide against that when that scene started to feel like a mini-movie within the actual movie. And during this pod race, we can see the racers fly through an area of Tatooine called Beggar's Canyon, a place where future Luke Skywalker would enjoy some time hunting down local womp rats for fun. We also see Beggar's Canyon make an appearance at the very end of the Obi-Wan Kenobi show on Disney Plus, when Obi-Wan finally communes with Qui-Gon's Force Ghost, as well as in Episode 5 of the Book of Boba Fett, when the Mandalorian flies through the canyon while testing out his customized Naboo N1 starfighter. And thanks to Sebulba, a piece of Anakin's pod racer causes Anakin to start spinning out of control. But due to Anakin's strength in the Force, he's able to yoink that piece back in place just in time for him to get shot by some Tusken Raiders on the canyon dune turn. But eventually, after Sebulba would wreck his pod racer, Anakin would be declared the victor, getting praise from both the audience and his mother, with Shmi Skywalker telling Anakin that she's proud of him for bringing hope to those who had none, a tease towards Anakin's overall nature as the Chosen One, meant to bring hope to a galaxy out of balance. And after the race, Qui-Gon heads back to the ship to tell Obi-Wan the news, to which Obi-Wan says, "Why do I sense we picked up another pathetic life form?" Which to me seems reflective of how naive and unattuned to the living Force this young Obi-Wan Kenobi is. Like, Qui-Gon can immediately see the midichlorian potential swimming in Anakin Skywalker's living Force, but all Obi-Wan can really focus on in that moment is how annoying having yet another pathetic life form like Jar Jar is going to be in his near future. Then Qui-Gon and Anakin head back to Anakin's house and tell his mom that Anakin has been freed. However, once Anakin realizes that his mother would not be coming along with him to Coruscant, he gets super bummed out that he has to be separated from her for a long time. Which then leads us to one of the most important moments in all of the Skywalker saga, in my opinion.
It is time for you to let go.
I don't want things to change.
But you can't stop the change, any more than you can stop the suns from setting.
This moment right here sets up the main personality trait that would lead this young Anakin Skywalker to falling to the dark side in Episode 3. Anakin's deep resistance to radical change, especially the type of change that causes the people that he loves to no longer be in his life. Seeing her son's resistance to change, Shmi begs him to let her go so that he can embrace the new path set before him. But what I particularly love is what she says next when she compares the inevitability of change to how the twin sons of Tatooine eventually set at the end of every single day. In my eyes, by having her compare the inevitability of change with the setting of the suns, George Lucas is essentially having that metaphor reflect future Anakin Skywalker's foolish quest to rage against the very dying of the light of life itself, by seeking to conquer death. All lives have a metaphorical sunset because that is the natural way of things. We live and we die, and a lot of the time, people that we love die before we would like them to. Shmi was just trying to use some of her last words to Anakin to get him to stop fearing loss, because we are all destined to lose. And all worrying about losing something or someone in the future is going to do is bring you a lot of mental and emotional suffering. This is very much an extension of what Qui-Gon was trying to teach Obi-Wan at the beginning of the film. Focus on the here and now, because what will be what will be. And when Anakin would ultimately be trained by the Jedi on Coruscant over the next couple of years, he would unfortunately not have Qui-Gon to properly teach him how to live with the emotions that come with losing someone that you love. Instead, being told by the Jedi to completely cut off all of his personal attachments in general in order to avoid falling to the dark side. Something that Qui-Gon would likely tell an adult Anakin is completely unrealistic as a naturally feeling human being. And without having a balanced teacher like Qui-Gon Jinn, Anakin would ultimately not learn to live in harmony with this fear of losing those he loves, rather than feeling the need to completely cut Anakin off from feeling that fear altogether by trying to keep him from getting close to anybody like the Jedi wanted him to. Because that's just a type of religion that fears the devil more than they have hope and faith in their God's protective power. They're so scared of having their emotions lead them astray to the dark side that they forgot in the importance of trusting in one's intuition and feelings, and letting the Force guide them to where they need to be and how they need to feel to get where they need to be. Because at the end of the day, the problem is not attachments with other people. It's only when attachments become obsessive that one risks falling deeply into the dark side. And much like Anakin's deeply unhealthy obsession with his attachment to Padme led to his downfall, the Jedi Order's deep attachment to their position of political authority in the galaxy was the obsession that would lead to their own dark-sided downfall. It was the Jedi Council's fear and anger at Chancellor Palpatine's political meddling in their religious affairs that made them have Anakin commit the unethical act of spying on a sitting galactic senator. The Jedi Council spent years telling Anakin the importance of following the rules, only to bend their own religious rules in order to protect themselves politically. And it's because of that hypocrisy that made it so easy for Palpatine to manipulate Anakin's point of view on the Jedi cult as a whole, convincing Anakin that the Jedi needed to be destroyed before they took over the Senate with their hypocritical ways. And this is pretty much what the Acolyte series on Disney Plus was trying to convey, with how Jedi Master Venestra and the Council were willing to lie to the Senate about the results of a murder investigation in order to maintain their politically unchecked power. The point is, we all experience the fear of losing something or someone, because having attachments and feelings about those attachments is a natural part of life. Pretending that you are above feeling such emotions is just foolishness, and only keeps you from having the skills to be mindful enough to live with such emotions in a balanced and healthy manner. For all their talk about balance, the Jedi were staunchly unwilling to live in harmony with their dark-sided fear. The only Jedi that would learn the error of their ways are Jedi Masters Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda, with Obi-Wan discovering the power in having attachments by connecting with Leia and Luke Skywalker in the Obi-Wan Kenobi Disney Plus show, and Yoda being forced to go head-to-head with the personification of his fear of the dark side in Season 6, Episode 12 of the Clone Wars animated TV series.
Yoda thinks me not worthy. Recognize you. I do. Power over me, you have not. Through patience and training, it is I who control you. My dark side, you are. Reject you, I do.
It is only when Obi-Wan and Yoda learned to live in harmony with their respective fears that they were able to unlock the secrets to talking to Force ghosts of those who have died and passed on to the cosmic force, and how to become Force ghosts themselves after they died. But anyways, while Anakin says goodbye to C-3PO while getting his stuff together, we can see that Anakin has a hole in the wall of his room that looks roughly like the shape of Darth Vader's helmet, which is kind of crazy. But what's even crazier is how, whenever we hear Anakin's musical theme playing in the background of the movie, we are actually hearing a slight variation of Darth Vader's theme from the original trilogy. More foreshadowing to the dark man that he was fated to become. And in true Anakin Skywalker fashion, as he walks away from his home for the last time, he runs back to his mother and tells her that he doesn't think that he can be able to be away from her after all. But his mother tells him to be brave and not to look back, only forwards, once again encouraging her son to not let his fear of losing her weigh him down. However, on their way back to the Queen's ship, they are finally attacked by Darth Maul, but Qui-Gon is able to use his skills to just barely get away from the menacing Sith Lord. Qui-Gon Jinn's stunt double in this movie was a man by the name of Rob Inch, and that dude would later go on to become the stunt coordinator for Star Wars Productions' Rogue One, The Force Awakens, and The Last Jedi. And while on their way back to Coruscant, Anakin gives Padme a necklace that he carved out of something called a Japor snippet. In Legends canon, a Japor was a specific type of tree that grew in Tatooine, whose nuts and wood would be fashioned into necklaces for good luck. And arriving on the city planet of Coruscant, they are greeted by none other than Senator Palpatine himself, alongside Supreme Chancellor Valorum, played begrudgingly by actor Terrence Stamp, who apparently hated acting on green screen sets and not having any actors physically on that set to act with so much that he would outright refuse to return for the following 2 sequels. Then, a little bit later on in the Senate, we see Senator Palpatine using his mastery over the art of fear to manipulate Queen Amidala into calling a vote of no confidence in Chancellor Valorum's leadership, all in order for a more powerful Supreme Chancellor to be voted in, eventually leading to Palpatine himself getting the role. And during this Senate voting session, we can actually see the alien race from the 1982 Steven Spielberg classic E.T. the Extraterrestrial. This is one of my favorite Easter eggs in The Phantom Menace because it follows up a Star Wars reference that was brought up in E.T. when the friendly alien of the movie recognizes Yoda as a kid dresses up as Yoda for Halloween. So by putting the race of aliens from E.T. into Phantom Menace, George Lucas essentially makes E.T. the Extraterrestrial canonical to the Star Wars universe, which is quite hilarious and fun. Also, George Lucas and Steven Spielberg were quite tight as friends, so it's only natural for them to shout each other out like this in their movies. Not long after the vote, Senator Palpatine visits Padme and tells her that he's been nominated for the role of Supreme Chancellor, while Panaka tells her that Bail Antilles of Alderaan and Ainley Team of Malastare were also nominated. The character Bail Antilles, played by actor Adrian Dunbar in a deleted scene, was actually supposed to be Bail Organa originally. However, George Lucas would remove the actor completely from the film and change the character's name to Bail Antilles instead, a name that Lucas had in his pocket ever since he was writing the script for A New Hope. When he was writing the first draft, he was thinking Bail Antilles was going to be a galactic traitor, while in the second draft, Bail Antilles was meant to have the role of the co-pilot of Luke Starkiller, Luke Skywalker's original name in those early drafts. George Lucas didn't like that idea either and would create the separate character Wedge Antilles to be Luke's wingman instead. George would then make Bail Antilles Princess Leia's father of the planet Organa Major before changing the planet's name to Alderaan and making Organa Bail's last name instead. Meanwhile, Qui-Gon reports his assaults by a Sith Lord to the Jedi, where they arrogantly dismiss him, telling him that there is no way that the Sith could re-emerge without the Jedi hearing any word of it with their super-attuned Force ears. The Jedi Council is made up of 10 members, which include Yaddle, a female member of the same mysterious but long-lived species as Yoda, and because of this, Yaddle has been a Jedi ever since the days of the High Republic, much like Yoda was. But Yaddle wasn't the only member of the Council who experienced the High Republic era of the Jedi. Yaddle's former Padawan, Oppo Rancisis, was as well, with Oppo being a member of the Thespiacian species, who all possessed 4 arms with the body and tail of a snake. Oppo was not only known for his tactical brilliance, but also for managing to be one of the few Jedi survivors of Order 66 following the rise of the Empire. And we also have the centuries-old, long-necked Yarael Poof as another Jedi Council member who was alive during this High Republic era as well. And like Oppo Rancisis, Jedi Master Poof also possessed 4 arms, but likes to hide 2 of those arms underneath his clothes. And as a member of the long-lived Quirmian species, Yarael Poof actually has 2 brains, one in his weird-ass small head and one inside of his chest. And speaking of weird-ass heads that were around during the High Republic era, we cannot forget to mention the 5-headed Ki-Adi-Mundi, a Syrian Jedi who made an appearance in the Acolyte TV series along with Jedi Master Yoda. But yeah, the other council members of the Jedi that didn't grow up in the High Republic era include the 4-foot-tall Evan Peel of the Atlantic alien race, Sassy Tin, an Iktochi Jedi Master and one of the Order's most skilled pilots, Adi Gallia, a skilled pilot and a member of the Thalothian species who would be killed by Darth Maul's brother, Savage Opress, in Season 5, Episode 1 of The Clone Wars, Eve Koff, an Iridonian Zabrak, who we learn in the pages of 2018's Darth Vader number 19, would ultimately be slain by the Sith Lord Darth Vader after getting married and starting a family post-Order 66. And we also have Plo Koon, a member of the Keldor species, and the Jedi who would actually discover Anakin's future Padawan, Ahsoka Tano, and bring her to the Jedi Temple for training. And there's also Depo Billaba, a human from Chalacta, who would become the master of Caleb Doom, aka Kanan Jarrus, from Star Wars Rebels. And of course we have Bilaba's former master, Mace Windu, played by Samuel L. Jackson, and of course Grandmaster Yoda, who was voiced and puppeted by Frank Oz in the theatrical release of the movie before George Lucas would replace the puppet with a completely CG Yoda in the 2011 Phantom Menace re-release for Blu-ray. But yeah, after filling in the Jedi about the attack, Qui-Gon also tells them about Anakin Skywalker, and hints that he believes that Anakin Skywalker is the chosen one from the ancient Jedi prophecy. Long ago, an ancient unnamed Jedi had a premonition through the Force of a chosen one of great power that would restore balance in favor of the light side, and would record that prophecy on a special Jedi holocron. However, the Sith also had a similar prophecy, but they believe that the super powerful Force user would actually bring the dark-sided Sith the glory and control over the galaxy, calling this prophesized chosen one the Sithari. So even though the Jedi and the Sith were both anticipating some type of powerful Force user to come and bring balance, they both disagreed as to what true cosmic balance actually looks like, as the Jedi thought that the eradication of dark-sided cults like the Sith or even the witches of Mother Anastaea's coven from the Acolyte was in service of bringing the light side to balance, while the Sith believed that the light-sided Jedi Order held too much power and needed to be swallowed by the dark side in order to bring their version of cosmic balance. Because, you know, much like how there is more darkness in outer space than actual stars, the Sith believe that the dark side should have more dominance in general. The Jedi then bring Anakin in for examination and testing, and when they first meet Anakin, they could all feel Anakin's strong fear of losing his mother radiating off of his very being. And despite Anakin absolutely acing the test that they give him to determine his Force sensitivity, they would still reject Anakin's bid to be trained by the Jedi Order because he was far too old to do so. Usually the Jedi recruit toddlers ages 1 to 3 to be part of their cult in order for their minds to be molded by the Jedi's teachings against fear and personal attachments at an early age. However, after living a full decade with his mother and becoming attached to her, the Jedi felt like Anakin's learned fear was too great for them to train, because they knew someone as potentially powerful as him had the potential to become an unhinged, dark-sided weapon. However, Qui-Gon Jinn would quickly reject the Jedi's opinion on the matter, mostly because the Jedi had absolutely no proof that Anakin would indeed become this dangerous weapon. Because Anakin's future was cloudy and inaccessible to them through the cosmic force, Qui-Gon knew that the Jedi's decision was mainly rooted in their own fear of the dark side and the future in general. So Qui-Gon offers to train Anakin himself as his Padawan, while suggesting that his current Padawan Obi-Wan be tested to graduate to the level of Jedi Knight. However, the Jedi decide to table the matter in order for Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan to escort Queen Amidala back to Naboo in order for her to be with her people as they suffered in wait for the Galactic Senate to actually do something. But before they set off on the Queen's ship, Qui-Gon pulls Anakin aside and tries to impart a major piece of wisdom to him, telling Anakin that his focus determines his reality. Qui-Gon's way of telling Anakin once again to keep his focus on the present moment rather than focusing on his fears, because the more one focuses on worrying about anxieties that they cannot control, the more suffering one brings onto their own life, and the more likely that the very thing that they dread might actually become a reality. And again, we unfortunately see this happen to Anakin in the future when his fear of loss and death would cause Anakin to become a living avatar of fear and death, before causing Padme's death himself. Star Wars Visions actually has a really great episode all about this in the very last episode of the first season called Akakiri, where a Jedi falls to the dark side after obsessively trying to prevent the death of somebody that he cares about. But yeah, on their space flight back to Naboo, Queen Amidala tells the Jedi that she intends to fight for her people, but Qui-Gon responds to that by telling her that he could only protect her and not fight an entire war for her, which is very much in line with how a true Jedi should act. Something that the Jedi Order would forget when the Master of Fear, Darth Sidious, manipulates the Jedi into becoming soldiers instead of peacekeepers at the start of the Clone Wars. Yet another hypocritical action from the Jedi that would motivate Anakin to join Team Palpatine. And in response to this, Queen Amidala has Jar Jar bring the group to his people, where the Queen is able to forge an alliance with the Gungans and gain access to their army. And this then eventually leads us to getting this shot of a Gungan sitting on top of a giant statue buried underground, one of the last remnants of an ancient race of reptilian aliens that used to dominate Naboo's planet, called the Elders. But not much is known about the Elders and their culture. And not long after Darth Maul arrives on the planet and meets up with the Viceroy, the Trade Federation's assault on the Gungan army begins, with a legion of armored assault tanks heading the Gungans' way. And in order to create the unique sound that the Trade Federation's armored assault tanks make, the sound designers turned on an electric razor and then used that razor on an upside-down metal salad bowl before taking that sound and lowering the pitch. Which is absolutely wild, because how do you even think to do something like that? Foley artists are truly next-level people. And while the Gungans are distracting the Trade Federation with their battle out on the field, the Jedi, the Queen, and her guard head back to the hangar of the Royal Palace in order for the Queen's guard to board their starfighters and take out the droid control ship orbiting the planet. And as the droid army fights back against this, one of the Queen's soldiers makes the classic Wilhelm scream before he is gunned down. And to keep himself safe, Anakin instinctively hops into an N1 starfighter, and when he does, we can see some strange writing written on the side of the ship. And while I can't really make out exactly what this says, we do know that it is written in the Futhark alphabet that was used by the ancient Naboo a long time ago. But after the Queen's pilots make their way up into the sky, the Jedi are immediately confronted by the Sith Lord Darth Maul, who immediately engages the Jedi in combat. And it's hilarious to think that, during this fight with Darth Maul, actor Ewan McGregor was actually making lightsaber sound effects with his mouth like a big old nerd. Apparently, he couldn't help himself in the heat of the moment and would just do it absent-mindedly. Hayden Christensen would end up doing the same thing during his first time with a lightsaber in Attack of the Clones, because that's just what real Jedi do. This area that the three are fighting at is actually a giant power generator for the entire city of Theed, where plasma from deep within the planet's core itself is mined and refined before being converted into energy. The Gungans also use the plasma of the planet in their own way, in particular with their round plasma balls called boomas that they use to short-circuit the droids and their tanks. At the very end of the movie, during the victory celebration on Naboo, Padme hands the Gungan leader a Naboo relic called the Globe of Peace that appears to have that raw plasma energy from their planet's core glowing inside of it, a relic that I believe was meant to represent the heart of the planet Naboo itself. So in my eyes, Padme handing this globe to the Gungans symbolizes them agreeing that both their species are the true heart of Naboo, not just one. But yeah, while that fight is happening, Padme and her squad break into the royal castle, and after they use their ascension guns to climb the side of the castle, the gang run down this hall right here, where a carved bust of director George Lucas can be seen in the archway above them, which is a nice little tribute. And as Padme and the squad finally get the Viceroy and his minions at gunpoint, little Anakin is off in space using his pure instincts to avoid getting blown to smithereens, with Anakin eventually using the Force to blow up the droid control ship in a moment deliberately reminiscent to how Luke Skywalker uses instincts to blow up the Death Star in A New Hope. And when all the droids on the battlefield deactivate at the same time after the destruction of the droid control ship, Jar Jar hits one of the droids on the back, causing it to fall over. This droid actually has the number 1138 on its back, a reference to George Lucas's first feature film, THX 1138 from 1971. But back to the Jedi, eventually their duel ends up leading to these 6 red laser force fields that end up separating all 3 of our players. These force fields were meant to protect the plasma reserve tank from dangerously high outputs of plasma energy. And according to an old Naboo legend, an ancient entity of chaos was held back by 6 doors. So, in honor of that story, 6 red force fields were deliberately erected to prevent a plasma explosion. This being said, the fact that the Jedi managed to lead Darth Maul behind these 6 doors before causing him to fall down the plasma reactor shaft feels like a recreation of this legend, as a new entity of chaos was stopped from destroying Naboo. But that's just me. And like I mentioned before, as the 3 of them are separated by these force fields, Qui-Gon enters a state of meditation as he attempts to let go of his anxieties to focus on the present moment, while Obi-Wan paces back and forth as he worries for the future of his master. Obi-Wan is so focused on the future during this moment that he reactivates his lightsaber just seconds before the force field disengages, despite the threat being far off in the distance for him. This is the exact opposite thing that Qui-Gon Jinn does, with Qui-Gon not activating his lightsaber until his threat was right in front of him, reflecting how Qui-Gon truly is a student of only addressing problems as they appear in the here and now. And fun fact, but the sound that these force fields make in this movie was actually the result of the film's audio supervisor recording the sound that his neighbor's broken ceiling fan was making, which is kind of wild. But yeah, after Qui-Gon Jinn is slain by Darth Maul, Obi-Wan then attempts to avenge his master, only to get force pushed into the reactor shaft. And hanging for dear life, Obi-Wan watches as Darth Maul tosses his lightsaber into the abyss. And as the saber hits the side of the shaft, it makes a clanging noise, the same clanging noise that Luke Skywalker's lightsaber made when he tossed it aside in front of Emperor Palpatine in Return of the Jedi. But instead of focusing on the scary faces that Darth Maul was making at him from above, Obi-Wan decides to open his eyes to the present moment, and on the living force leaving Qui-Gon's body, leading him to notice Qui-Gon's lightsaber unattended. So using the force, Obi-Wan leaps over Darth Maul and slices him in half. And as Darth Maul reacts to the pain, we get to see him blink for the 3rd time in this movie, with the first blink happening when Obi-Wan slices Darth Maul's lightsaber, and the second blink happening when Obi-Wan is actively slicing Maul in half. Darth Maul actor Ray Park thought it would add more depth and intensity to the character if Darth Maul was so damn locked in that he almost never blinked. However, this lack of blinking is primarily due to how hard it was for Ray Park to physically blink with his special Darth Maul contact lenses. And much like Darth Maul's master would fall down a reactor shaft of his own in Return of the Jedi, both halves of Darth Maul would go tumbling down a reactor shaft as well. Using his dying breaths, Qui-Gon gets Obi-Wan to agree to train Anakin before Qui-Gon's essence becomes one with the cosmic force. And shortly after this, the Jedi Council arrives on Naboo for Qui-Gon Jinn's funeral ceremony and to celebrate Naboo's liberation. And as the Jedi Council exit their ship, we can see a completely different actor playing Mace Windu in the background. And I'm not sure what happened there, but man, they didn't even try to get a black guy that looked like Samuel L. Jackson, goddamn. Obi-Wan is then awarded the title of Jedi Knight and the permission to train Anakin, with everyone on the council but Yoda agreeing to Anakin's training, which makes sense due to Yoda having the most midichlorians in his blood out of all of the other Jedi, which means more microscopic little guys in Yoda's cells, vaguely telling his instincts about Anakin's dark fate as Darth Vader in advance. Then Qui-Gon is given a proper Jedi funeral, which involves his body being burned in an open fire, much like we saw Luke Skywalker do with Anakin's dead body at the end of Return of the Jedi. And in classic Anakin fashion, as Qui-Gon is burning right in front of him during a moment of silence, Anakin decides that it's the correct moment to ask Obi-Wan what's going to happen to him after this, which is absolutely wild, borderline sociopath behavior in my opinion. Like, can you give Obi-Wan Kenobi a second to grieve his homie in peace? Like, goddamn, man. Life isn't always about you and your anxieties, Anakin. Then the movie ends with a big old parade on the streets of Theed. However, while all of these people on Naboo are celebrating their victory, the music playing in the background acts as a bit of symbolic foreshadowing, as this music is actually the Emperor's theme from Return of the Jedi presented in a major key. A subtle musical nod towards how everything is still going according to the plans of the Phantom Menace Sheev Palpatine. This is going to be a breakdown of the 2002 movie Star Wars Episode II Attack of the Clones, the movie that truly marked the beginning of the end of the Galactic Republic. So let's go ahead and jump into it. After the classic Star Wars opening crawl, the movie opens with a small fleet of Naboo ships approaching the city planet of Coruscant, capital of the Galactic Republic. And following this opening crawl with a spaceship entering the frame has been a bit of a Star Wars tradition ever since we saw Princess Leia's ship getting chased down by the Empire at the very beginning of A New Hope. And if we know anything about the Naboo, is that they sure do love their chrome, which is why this Naboo Royal Cruiser is absolutely covered in it. It's actually the same type of chrome that makes up Captain Phasma's armor in the sequel trilogy, as her armor was made from the scraps of one of Palpatine's old Naboo ships. And this is actually a different type of starship than the one that we saw Queen Amidala whipping in The Phantom Menace, as this new J-type diplomatic barge was purposely meant to be an upgrade from the J-type 327 Nubian starship from the last movie, with improved shield and warp drive generators, showing that Naboo security learned from the almost disastrous shortcomings of the ship from the last film. As the ship descends onto the planet below, we can see skyscrapers peaking above the clouds, reaching out into the atmosphere. These buildings are actually so high up in the sky that those who have offices near the top have to have a special gas vented into those offices so they can breathe. However, when the ships finally land onto the platform, the Naboo Royal Cruiser is immediately blown the hell up by space terrorism. Dun dun dun! And oh no, now Senator Amidala is dead. Oh god, Senator Padme is dead. Psych! That was the motherfreaking decoy, son. Senator Padme is still alive and well, disguised as one of the N1 starfighter pilots flying with R2-D2, Padme's true bodyguard. However, unfortunately, a bunch of Naboo security personnel would perish in this explosion, including Padme's secret doppelganger, Corday, played by actress Veronica Segura. And another casualty of the blast was the white and green R2-H7, the astromech of security Captain Typho. And played by actor Jay Lagaya, Captain Typho is actually the nephew of Naboo Captain Panaka from The Phantom Menace, and would be the very man who would set up the decoy operation in the first place. Captain Typho's character was written into this movie as a result of Captain Panaka actor Hugh Corshi declining to return for this film after Lucasfilm would not allow him to read the script before signing on. Apparently, the original plan was to have Panaka to be amongst these victims of this explosion in order to up the emotional stakes early on in the movie, which is kind of messed up, and I personally am kind of glad this actor did not waste his time. And speaking of not wasting time, you do not want to waste any more time not wearing one of our Star Wars and Andor inspired shirts over at the Heavy Spoilers merch store. On the front of our new Empire shirt is a little Death Star, while a giant TIE fighter covered in the Aurebesh Star Wars language is nice and big on the backside. It's a sick design, and we're really proud of it, so head on over to the Heavy Spoilers merch store today and pick one up for yourself. In the 10 years since Episode 1, Padme Amidala served 2 terms as Queen of Naboo before being requested by the next queen to serve as Senator of Naboo. And the reason for Padme's trip to Coruscant was to be a strong advocate against the proposed Military Creation Act, which would have the Republic form a grand army in order to fight the growing threat of the Confederacy of Independent Systems, a group of planets who decided to remove themselves from the Galactic Republic because they felt like the Galactic Senate was treating them unfairly. And in addition to repeated issues of unfair taxation, these worlds also believed that the Senate merely cared about advancing their own political careers and prioritizing the needs of those affluent inner core worlds. This Confederacy of Independent Systems, or CIS for short, was of course partially funded by the Trade Federation that were behind the invasion of Naboo in The Phantom Menace, while also being funded by a number of other federations, including the Techno Union, who would provide the CIS with their army of battle droids, the Stalgassan Hive on the planet of Geonosis, who was in charge of assembling the battle droid army in Geonosian factories, as well as the Corporate Alliance, the Commerce Guild, the Retail Caucus, and the Intergalactic Banking Clan. Then we transition to Chancellor Palpatine's office, where members of the Jedi Council talk with Palpatine, including Jedi Grand Master Yoda, voiced by Frank Oz, and Jedi Master Mace Windu, played by Samuel L. Jackson. And with them are Jedi Masters Ki-Adi-Mundi, Plo Koon, Kit Fisto, Luminara Unduli, and Luminara's Padawan Barriss Offee, who would actually one day bomb the Jedi Temple and kill a number of Jedi, Republic soldiers, and innocent people in the process. All because she believed that the Jedi had lost their way, which, to be fair, was 100% true. But this, of course, would all go down in the 5th season of the Clone Wars animated series around episode 18. And next to Ian McDermott's Palpatine is his bald Umbaran senior administrative aide, Sly Moore, played by actress Sandy Finlay. And although she doesn't have a big role in the movies, it would later be revealed that the reason why Moore got to work so close with Palpatine is due to her own Force sensitivity and admiration for the Sith religion. And this would eventually cause her to be picked up by Darth Maul and forced to endure a series of grueling tests in order for Darth Sidious to fully trust her enough to let her into his very small evil circle. Sidious would then secretly use Sly's Force sensitivity to his advantage by having her Force mind trick Palpatine's political opponents in order to gain valuable political intel from them. But yeah, their discussion about the rise of the CIS is cut off by the arrival of Padme to Chancellor Palpatine's office, an office decorated red to match the red theme of the dark side. And as they enter, statues can also be seen placed throughout Palpatine's office. And these statues are actually prominent figures from Galactic Republic history known as the Sages of Duarte. And these sages were a group of philosophers and lawmakers who actually helped draft the original Galactic Constitution. And though all 4 of these sages were important, the most prominent member of the 4 sages appears to be Sistros Nevitt, the hooded bronzium statue with his palms in the praying position. And even though Sistros Nevitt was instrumental in the formation of the Galactic Republic, she would also use her political position for her own personal advantage without a shred of guilt or remorse, with her dispassionate and cold personality being attributes that would win her great favor in the eyes of Sheev Palpatine, who too aspired to use his political position to benefit his own self. The Speaker's staff, held in the hands of Vice Chair of the Senate, Mas Amedda, the blue-horned Chagrian, who, like Sly Moore, is often seen besides Palpatine, has a little Sistros carving at the very top of the staff to commemorate this terrible, terrible politician of the past. And also, it's inside this statue of Sistros that Palpatine would secretly store his 2 Sith lightsabers right under everybody's noses, which is quite wild. But while we're on the subject of Palpatine's office, on Palpatine's desk, we can see a small glass figure of what appears to be a pyramid, which could be a nod to Palpatine's role as a Sith, as the Sith have shaped their temples and holocrons in the shape of pyramids in the Star Wars universe, much like how the Pyramid Sith holocron from Star Wars Rebels connected with the pyramid-shaped Sith temple on Malachor. And even the cosmic doors to Sith temples inside of the World Between Worlds tend to be shaped like pyramids as well. So there's a good chance that this glass object is a piece of Sith art that Palpatine proudly displays on his desk to taunt the blind Jedi right in front of their faces. But yeah, as Padme greets the Jedi, Yoda tells her that he's glad to see her safe. And this is actually the first movie where a completely computer-generated Yoda was the intention from the very start, as The Phantom Menace would actually use a puppet Yoda until George Lucas would throw in a CG Yoda for subsequent Blu-ray releases. Padme then shares that she believes that former Jedi Count Dooku, played by the late Sir Christopher Lee, is behind the attacks on her life, which would actually end up being the case. However, Mace Windu would immediately dismiss this idea due to believing that no one from their order could ever attempt to do such a thing, showcasing the arrogance of the Jedi Council and their belief that they've all conquered their dark sides through their self-righteous lifestyles, which is not exactly the case. And after Palpatine recommends that Obi-Wan and Anakin protect Padme, the Jedi are immediately sent to Padme's suites, where Anakin is reunited with Padme after 10 years of dreaming about her every day like a creepo. Ewan McGregor reprises his role as Obi-Wan Kenobi, while Hayden Christensen steps into the role of Anakin, taken over from actor Jake Lloyd. Other actors who auditioned for the role of this older Anakin Skywalker were Leonardo DiCaprio, widely celebrated for his role in the Titanic, both Christian Bale and the late Heath Ledger of Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, the late Paul Walker, who played Brian Connor in the Fast and Furious franchise, Chris Klein from the American Pie films, Colin Hanks from Orange County, Ryan Philippe from Cruel Intentions, James Vanderbeek and Joshua Jackson from Dawson's Creek, Misha Collins from Supernatural, Jonathan Brandis from The Second Neverending Story, Eric Christian Olsen from NCIS Los Angeles, and Eric Von Detten from the Disney Channel masterpiece that is Brink, the best movie that Disney Channel has ever produced, probably tied with Smart House and High School Musical 1. Anyway, the Jedi are also, of course, reunited with Jar Jar Binks, played once again by actor Ahmed Best. And I think one of the funniest facts about this movie's development is how the working title for this film was purposely called Jar Jar's Big Adventure, which is a really fun way to troll everybody who hated the character Jar Jar Binks in the first prequel movie. Like, I'm sure Star Wars fans at the time heard that title and started freaking out that the Phantom Menace sequel was going to be even more Jar Jar focused than before. But yeah, pretty much the second they reunite, Anakin immediately starts hitting on Padme and rashly promises that both him and Obi-Wan will find whoever was behind her assassination attempt, outside of their mission mandate from the Jedi Council. This then leads to our first hints towards friction between this master and apprentice duo. And when Obi-Wan tries to remind Anakin of that, Anakin defies his master and the Council by asking why, instead of just doing what he's told. A character trait that Anakin would never grow out of that would eventually lead him to question his loyalty to the Jedi. As Anakin sulks about Padme seemingly forgetting all about him, bounty hunter Jango Fett, played for the first time by Tamara Morrison, meets up with his fellow bounty hunter friend Zam Wesell and hands her a cylinder of poisonous cohoons, deadly insectoid creatures that were purposely starved so that they can rush towards the nearest source of body heat that they can find. These creatures actually hail from a planet called Indumodo, and typically act as predators for any mammalian creature as big as a dog, but will occasionally go for a human if hungry enough. And I know Star Wars fans have brought this up before, but this is truly the laziest assassination plot in science fiction history. Cohoons are being sent to kill Padme because Zam made them, because Jango Fett told her to do it, because Dooku hired Jango Fett to do it, because Trade Federation Viceroy Newt Gunray asked Dooku to do it, and Dooku didn't want to do it himself. But that's not all. Zam Wesell would then give the cohoons to her ASN-121 assassin courier droid to slice open Padme's windows and make that deadly worm delivery. Like, I'm not sure why Dooku didn't just buy his own damn assassin courier droid and just do it himself. But hey, I guess Dooku's just bomb like that. He can just buy layers and layers and layers of assassins to do one job. But even though this bounty hunter, played by actress Liana Walsman, appears to be human, Zam Wesell is actually a member of the reptilian Claudite race from the planet Zolan, a race with shape-shifting abilities, which is why she's referred to as a changeling in the movie. Changeling just means shapeshifter and isn't the name of a race of aliens. As Big Zam makes the handoff, an advertisement above her shows the face of a member of the Bith alien race, the same race that Figrin Dan and the Modal Nodes were when they played Tatooine's Mos Eisley Cantina in A New Hope. And this ad may very well be an advertisement for that very band for all we know. And while this assassin droid breaks into Padme's room, Anakin confesses to his master that reoccurring dreams of his mother have been keeping him up at night, and that he wishes that he was dreaming of Padme instead, immediately displaying Anakin's deep attachments to these two major women in his life. Such attachments were one of the main reasons why the Jedi Council was hesitant to accept a 10-year-old Anakin into their order in the first place, because Anakin had a whole decade to let his fear of losing his mother someday grow grow as he grew more and more attached to her. Because the Jedi were a bit of an extreme cult, they usually only seek out toddlers ages 1 to 3 to bring into the Jedi Order so those younglings can grow up and think of the Jedi Order as their true home, because they believe that fearing the loss of an attachment can lead to feelings of anger, which then leads to feelings of hate, which then leads to suffering and the dark side. However, because the Jedi were blind to their own deep attachment to the light side and the Jedi religion, they didn't see how their fear of losing that light made them angry and hateful towards dark-sided actions. So much so that they encouraged those amongst their rank to do the unnatural act of burying their emotions rather than having healthy relationships with those emotions, which would then ultimately turn into suffering for Anakin Skywalker, who would then make the Jedi suffer their own downfall in return. However, right before their insect assassin could send Padme to the cosmic force in the sky, Anakin would save her life at the last second before Obi-Wan would jump through the window like an absolute madman and land onto the assassin droid. Quite a hilarious and drastic action for someone who was so against conducting an investigation into Padme's assassin in the first place. And while flying around on this assassination droid, Obi-Wan almost runs into a random alien named Magaluf, a member of the Leffingite species of alien. Magaluf was actually in a stolen speeder during that moment, as stealing speeders was one of his favorite things to do apparently. And this is before Obi-Wan nearly collides with an alien in the Galactic Senate named Bob Tyrell of the Aline species, a senator that was apparently hanging out with a Dug named Saboka, a star in a local fan favorite holo drama program. Both these characters can be seen later on in the movie, sitting in a booth at Dex's diner when Obi-Wan goes to see his old friend. And seeing Obi-Wan on the way, Big Zam whips out the Big Blammer and shoots the assassin droid with her Kai-Steer 1284 projectile rifle. But as Obi-Wan safely lands on Anakin's XJ6 airspeeder, Zam then hops onto her Coral 2 all-environment exodrive airspeeder and attempts to flee. Anakin's yellow airspeeder in this scene seems very inspired by George Lucas's Oscar-nominated film American Graffiti from 1973, resembling the yellow 1932 Ford Coupe that the John Milner character drove in that movie. But the coolest part about this chase, in my opinion, is how it also secretly features 4 huge canon-breaking Easter eggs in the background in the form of 3 TIE fighters chasing down an X-Wing, vehicles that would not exist in the Star Wars universe until the adult Luke and Leia Skywalker era that is the Galactic Civil War. And while they were clearly only put there by the VFX team at the time as a neat little tribute to the original trilogy to please the fans, I think it would be really fun if Lucasfilm were to use some of their upcoming projects to explain why these specific vehicles were displaced in time. I mean, with the World Between Worlds and the Mortis gods taking center stage in Ahsoka Season 1, I think it would be super dope if Lucasfilm had 3 TIE fighters chase an X-Wing through various portals that teleport the pilots through space and time in Season 2. It would make for a great unforgettable action sequence while giving this little Easter egg a fun canonical payoff decades later, but that's just the thing that I would do anyway. But yeah, using the Force as his guide, Anakin would eventually jump off of his speeder to land directly on Zam's speeder, before losing his lightsaber while fighting for control of Zam's vehicle in the process. But luckily, Obi-Wan Kenobi is able to catch it. Anakin then causes Zam's airspeeder to crash, leading her to flee into the Outlander gambling club nearby. And as the Jedi first enter the Outlander gambling club in pursuit, Obi-Wan hands Anakin his lightsaber back, reminding him that his lightsaber is his life, before jokingly asking why he feels like Anakin is going to be the death of him. A hilarious bit of foreshadowing towards Obi-Wan's final showdown with Darth Vader in A New Hope that would end with Obi-Wan's disappearing before he could be struck down. And one of the TV screens in the club appears to be showing footage of a pod race for the patrons. But this isn't your normal pod race, oh no, but actual gameplay footage from the Star Wars Episode 1 Racer video game, with racers Dud Bolt and Bull's Roar on the screen racing on Ando Prime, an Arctic planet in the mid-rim. And next to that screen is footage of a game of Noonaball, which basically looks like Star Wars' version of American football. But instead of a football, 2 teams of droids throw around a little Nuna creature, which are tiny little alien swamp turkeys that are all over the planet Naboo, especially in the previous film. I don't know if Space PETA exists in this universe, but I'm sure that they are not happy with this sport. And to the right of that screen is footage of an Odu Piendo race that bar patrons can bet on like humans bet on horse races in real life. Odupiendos, like the Nuna, are also flightless birds native to Naboo. And while the Jedi search for their target in this crowded space bar, we can actually see a number of past Star Wars actors and crew amongst them, like C-3PO actor Anthony Daniels and Jar Jar Binks actor Ahmed Best. George Lucas actually named Ahmed's character in this scene Ahmed Beck as a direct reference to the actor's name. And next to Ahmed Beck during the scene is a pink Twi'lek by the name of Luna Minx, played by George Lucas's daughter Katie Lucas, who also shared a scene with Ahmed Best in The Phantom Menace when she played the role of one of Anakin's childhood friends, Amy. But Katie isn't the only member of the Lucas family that makes a cameo in this movie, as George Lucas's adopted son, Jet Lucas, would appear as Jedi Padawan Zet Jukasa later on in the background when Obi-Wan is talking to Jocasta Nu in the Jedi Archives. We would eventually see this poor Padawan be slain in front of Senator Bail Organa in Revenge of the Sith during Order 66. R2-D2 puppeteer and droid unit supervisor Don Baez can also be seen super quickly, along with the rest of the crew members of his droid team, which include Justin Dix, Zeynep Selkuk, and Trevor Tai. Don Baez also had cameos in A Return of the Jedi, where he played a Bith alien named Barquin Dan, a horn player in Max Rebo's band, while also occasionally acting as the in-suit actor for bounty hunter Boba Fett when the other in-suit actor Jeremy Bulloch wasn't around. But yeah, because the scene at the bar was filmed on an actual set with all of these people, as opposed to being surrounded by a sea of green screen like they usually are, actor Hayden Christensen loved this scene in particular, because it felt like being in a real club with his homie Obi-Wan. Homie-Wan Kenobi. And speaking of Obi-Wan, while Anakin's bearded bro is blending in amongst the bar patrons, one sketchy-ass dude attempts to sell him some death sticks, with this guy being played by actor Matt Doran, who also played the character Mouse in the first Matrix film. And for all we know, this entire movie could be taking place in a Matrix simulation made by Mouse himself due to actress Fiona Johnson playing a female bar patron in a red dress, much like she did when she played a woman in a red dress, programmed to distract Neo in the first Matrix movie as well. Like, George Lucas clearly was a big fan of The Matrix when it came out in 1999, and who wasn't? That movie freaking bangs, man. Paul actually did a really great breakdown of the first Matrix movie that you guys can find on this channel right here. But yeah, in the Star Wars universe, death sticks are a type of highly addictive drug that, when used, give the user a powerful hallucinogenic high. The effects are short-lived, but come at a steep cost. Death sticks not only warp a person's mind, but also deteriorate their body over time. And prolonged use leads to severe physical degradation and mental instability, making them one of the more dangerous substances in the galaxy. The high might feel good at the moment, but the long-term consequences are devastating, essentially shaving time off one's life every time they use one of these death sticks. And George Lucas created these death sticks as a clear metaphor for cigarette smoking and, more broadly, substance abuse, as Lucas was very staunchly against cigarette smoking and drug use in general. And by inserting this brief scene, Lucas was trying to slip in a moral message about the dangers of addiction in children, as he primarily made the Star Wars franchise for them.
Won't somebody please think of the children?
But yeah, Zam attempts to sneak behind Obi-Wan Kenobi to shoot him in the back, but Obi-Wan is able to detect her intentions through the Force and is able to cut her arm off with his lightsaber just in time. This, of course, would not be the first time we ever saw Obi-Wan cutting off somebody's limb in a bar in a Star Wars movie, as Sir Alec Guinness's Obi-Wan would do the same thing to the Aqualish alien Ponda Baba in a cantina in A New Hope. But unfortunately, before the Jedi could get any information out of her, Zam would be shot with a toxic dart by Jango Fett. And as she lay on the ground dying, Zam the Changeling morphs back into her regular form as a claw-eyed alien before using her last breaths to cuss out Jango Fett, saying "bounty hunter slimeball" in both the Clawdite and Huttese languages. Her skin also turns a shade of brown in the process, which is not usually her normal skin color, as Clawdites typically have green skin. And with nothing but this toxic dart as their lead, Obi-Wan and Anakin report the attack to the Jedi Council, who then resolve to let Obi-Wan track down the origin of the dart, while Anakin takes Senator Padme back to Naboo undercover as refugees. In the 10 years since the events of The Phantom Menace, the Jedi High Council has changed a little bit with two new members, Jedi Masters Shaak Ti and Coleman Trebor. Shaak Ti is a member of the Togrutan race of aliens, the same species as Anakin's future Padawan Ahsoka Tano, She would actually prove absolutely instrumental to the Clone Wars by working with 2 highly trained bounty hunters in training all the Jango Fett clones at the Kamino cloning facility in the art of synchronized warfare, choosing only the most skilled clones of the bunch to serve on the front lines. And this is all covered in Season 3, Episode 1 of the Clone Wars animated series, in case you guys wanted to check that out. Coleman Trebor, on the other hand, is a member of the Verk alien race, whose heads resemble the Parasaurolophus dinosaur. And unfortunately for him, this would be his first and last appearance in a Star Wars movie due to him being slain by Jango Fett later on in the movie during the Battle of Geonosis. Coleman Trebor would take the seat of former High Council member Yariel Poof. You know, that one Jedi Master who looks like a big old Caucasian penis. Yeah, that guy. And while we don't know exactly what happened in canon to him as of yet, we do know that he died on a Jedi mission not long before the events of Attack of the Clones. Shaak Ti, on the other hand, would fill in the seat of the late Jedi Master Yaddle, the only member of Yoda's race that we've seen in the Star Wars universe outside of Grogu. We would not learn how Yaddle died until the year 2022, when the 4th episode of Tales of the Jedi was released on Disney+. Apparently, not long after the murder of Qui-Gon Jinn 10 years prior, Master Yaddle would be struck down by Qui-Gon Jinn's former master, Count Dooku, mostly because Yaddle discovered Count Dooku's alliance with Darth Sidious. So, in order to prove his loyalty to his new master, Dooku had to strike Yaddle down. But yeah, other than those two, we of course have Yoda, who has served as Jedi Grandmaster for around 800 years, the 50-year-old human Jedi Master Mace Windu from the planet Harum Kal, the Kaldor Jedi Master Plo Koon, the Syrian Jedi Master Ki-Adi Mundi, the horned Iktachi Jedi Saesee Tiin, the small Lannic Jedi Evan Piel, the snake-like Jedi Master Oppo Rensisis of the Thespiation species, the Thalofian Jedi Master Adi Gallia, the Zabrak Jedi Master Eth Koth, and the human Master Depa Billaba from the planet Chalakta. In order to convince Padme to leave Coruscant, the Jedi have Anakin talk with Chancellor Palpatine, who proceeds to blow up Anakin's ego by telling him that the Jedi Council does not fully appreciate his abilities and how he's going to be the best Jedi who ever lived. A fantastic manipulation tactic to use on someone like Anakin, who keeps feeling like the Jedi are holding him back. And this is then very appropriately followed by a conversational scene between Obi-Wan, Yoda, and Mace Windu, where Obi-Wan expresses concern over Anakin's growing arrogance and his naturally strong connection to the Force. Because Anakin's blood is jam-packed with a crazy amount of midichlorians, he's able to achieve impossible feats that dwarf many of those on the Jedi Council with ease. So Anakin's wondering why the hell he's still rocking a Padawan braid on his head and not regularly being given S-rank ninja missions like Kakashi gets to do. However, even though he has the abilities of an exceptional Jedi, Obi-Wan Kenobi believes that Anakin is still far too impulsive, emotional, arrogant, obsessive, and naive to become a full-fledged Jedi Knight just yet. And Obi-Wan is right here. We literally see Anakin display all of those emotions at once as he talks to Padme as she packs to head back to Naboo.
That must be frustrating.
It's worse. He's overly critical. He never listens. He doesn't understand.
Like, dude was having a regular conversation with Padme before he got himself incredibly angry over how much his power wasn't being recognized by his superiors. And while I understand Anakin's frustration, that dude yelling, "It's not fair," like a 4-year-old before telling this super hot Padme lady that he's all grown up now was absolutely insane work. And if I'm honest, all of Anakin's actions throughout this movie is just one giant red flag. That dude is a grade A, mentally unstable, predatory creep in this movie, and I, to this day, cannot understand what Padme saw in him. I feel like Anakin did one giant Force mind trick by accident and got Padme to fall in love with him. But yeah, what I love the most about this conversation between Obi-Wan, Yoda, and Mace Windu is how Yoda is the one who clearly sees that Anakin isn't the only one amongst their order that struggles with being arrogant in their abilities, suggesting that even the oldest Jedi amongst them in the Council have a tendency to let their Force affinity lead them into overconfidence and conceit. And Yoda is 100% on the money here, as it would be the Jedi's arrogance that would blind the Jedi Order from seeing how their own dark-sided fear of the dark side would transform them into soldiers and spies rather than the peacekeeping monks their creed originally called them to be. And while Anakin and Padme head to Naboo, Obi-Wan Kenobi begins his investigation at Dex's Diner, owned by his old four-armed Besselix pal, Dexter Jetster, with Jetster being one of the nicknames that George Lucas had for his son, Jet Lucas. During the scene, we could see that Dexter has 2 waitresses under his employ. This blonde waitress over here named Hermione Bagua, aka Harmony, played by Australian actress Susie Porter, and this WA7 waitress droid named Flo, just like it says in Aurebesh on her name tag. Flo is also voiced by the same Harmony actress Susie Porter, because let's be real, most waitresses be having two jobs. George Lucas would name this waitress Flo as a shout out to his good buddy Martin Scorsese, who directed a film called Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore in 1974 that would spin off into a TV show called Alice, which ran from 1976 to 1985. And on that show is a character named Flo Castleberry, who George Lucas would take that name from. Dexter Jettster's personality in this movie was also partly inspired by a character from the Alice TV program, mainly actor Vic Tayback's chef character Mel. George Lucas has also said that classic American actor Ernest Borgnine was also an influence on Dexter Jettster as well. And while Dexter Jettster is introduced as Obi-Wan's old friend, he is also an incredibly old alien himself, and was even around during the days of the High Republic hundreds of years in the past. So he was definitely around in the galaxy during the events of The Acolyte on Disney+. You know, doing space hood rat stuff with his friends. Back in the days of the High Republic, Dexter used to be a hyperspace prospector, one of the many galactic adventurers scoping out the untraveled galaxy for new hyperspace routes. And while he wasn't doing that, he was either dealing goods on the black market or telling all sorts of stories to Maz Kanata and all of her sketchy pirate and smuggler friends over at Maz Kanata's castle on Takodana, which we saw Han Solo and the gang visit in The Force Awakens. In Kirsten White's 2022 book Padawan, we learned that Obi-Wan first met Dexter while Obi-Wan was protecting a group of children on a Jedi mission to the planet Lunara, helping Obi-Wan and those kids evacuate that dying planet to find refuge in the city planet Coruscant, where Dex would open up his diner shortly after. But yeah, Dexter helps Obi-Wan identify the toxic dart as the Kaminoan saber dart, leading to Obi-Wan attempting to look up more about the planet Kamino in the Jedi archives, the Jedi's massive library of galactic knowledge and philosophy managed by the chief librarian, Jedi Master Jocasta Nu, played by actress Alethea McGrath, who unfortunately passed away in 2016. Around the Jedi archive are 20 busts, representing the lost 20 Jedi from the past who decided to leave the Jedi Order for their own different reasons. But what's particularly notable about these statues is how the VFX team apparently threw in statues of some key figures from the production, including director George Lucas, visual effects supervisors John Noel and Pablo Hellman, as well as animation director Rob Coleman. And there's actually a deleted scene from this movie where Jocasta and Obi-Wan stand next to the bust of former Jedi Count Dooku while discussing how he became fed up with the doctrine of the Jedi and the inefficiencies of the Senate before he left the Order himself.
He has a very powerful face, doesn't he? He was one of the most brilliant Jedi I've had the privilege of knowing.
I never understood why he quit.
Well, one might say he was always a bit out of step with the decisions of the Council. Much like your old master, Qui-Gon Jinn.
Really?
Oh, yes, they were very individual thinkers. Idealists. In the end, I think he left because he lost faith in the Republic. He disappeared for 9 of 10 years and turned up recently as head of the separatist movement.
But speaking of Count Dooku, before Sir Christopher Lee would end up being cast as the character for the prequels, he was actually almost cast as a completely different character in the original trilogy, as Lee would actually turn down the role of Grand Moff Tarkin in A New Hope when Lucas offered it to him, something that Christopher Lee would grow to regret greatly over the years as Star Wars grew into cinematic legend. So, when Lucas called him for Dooku, Lee just couldn't refuse. But yeah, as Padme and Anakin are being transported to Naboo as stowaways in an AA freighter liner called the Genderian Valley, R2-D2 brings the two of them food because he's the robo-homie that every Skywalker needs. The robot actually serving the food to all of these refugees is actually a COO 2180 cooking droid, who also likely prepared the food themselves. And this droid was apparently going to appear inside of Dex's diner earlier on in the film, but they decided to use him here instead. And as the two talk, Anakin tells Padme that the Jedi Code only forbids attachment and possession, and tries to argue that the Jedi's unconditional compassion for all life is enough to excuse his deep feelings for the Senator. Padme then replies to this by telling Anakin that he's grown so much over the past 10 years, And yeah, I would hope so, Padme. It's so weird how the audience is just supposed to believe that Anakin is supposed to be 7 years younger than Padme here, like he was in The Phantom Menace, but like Hayden Christensen is a full 2 months older than Natalie Portman is in real life. So I have no idea what George Lucas was thinking, to be honest. But hey, out of the 400 people that auditioned for the role of Anakin, Hayden apparently looked the best alongside Natalie Portman. So George still thought your boy was still perfect for the role regardless. Then we transition to Obi-Wan walking around the Jedi Temple as he walks past the blue Twi'lek Jedi Aayla Secura, who was actually played by one of the production assistants from Industrial Light and Magic named Amy Allen. And her appearances in Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith are her only major acting roles to date. And even though Amy Allen has no speaking lines in this movie, it was important for George Lucas that Aayla Secura canonically have a French accent, specifically because George wanted her to represent the World War II French resistance fighters in his giant war allegory of a space film. So when voice actress Jennifer Hale took up the role of Aayla for the Clone Wars animated series, Lucas made sure that Hale established that French accent into canon. And when the production was first attempting to nail down what Aayla Secura would look like, concept art was made of Aayla that made her look way more of an aquatic type alien. But that design would ultimately be repurposed for the design of the Nautolan species of alien that Jedi Master Kit Fisto belongs to. But yeah, as Obi-Wan walks past Master Aayla, he also walks by this giant statue of a Jedi with a top knot, making a sphere float in midair, which is kind of crazy because how the hell did they make that statue ball float in the air like that? It's kind of weird. This statue seems like a clear tribute to William Shakespeare's Hamlet. When Hamlet famously holds the skull of the character Yorick with an outstretched arm. And that iconic piece of imagery is oftentimes associated with the famous Hamlet quote, "To be or not to be, that is the question." Personally, I feel like George Lucas intentionally wanted the audience to have both that iconic pose and quote in their heads for the current scene. Because this to be or not to be question is the question that Obi-Wan would ask Yoda in regards to his mysterious invisible planet Kamino. Does Kamino exist or doesn't it exist? Like honestly, it could be Obi-Wan as this statue rather than this mysterious Jedi, who actually looks a lot like Jedi Master Sifo Dyas, the very first Jedi to make contact with Kamino in order to make a clone army for the Republic. This Sifo Dyas dude apparently had a vision from the Cosmic Force about an upcoming war in the galaxy, and after suggesting to the Jedi Council that they encourage the Senate to assemble an army to fight what's to come, all the council did was expel him from the council for his insane and radical idea. So, about a year before the events of The Phantom Menace, Sifo Dyas would go behind their backs and contact the aliens of Kamino to start building an army of clones anyway, pretending like he was speaking on behalf of the entire Galactic Senate and Jedi Council. But eventually Darth Sidious and his apprentice Darth Tyrannus, aka Count Dooku, would find out about Sifo Dyas' plans to build a clone army, and since they are both terrible people, they would ultimately kill Sifo Dyas and take his operation for themselves, not long after the events of the invasion of Naboo. With the Kamino cloning contract now in Sith control, Count Dooku would then buy the rights to Jango Fett's DNA for 20 million credits to have that DNA be the base code for this clone army. All Jango Fett asked for in return was to have a young clone of himself made to be his son, because apparently Jango wasn't getting any bitches. Which of course led to the creation of the bounty hunter Boba Fett from the original trilogy. But again, since this happened not long after episode 1, this young Boba Fett appears to be 10 years old in this film, played by actor Daniel Logan. So yeah, I said all this to say that it makes a lot of sense for George Lucas to make Sifo Dyas look a lot like the statue during this scene about finding Kamino with Yoda's class of younglings. And speaking of the younglings, when the younglings say hi to Obi-Wan during this scene, the fourth youngling to the right is actually named Liam, after Qui-Gon Jinn actor Liam Neeson. The class then helps Obi-Wan realize that the planet Kamino was deleted from the Jedi archives by a mysterious force, a force that we would learn to be Count Dooku himself in the 4th episode of Tales of the Jedi back in 2022. Which Count Dooku would do using Sifo Dyas' security clearance credentials.
Please enter security clearance code. Code accepted. Master Sifo Dyas. Planet Kamino. Kamino. Location deleted.
And as Obi-Wan makes his way to where Kamino should be in the galaxy, Anakin and Padme arrive on Naboo. And as their ship flies over the Naboo spaceport, we can actually see that the VFX team has placed 3 YT-1300 Corellian freighters in the background, a direct reference to the iconic Millennium Falcon from the original trilogy, flown by Han Solo, a man who hails from the planet Corellia himself. And as Anakin and Padme make their way to Queen Jamila's chambers, Padme reflects on her own time as queen, confessing that she was relieved when her 2 terms as queen was over because she felt too young and inexperienced to actually be queen, even going as far as rejecting an effort by the people of Naboo to amend their constitution to let her serve even longer. Like, I love this about Padme because this is the exact opposite of how Anakin is in this movie and beyond. Because Anakin pursues power and status and is blind to his own immaturity, while Padme rejects power and status and is mindful of her levels of wisdom and maturity. And as the two have this conversation, they walk past 2 Gungans having a conversation in Naboo-type clothing, showing how interconnected the Naboo and Gungans have truly become after breaking down the barriers between their people 10 years prior. And much like in The Phantom Menace, the interior of Queen Jamila's chambers was filmed at the Royal Palace of Caserta in Italy, as well as the later balcony scene where Anakin and Padme share that first kiss. And I do want to point out that during this kissing scene, after Padme shares with Anakin how much she valued the beautiful nature and scenery of Naboo as a child, Anakin immediately replies to all that with his iconic, "I hate sand, it's coarse and it gets everywhere" remark, again showing a sharp contrast between how the two of them see life.
What a baby. What a big baby. Just get on with the game. Baby.
Much like Qui-Gon tried to impart on a young 10-year-old Anakin in the last movie, Padme is focused on the living force and can appreciate the natural beauty around her, while Anakin, on the other hand, cannot even stay present enough to focus on what she was even talking about, instead choosing to focus on the negative aspect of nature before quickly changing the subject to how soft Padme's skin was. Like if Qui-Gon Jinn was alive, he would be shaking his head furiously at this little dumb Anakin boy. To me, this reflects how much Anakin is obsessed with Padme's physical form and the idea of possessing her body for his future, rather than actually listening to the woman that he apparently loves for who she is. And unfortunately, Anakin would never learn the error of his ways, which would lead him to ignoring Padme's pleas on Mustafar and force choking her when she threatens to leave him. And Padme would continue to miss red flag after red flag when she would totally disregard how jealous Anakin would immediately get when she talked about her childhood crush briefly, and how Anakin basically advocated for a fascist empire instead of a galactic republic. But the thing that annoys me the most about their whole date is how Anakin would manipulate Padme later on by placing the blame on her for their earlier kiss. Being all like, "Nah, you should have never kissed me because now I really can't live without you. So if you reject me, I'm gonna feel really bad and you're gonna hurt my feelings real bad and you're gonna feel real bad about hurting my feelings." Like a real asshole move that was meant to pressure Padme into committing to him. But yeah, a few other things that I do want to know about their date is how George Lucas allowed the 2 actors to completely improvise the dialogue in that dinner scene. You know, when they were talking about aggressive Jedi negotiations. And also how apparently Lucas himself personally drew up the design for the outfit Padme wears during their fireside conversation. A little later, Anakin's midichlorians would plague him with visions from the cosmic force of his mother in pain, leading Padme to accompany Anakin on a quick trip to Tatooine to check up on her, prioritizing his attachments over the Jedi code that he swore to uphold. But then again, he was like 10 years old when he took that oath, so can he really be blamed for that? Why are the Jedi making children take these oaths? That's not really fair. When the two arrive on Naboo, Anakin quickly tracks down his old slave master Watto. After coming out on top after Anakin's win at the Boonta Eve podrace a decade ago, this dude would press his luck a little bit too much by gambling even more, leading him to lose his junk shop and pretty much everything, leaving him on the side of the streets covered in flies. The sound of these flies around Watto was actually an audio recording of horseshit. Literally, it's actual horseshit. Well, flies flying around horseshit anyway at the Skywalker Ranch, which is absolutely crazy to me because who sees horseshit and is immediately like, "Hold up, let me grab my microphone. This moment is too good to miss out on." A psychopath, that's who. But anyways, after Watto realizes that the Jedi confronting him is actually a grown-up Anakin, he tells Anakin that 5 years after Anakin left, he was forced to give Shmi Skywalker to a man named Klieg Lars in order to pay off some debts. And after meeting Anakin's mother as a slave and falling in love with her, Klieg Lars would win Shmi's freedom in a gamble with Watto, much like Qui-Gon did with Anakin. Anakin and Padme then head to the Lars homestead and tell R2-D2 to stay behind on Padme's H-type Nubian yacht so that R2 doesn't break Star Wars canon by accident, because at that time, R2-D2 had not yet met Luke's future uncle, Owen Lars, who Anakin meets when he arrives at the Lars house after reuniting with C-3PO, with actor Anthony Daniels stepping back into the suit for the first time since the original trilogy, as the C-3PO from The Phantom Menace was actually just a puppet. Daniels would actually literally step back into the suit, as the C-3PO suit in this movie is actually the very same C-3PO suit that they used in the original trilogy, just a little bit repainted. And living with Owen Lars is actually a young Beru White's son, his girlfriend. It was actually Beru herself who introduced Anakin's mother to Owen's father, Klieg. And in the years since Shmi Skywalker's freedom, both her and Beru worked as hard as they could to free as many slaves on Tatooine as they could find, with Shmi even developing a way to disable the explosive slave tracking chip that was commonly embedded inside every slave to keep them in line Suicide Squad style. But unfortunately, a month before Anakin's arrival, his mother would be attacked by Tusken Raiders, just like her grandson Luke Skywalker would in A New Hope. Tusken Raiders would frequently attack other people outside of their species because they viewed themselves as having the most legitimate claim to the Tatooine planet, as they themselves were one of the few species of alien that were actually native to Tatooine. Tusken Raiders also had a strong belief that all of the water on Tatooine is sacred and that they alone have claims to all that high-quality H2O. Which, of course, is real bad news if you are the wife of a moisture farmer like Anakin's mom was when she was picking mushrooms off of one of her family's moisture evaporators. It was actually George Lucas's original intention to eventually reveal that it was Count Dooku himself that would order these Tusken Raiders to kidnap Anakin's mother. And there was even a deleted scene in Revenge of the Sith where Count Dooku confesses to doing so. However, George Lucas would ultimately decide to not include that scene in the movie, likely because it would insinuate that Count Dooku was actively working to help Darth Sidious find his own replacement, which really wouldn't make sense for Dooku to do. But yeah, 26 out of 29 of Klieg Lars' friends died in an attempt to free Shmi, with Klieg himself barely escaping with his life after losing one of his legs. And knowing that he had the strength and skill of at least 26 men, Anakin decides that he's going to go out by himself to search for his mother. And before he leaves, Padme follows Anakin outside to say goodbye, with the camera focusing primarily on their shadows. And during this moment, Anakin's shadow is purposely designed to look like Darth Vader's, foreshadowing a coming tragedy that would be a main motivator towards Anakin's descent to the dark side. Anakin then hops on a speeder and heads straight to the camp of Tusken Raiders, getting help from a group of Jawas on the way. And when Anakin arrives at the Tusken Raider camp, two lizard dogs can be seen fighting over a bone outside. These dog-like reptilian creatures are actually called massiffs, and they are typically found on desert-type planets like Tatooine or Geonosis. In fact, these creatures were originally supposed to fight Obi-Wan while he was attempting to infiltrate Dooku's operation on Geonosis, but George Lucas decided against that and decided to just have them fighting over a bone on Tatooine here. And speaking of animals and Tusken Raiders, the reason why Tusken Raiders of Star Wars sound like donkeys or mules is because that is exactly what they are. Well, kind of, because all of the scenes in Tatooine were filmed in Tunisia during A New Hope, the crew had to use donkeys and mules to help lug around all of their equipment. However, that meant a lot of donkeys and mules in the background making all sorts of annoying noises, especially when they were trying to film, resulting in a bunch of takes being ruined by a bunch of asses. But the audio engineers did see an opportunity in all of this chaos, and would record these sounds for the Tusken Raiders, making the best out of this shitty situation. But yeah, although Anakin was able to free his mother from her bonds, the injuries that she sustained after being tortured by the Sand People only allowed her enough time and energy to say goodbye to him before her death. And with one of Anakin's greatest fears now a reality, young Skywalker begins a crash out of galactic proportions, murdering all the Tusken Raiders in the camp. And not just the men, but the women and the children and their little dogs too. And during this violent descent to the dark side, we can actually hear Qui-Gon Jinn's voice echoing in the background, begging Anakin to stop. An intentional audio cue put there by George Lucas to show Qui-Gon Jinn reaching out from the great beyond that is the cosmic force. Much like a young Luke Skywalker would be able to hear the voice of a deceased Obi-Wan Kenobi in the original trilogy. And it's actually super sad to think about how disappointed Qui-Gon Jinn was in Anakin's dark side massacre in that moment. But the fact that Qui-Gon was moved enough to reach out to Anakin like that at all shows how deeply of a faithful follower of the living force that Qui-Gon actually was, as he cared so much about the lives of those barbaric Tusken Raiders enough to try to speak on their behalf. Because to Qui-Gon, all life is sacred. And this moment is actually briefly touched upon in E.K. Johnston's Star Wars: A Queen's Hope from 2022, which shows Anakin expressing guilt about purposely ignoring Qui-Gon as he was slaughtering all of those sand people. And the fact that Anakin could even hear Qui-Gon calling to him at all shows how diesel Anakin's midichlorian count even is. Because thousands upon thousands of those mini satellite dishes in his bloodstream were able to pick up those signals from the cosmic force with literally no effort. This is also why Master Yoda is able to detect Anakin's intensely angry emotions from light years away on the planet Coruscant, as Yoda is the member of the Jedi Council with the second highest midichlorian count that anyone has ever seen. Anakin then heads back to the Lars homestead to bring back his mother's body, and when Padme goes to check up on Anakin afterwards, we see him in the Lars garage attempting to fix some of their broken machinery. An emotional response from Anakin, who is seeking some type of control in the midst of his anguish. Because at his core, Anakin is a mechanic at heart. Ever since he was a small kid, Anakin has used his natural midichlorian connection to the cosmic force to allow him to build impressive race-winning pod racers and protocol droids with relative ease. It's because of this that Anakin gets so angry at Obi-Wan Kenobi for quote-unquote holding him back in his Jedi training, because Anakin feels like if the cosmic force can help him fix up and bring life to machinery like C-3PO, then he should be able to use that cosmic force to fix organic life forms as well and keep them from dying. However, such a feat clearly goes against the natural laws of the universe, which the light-sided Jedi code strongly aligns with. Because much like the stars themselves, everything is born and goes through changes before everything eventually dies. Anakin hates the very universal concepts of change and death and begins to rage against the dying of the light, wanting everyone that he loves to be as immortal as the darkness of outer space, rather than being temporary like the stars themselves. Because no matter what happens to the stars and planets in the universe, darkness always survives and is eternal, which is why Anakin would see training in the unnaturally mysterious ways of the dark side of the Force. Because as cold and empty as cosmic darkness can be, it will always survive. But unfortunately for both Anakin and Palpatine, they would learn much too late in life that the unnatural pursuit of eternal life would cost their actual lives to be ones of deep suffering, as both of their actions would lead them to immense suffering to the point of relying on technology to sustain them. And as Anakin expresses his deep anger and frustrations to Padme, he angrily throws an object into the back of the garage, hitting what appears to be the same X-34 landspeeder that his son Luke Skywalker would end up riding with Obi-Wan during A New Hope. And after they bury Anakin's mother, R2-D2 shows up super briefly in order to tell Anakin Skywalker that they have a missed video call from Obi-Wan Kenobi, who has been on a bit of adventure of his own. Obi-Wan would eventually find the planet of Kamino, exactly where we're supposed to be in space. Kamino is home to the amphibious Kaminoan species, who have chosen to isolate themselves from the rest of the galaxy as a whole out of deep mistrust, believing that the planet itself was all they needed to sustain their culture and livelihood, and that outside help was just a means of colonizers trying to get their foot in the door. Their design was heavily inspired by classic depictions of aliens in cinema, in particular the aliens from Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind. This would be the second prequel movie that would introduce an alien species inspired by one of Spielberg's movies, as The Phantom Menace introduced the Asogian species as a direct tribute to Spielberg's 1982 film E.T. the Extraterrestrial. To help the Kaminoans travel around their planet, they would ride on the backs of flying whales called Awas. The designs for these creatures were actually created to be used on the planet Bespin when the OG gang traveled there in The Empire Strikes Back, originally intended to be Bespin air whales, which is why the word Awa, spelled A-I-W-H-A, seems to be a combination of the word air and whale. After the Kaminoan Tan We introduces Obi-Wan to their Prime Minister Lama Su, he learns about how former Jedi Master Sifo-Dyas was the one who originally ordered for the creation of a clone army. And this moment in the movie is actually the result of a typo in the script, as the name Sifo-Dyas was originally supposed to be Saido-Dyas, with a D instead of an F. The original implication was that Darth Sidious himself was the one who originally contacted the Kaminoans for this clone army, as Sido Diaz is supposed to be a play on the word Sidious. But because of this typo, they had to create a whole separate character with a backstory that would not be expounded upon until the Clone Wars animated series. Obi-Wan also eventually learns that all the clones were programmed to be significantly more docile and obedient than their genetic father Jango Fett, with such programming eventually being used to trigger the Great Jedi Massacre with the Order 66 program. And as Obi-Wan inspects the clone army, we can see that the design of the clone troopers' armor is a mashup of both the white stormtrooper armor from the original trilogy with that of the Mandalorian armor of the Fett family. Most of the clones in this movie are equipped with a DC-15A blaster rifle, with the designs of these sci-fi rifles being inspired by the MG-34 machine gun that the Germans used in World War II while singing Kanye West songs from 2025 for some reason. Are the Germans time travelers? I don't know, but that last Indiana Jones movie appears to say yes. And considering that we first learned about the Clone Wars in A New Hope when Luke Skywalker would ask an old Ben Kenobi if he served in the Clone Wars, it's quite crazy that it would be Obi-Wan Kenobi himself who would be the first Jedi to actually lay eyes on the completed clone army. And what's even crazier is how this wasn't even George Lucas's original vision for what the Clone Wars was going to look like. Initially, George Lucas was thinking that the Clone Wars was going to involve a massive galactic war where everyone in the galaxy was forced to fight against their own evil clone, which honestly would have been incredibly cool to see, and I would love if they tackled such a story for Star Wars Visions on Disney Plus someday. Obi-Wan eventually meets Jango Fett and his clone son Boba Fett, who each share a secret language that they use between each other called Fett Code. Like when Jango is talking to Obi-Wan, he uses their special Fett Code language in order to tell Boba Fett to close the closet door. In fact, that coded sentence is literally just the sentence "close the door" said backwards. And after Jango lies through Obi-Wan's interrogation, he immediately starts preparing his son to leave Kamino for the planet Geonosis. Obi-Wan then gives chase, leading to a really fun hand-to-hand sequence between the two of them, a type of fight that wasn't really all that common in the Star Wars franchise up until that point. Eventually, Jango is able to leave Obi-Wan dangling for his life on the edge of a platform, allowing for him to escape in his Slave One ship, the modified Fire Spray 31 class patrol and attack craft famously flown by Boba Fett in the original trilogy. Before Boba Fett inherited the ship from his father, Jango actually stole the ship from a prison moon called Uru 4. As Jango Fett enters his ship, he bumps his head a little bit, a nod to the famous blooper from A New Hope, where a stormtrooper accidentally bumps his head on an opening door. And after throwing a tracker onto Jango Fett's ship, Obi-Wan eventually gives chase in his own red Delta 7B Ether Sprite class light interceptor with his astromech companion R4-P17, an astromech that is apparently female. And in order to shake Obi-Wan, Jango Fett would then release some of his Void 7 seismic charges, giving us one of the most satisfying sound effects in cinema history. Go ahead and play that beautiful symphony for the kids, editors. Seismic charges work by absorbing all of the sound around them before releasing all of that energy in a massive blast, kind of like vibranium in Wakanda in the MCU. And it's a sound that Benjamin Burt, the movie's sound designer, wanted to include in the Star Wars universe as early as A New Hope, when he originally suggested that they use the sound for when TIE fighters were destroyed in outer space. However, George Lucas would not approve of the use of this sound until this very movie. The original goal was to try to make a sound that resembled, quote-unquote, an audio black hole. And I gotta say, that dude succeeded. Play that shit on my funeral, man. But yeah, eventually Jango would go on the offensive and chase Obi-Wan, leading to Obi-Wan faking his death by throwing some junk in the path of one of Jango Fett's missiles before hiding behind a space rock. Obi-Wan hiding amongst the chaos of an asteroid field is a callback to when Han Solo did the same in The Empire Strikes Back, but this time, Obi-Wan actually avoids detection by Jango Fett, unlike a Han Solo who was ultimately found by the bounty hunter Boba Fett. In fact, it was because little boy Boba saw his dad fail at playing asteroid hide-and-seek with Obi-Wan that he was wise enough to find Han Solo hiding amongst some asteroids later on in Episode 5, which is a really clever way to connect those two moments. Obi-Wan eventually tracks Jango down to Geonosis and ends up spying on Count Dooku's meeting with all the major heads of the CIS army. And during this meeting, notice how the table that they are sitting at is shaped like the logo for the Galactic Republic. Apparently, the set for this scene was originally supposed to be a conference room for Chancellor Palpatine over on the planet Coruscant. However, George Lucas would change his mind about including this Coruscant conference room in the movie, leading to the production deciding to reuse this set for this CIS meeting on the planet Geonosis. But even though this was a last-minute change, I still do feel like it's quite fitting considering that Count Dooku himself was responsible for the creation of the Republic's droid army. So having Count Dooku sit at the head of this Republic-themed table with all of his CIS buddies surrounding it kind of accidentally reinforces the theme of Dooku secretly being in charge of this entire galactic conflict. And after learning that Count Dooku was working with the Trade Federation, the Geonosians, the Techno Union, the Commerce Guild, and the Corporate Alliance to create a droid army, Obi-Wan attempts to send a message of warning to the Jedi Council, but is attacked in the middle of that recording before he is ultimately captured by Count Dooku. When the character of Count Dooku was first imagined, they were originally going to be a female dark side user, specifically designed to act as a thematic dark opposite to Natalie Portman's Padme Amidala, which is why one of the first versions of the concept art would use Padme's face as a primary reference. A later piece of concept art would then evolve this female Dooku's look to include golden yellow skin and super long flowing strands of hair, very much inspired by the mythical figure Medusa, which honestly would have been super rad. Then Dooku's design would eventually evolve to feature her with a bald head, turtleneck, and curved lightsabers, a design that would ultimately end up being used for Dooku's apprentice, Asajj Ventress. The production was so indecisive about what to do with Dooku that they even envisioned this female Dooku as a kick-ass chrome cyborg. And I gotta say, I am a big fan of that design personally. Like, I really do wish that they adapt this design at some point because I really do think it would work as a really kick-ass villain. But then eventually George Lucas decided that he wanted a much older Dooku, so concept artists started drawing some old Sith women until the sex of the character would be swapped when Christopher Lee was signed on to the movie. With Obi-Wan now in captivity and slowly spinning like a rotisserie chicken at Costco, Count Dooku begins to tell Obi-Wan that the Senate was being controlled by a Dark Lord named Darth Sidious, and that if he and Obi-Wan teamed up, they would be strong enough to overthrow him.
You must join me, Obi-Wan. And together, we will destroy the Sith.
That line by Count Dooku is of course a direct reference to the moment from The Empire Strikes Back when Darth Vader makes a similar offer to Luke Skywalker.
Join me, and together we can rule the galaxy as father and son.
Obi-Wan immediately dismisses this idea by saying that the Jedi would have been able to detect the presence of the Sith's growing influence, yet another demonstration of how arrogant the Jedi have become in their own mastery of the ways of the Force, a major flaw that would lead to their undoing in the following movie. Obi-Wan's beard during this scene is 100% fake, by the way, as the production shot this scene as a part of a series of reshoots. And at the time, Ewan McGregor was starring in the classic feel-good family adventure film of 2001 called Black Hawk Down. I remember watching this on Nick Jr. as a child. It was my favorite memory, right after Blue's Clues. His character, U.S. Army Ranger John Grimes, did not have a lot of hair on his head due to the nature of the role. So, when he was called for reshoots for Attack of the Clones, the makeup team was forced to make a prosthetic beard and wig. Obi-Wan's fake hair can also be seen during Obi-Wan's conversation with Yoda and Mace Windu, as well as Obi-Wan's elevator conversation with Anakin at the very start of the film. After their conversation, we are immediately brought to the Senate building on Coruscant, and outside of the Senate building, we can see a series of statues along the sides of the Avenue of the Core Founders, with each of these statues depicting the very founders of the Galactic Republic, much like the statues in Chancellor Palpatine's office. And after getting Obi-Wan's message, Palpatine manages to manipulate interim Senator Jar Jar Binks into giving him the emergency powers to greenlight the Senate's use of the clone army without getting tied up in political debates, setting the Galactic Republic on a dangerous road to fascism. You gotta love when the Senate does absolutely nothing when a career con man abuses executive orders to secure power for himself. It's one of my favorite things in life. I want more of that. Meanwhile, Anakin and Padme head to Geonosis after getting Obi-Wan's message, eventually making their way to the Geonosians' droid factory, where he and Padme end up fighting for their lives after falling on some dangerous conveyor belts. This scene was also part of the reshoot process and was added into the movie because George Lucas wanted a little bit more suspense added to keep the audience engaged. During the sequence, Anakin's right arm gets pinned underneath some of the assembling machinery, foreshadowing how that same right arm would be replaced by a robotic arm by movie's end. Anakin's lightsaber would also be sliced in two by one of the mechanical cutting arms, leaving Anakin defenseless. That lightsaber is actually based on Darth Vader's Sith lightsaber from the original trilogy. It's literally the same design, but with a chrome tip. And during rehearsals, Hayden Christensen would absentmindedly make the lightsaber whooshing noise when swinging his saber around, which is hilarious considering that Ewan McGregor did the same thing on the set of The Phantom Menace when he first started filming with his lightsaber. But unfortunately, Anakin and Padme would be captured by Jango Fett and a squad of Geonosians. But speaking of the Geonosians, when coming up with the design for these alien creatures, George Lucas would refer to some old concept art that they made for the Neimoidian race for The Phantom Menace. Because originally, the Neimoidians were supposed to look a lot like organic versions of the Trade Federation battle droids. George Lucas then took that look and combined it with the appearance of termites, as George Lucas was dealing with his own termite infestation in his home at the time. Before Anakin and Padme are led out to be chained up and eaten, Padme confesses her deep love for Anakin in the single most unearned romance in cinema history. To be that deeply in love with someone who has shown himself to be extremely obsessive, possessive, and codependent that quickly is absolute madness. But hey, Luke and Leia gotta be born somehow, I guess, so whatever. Like, this moment is so nonsensical that I've always held a personal headcanon that Anakin may have accidentally used his super strong connection to the Force to influence Padme to fall in love with him. Almost like a Jedi mind trick, but with emotions. I mean, the Force and emotions are tightly linked, so it is possible, but the implications of that might be a little bit too dark for either George Lucas or Disney to ever actually reveal. Because that would mean Padme did a whole lot of stuff without her true consent, which is not okay. But anyways, watching Padme and Anakin get chained up alongside Obi-Wan is Count Dooku and his Geonosian colleague, Archduke Poggle the Lesser, the public representative and leader of the Geonosian race. I mean, Poggle isn't the true leader of the Geonosians, as that honor belongs to the Geonosian Queen Karina the Great, who would not be introduced until the frightening Legacy of Terror episode from Clone Wars Season 2, Episode 7. Karina was the one who laid all the Geonosian eggs and could even produce worms that could crawl into the brain of a dead body and reanimate their corpses, which is quite terrifying. Like, I definitely recommend that you guys give that episode a watch if you enjoy horror, because it's quite a fun episode. And also, this is super random, but whoever designed the balcony during the scene must have been down criminally bad, because what the hell is this design? I mean, don't get me wrong, I do appreciate the enthusiasm for that part of the female anatomy, but I think a puss porch in a Star Wars movie is kind of crazy work. This big show takes place in one of the Geonosians' Petranaki arenas, with Petranaki being their term for this cruel gladiator-style execution event. The Geonosians then bring out a couple of alien creatures to dine on our trio of heroes, the first of which is a horned reek creature, who are actually natural herbivores, but will eat meat and flesh if they are starved enough, which the Geonosians have done with this reek that goes for Anakin. The next creature that they bring out is an amphibious reptilian crustacean called an Acklay, and it's a creature that is sent after Obi-Wan Kenobi. In the wild, these predatory creatures typically hunt down their prey by looking for their prey's bioelectrical signature, which they can track down using a weird-looking body part right underneath their chin. Obi-Wan's fight with this Acklay was apparently inspired by a scene where a bunch of men fight a giant crab with poles in the 1961 film Mysterious Island. And lastly, the Geonosians bring out an alien feline called the Nexu for Padme, a creature that has an extra 2 eyes that gives them the infrared vision needed to track down the body heat of their prey during nighttime. And seeing all of these creatures, Anakin says that he has a bad feeling about this, a common Star Wars saying ever since it was first said by our heroes in the Millennium Falcon in A New Hope. But Anakin should have had a better feeling about this, because here come the Jedi to save the day, making their presence known after Mace Windu ignites his lightsaber at Count Dooku's neck. And while this is a very known fact at this point, I would be remiss to mention that Mace Windu's purple lightsaber was specifically requested by actor Samuel L. Jackson himself, who specifically wanted to see where he was at during the chaotic Jedi battle on Geonosis that's about to take place. And after taking some time to think about it, George Lucas would ultimately grant his request, even though it was common for Jedi to only wield blue and green lightsabers at the time. But speaking of Mace Windu's lightsaber, he actually gets a completely new lightsaber hilt in this movie than the one that he is seen wearing in The Phantom Menace, with Mace Windu apparently wanting to switch things up. But honestly, one of my favorite facts about Mace Windu's lightsaber is how it has the letters BMF engraved near the top of his hilt, with BMF of course standing for Bad Motherfucker. This is a reference to Samuel L. Jackson's past role in the film Pulp Fiction, where his character Jules has the word bad motherfucker on his wallet. The Jedi then begin their assault on the Separatist army of droids, eventually leading to Mace Windu chopping off the head of Jango Fett while his son Boba is forced to watch in horror. And in a future act of vengeance, this kid Boba would eventually take down an entire Star Destroyer in an attempt to kill Mace Windu, which was detailed in Season 2, Episode 20 of the Clone Wars animated series. Over the course of this battle, Anakin is handed a temporary new lightsaber with a green emitter, going from blue to green much like his son would eventually do in the original trilogy. But as the Jedi start to be overwhelmed by these separatist forces, Count Dooku compliments Mace Windu's fighting and tells him that he deserves to have his name written amongst the greats in the Jedi archive, just like he himself was given a statue bust of his head. But then, out of nowhere, comes out Master Yoda pulling up with the newly approved clone army, courtesy of Jar Jar Binks. And as most of you can probably already tell, none of the suited clone troopers in this movie are actually real, but are a result of the effects that actually looked pretty damn realistic for the time. And now with a number of their ships and forces having been destroyed by this new threat, Count Dooku and his associates prepare to leave Geonosis. But before they do, Poggle the Lesser gives Count Dooku a copy of the Death Star schematics, showing that Palpatine has had plans to build his ultimate superweapon decades before the fall of the Republic. Now, if this is confusing for those who have watched Rogue One and figured that it was Mad Mikkelsen's Galen Erso who actually designed the Death Star, I can totally understand where you're coming from, because, it's kind of confusing. It was actually the Geonosians themselves that initially designed the Death Star years before Galen Erso was contacted in order to help the Empire with the creation of the Death Star's super laser, as Galen was an expert in harnessing various crystals for energy, especially kyber crystals, which the Death Star uses in order to fire its lasers. So, Jyn Erso's dad basically slightly altered the Geonosians' original design in order to accommodate the proper use of kyber crystals. Count Dooku then takes the plans to give to his master and heads to the hangar to make his big escape, not knowing that Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Padme were hot on his tail. But while trying to get to the hangar, Padme falls out of their low-altitude assault transport ship, causing Anakin to freak out and order that the troops turn the ship around. And although Obi-Wan is able to get Anakin to lock in and prioritize stopping Dooku, you can clearly see how frustrated Anakin is at Obi-Wan during this moment, because Anakin interprets that as yet another way that Obi-Wan Kenobi has gotten in his way when trying to protect the important women in his life. The Jedi eventually arrive just in time to confront Count Dooku, but Anakin, not wanting to be held back by his master anymore, decides to charge Dooku by himself, not thinking about the potential consequences of such an emotionally irrational response. And after a short duel between the two of them, Anakin would eventually get his right arm chopped off before getting hilariously force-pushed away like a sack of potatoes, echoing how he would chop his own son Luke Skywalker's arm off in The Empire Strikes Back. But luckily for both Skywalker boys, they would each get a dope fully functional robotic arm as a replacement. This moment perfectly exemplifies the overall danger of the dark side, because walking the path of the dark side typically leads one to experiencing some sort of physical disfigurement before their ultimate demise. It happened to Darth Maul, it happened to Count Dooku when Anakin chopped his arms off in Revenge of the Sith, and it happened to Emperor Palpatine when he was left immobilized following his resurrection in The Rise of Skywalker. And even though General Grievous wasn't exactly Force-sensitive, he also lived a life of suffering as a part-human cyborg. By giving into his dark-sided anger, Anakin would lose his right arm in this movie before losing even more limbs in the following movie when his dark-sided emotions would cause him to make a risky leap, even though that emo dingus clearly did not have the high ground. However, due to Count Dooku being the master of Obi-Wan's former master Qui-Gon Jinn, Count Dooku would eventually best both of these Jedi. And with Sir Christopher Lee being a whopping 79 years old at the time of filming, he obviously was not able to do all of his stunts during these lightsaber battles. So for the more athletic movements, George Lucas actually just superimposed Christopher Lee's face onto his stunt double, which is quite smart and ingenious for the time. But before he could actually kill them, he would be interrupted by his former master Yoda, and the two of them get into a big old tussle. And when directing his VFX team about Yoda's specific fighting style for his big duel with Dooku, he told them to make Yoda as if, quote-unquote, he was the illegitimate love child between Kermit the Frog and Miss Piggy, which is a really weird thing to say. but he mainly meant it so that the team could focus on making Yoda the bountiest boy in the bayou by having him hopping around like a frog and doing flips and shit. And it's kind of funny that Kermit, a green Muppet, would help inspire the movement of Yoda, a former green puppet voiced by a Muppet actor. And it kind of makes you wonder if the Rainbow Connection and the Force are indeed one and the same. This would of course be the first time that audiences have ever seen Yoda in action with a lightsaber, with showing such a thing to his loyal fans being one of George Lucas's major goals for this movie. But unfortunately, Count Dooku would decide to be a vagina balcony and choose to cheat by threatening Obi-Wan and Anakin's lives, forcing Yoda to have to save them as Dooku makes his escape in his Punwarka 116 class interstellar sloop Solar Sailor. Count Dooku then arrives at Darth Sidious's secret base at the Works in the Coruscant Industrial District and informs the Phantom Menace that the war that he's manufactured is underway. This location is actually the same location that Count Dooku would end up slaying Jedi Master Yaddle shortly after the Battle of Naboo, as we learn in the Tales of the Jedi series on Disney+. And even though the Jedi have won the first battle of the Clone Wars, Obi-Wan and Mace Windu share uneasiness about Dooku's warning about the Phantom Menace controlling the useless Senate. But Yoda warns them to be careful about Dooku's warning, as the Sith like to plant seeds of mistrust in others in order to manipulate them. And yet, despite this, Mace and Obi-Wan still allow Dooku's seed of mistrust to move them to be sort of scared of the Senate itself, leading them to ultimately making the dishonest action of having a conflicted Anakin spy on the Supreme Chancellor in Revenge of the Sith, paving the path towards the Jedi's own destruction. And before the movie ends with Anakin and Padme's wedding on Naboo, footage of Chancellor Palpatine and Princess Leia's future father, Bail Organa, watching the clone army assemble into transport ships is shown with the Imperial March from the original trilogy playing in the background, symbolizing Darth Sidious's victory in finally assembling an army he can use to take over the Republic. But anyways, that is it for this breakdown of the Attack of the Clones from 2002. Let us know what you guys thought of this movie in the comments section down below. This is going to be a breakdown of Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, the Star Wars movie where Anakin kills Dooku at the beginning and goes cuckoo by the end. So let's just go ahead and jump into it, shall we, my nerd babies? Heavy spoilers ahead for pretty much all the Star Wars movies, by the way, so definitely watch all of those before you watch this video. Revenge of the Sith is set 3 years after the events of Attack of the Clones, with the Jedi having fought countless battles against Count Dooku and a number of his colleagues in the years between, which is of course covered in the Clone Wars animated series. If you love Star Wars but have not watched the Clone Wars animated series because it's quote-unquote a kid's show, you are doing yourself a major disservice because it really does explain the overall Star Wars lore in crucial ways that helps you understand a lot of stuff in the movies. I know everybody isn't exactly into cartoons, but if you love Star Wars, you owe it to yourself to give the show a watch. It's honestly not that bad. But yeah, Revenge of the Sith is actually the first Star Wars movie in history to actually earn a PG-13 rating, which makes sense considering that this is probably the most heavy Star Wars film to date. I mean, we literally see kids get caught up in a school sabering. Is he allowed to say that? Before watching Anakin get cooked alive on a volcano planet. So that PG-13 rating is more than deserved. And pretty much every Star Wars movie from Episode 3 onwards has been rated PG-13 to the lament of every 12-year-old Star Wars nerd in the galaxy. The title Revenge of the Sith was actually heavily inspired by George Lucas's original Revenge of the Jedi title for Episode 6, before he would ultimately change that title to Return of the Jedi. George Lucas would save the revenge word for this movie due to this movie being primarily focused on the rise of the Sith. Vengeance is of course not supposed to be in a Jedi's nature, so calling Return of the Jedi Revenge of the Jedi would have clashed with the peaceful Jedi philosophy that would inspire Luke Skywalker to throw his lightsaber away in the face of Emperor Palpatine. And much like most Star Wars films, after the opening crawl, we are greeted with the sight of a massive space cruiser floating in space, with this ship being a Venator-class Star Destroyer, with Venator actually being the Latin word for hunter. The design for this Venator ship was inspired by both military aircraft carriers as well as the F-16XL fighter jet. However, the design of this dope Empire shirt is inspired by Andor and Star Wars, and one that you can pick up along with the rest of our awesome shirts over at the Heavy Spoilers merch store. On the front of this shirt is a little Death Star, while a giant TIE fighter covered in the Aurebesh Star Wars language is nice and big on the back. Our boy Sheridan designed these shirts himself, and we are really proud of him and his work. We've also got a new Solitude shirt inspired by the 2025 Superman movie, along with other dope designs inspired by properties like Fantastic Four and Predator. So head on over to the Heavy Spoilers merch store ASAP to get some for your body while supplies last. Because these supplies be going, let me tell you. And pretty much right away, the audience can tell that a good time has passed since the last movie, as Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi seem to be a lot more connected as a master and apprentice duo, as the two can be seen flying in perfect sync with one another. And when we first met Hayden Christensen's Anakin in Attack of the Clones, Anakin was significantly more out of step with his master, constantly asking why instead of following his lead. And though this part of Anakin is still very much inside of him, you can see that he has a greater appreciation of following the direction of his master this time around. And this actually makes sense within the overall context of the Star Wars canon, as by now in Anakin's journey, he has had to instruct a pupil of his own in the form of the Togrutan Ahsoka Tano, a character that would not be introduced into the overall Star Wars lore until the 2008 Clone Wars animated film that preceded the Clone Wars animated series. Ahsoka was oftentimes side by side with Anakin as they served as leaders of multiple clone squads, until Ahsoka would ultimately decide to leave the Jedi Order. And Anakin Skywalker's pilot call sign is Red 5, much like Luke Skywalker's was in the original trilogy, while Obi-Wan Kenobi holds the title of Red Leader, which was a call sign that originally belonged to Wedge Antilles in the original trilogy, with Wedge Antilles actor Dennis Lawson being the uncle of Obi-Wan Kenobi actor Ewan McGregor. It is more than fitting for the Red Leader call sign to be passed down to Lawson's nephew. For this opening battle sequence over the city planet of Coruscant, the VFX team was tasked to make it as visually chaotic as possible, and man did they succeed. They basically threw everything but the kitchen sink in there, to be honest. Just kidding, there is actually a kitchen sink included there as well, which appears as a piece of debris that shoots off of one of the exploding Separatist ships before hitting one of the Republic Venator ships. It's super tiny and barely noticeable, but you can see it around the 3-minute mark if you watch the movie on Disney+. And as the Jedi attempt to make their way to the cruiser containing Supreme Chancellor Palpatine, a number of clone pilots are gunned down, leading to Anakin expressing deep concern for them to the point of telling Obi-Wan that he was going to divert from their main mission in order to help keep them alive. And even though Obi-Wan ultimately gets Anakin to focus on the mission assigned to him by the Senate and the Jedi, Anakin's concern for his Clone War buddies displays Anakin's deep levels of attachment towards people that he knows. And we would see Anakin express a similar type of concern for Obi-Wan not too long after this, when Obi-Wan's ship is attacked by a group of Pistoika sabotage droids, aka Buzz droids. And despite Obi-Wan ordering Anakin to ignore him and focus on getting Chancellor Palpatine, Anakin firmly tells his master that he's not leaving without him before doing all he could to try to save Obi-Wan from dying. However, in Anakin's attempt to save his Jedi father figure, he accidentally shoots and damages one of the wings on Obi-Wan's ship, a moment that I found to be symbolic towards the overall idea of how potentially destructive Anakin's attachment style can be. And even though Anakin was clearly just trying to help his homie, he was so blinded by his own fear of losing Obi-Wan that he accidentally almost caused the very thing that he didn't want to happen. And this is reflective of what ultimately happens between Anakin Skywalker's relationship with Padme Amidala by the end of the film, as Anakin would end up force choking the woman that he loved the most in order to keep his enemy from taking her from him, which would then lead to Anakin causing Padme to die, the very thing that he was trying to avoid. But yeah, as these buzz droids destroy Obi-Wan's astromech R4 while trying to slice into Obi-Wan's ship, like the heartless astromech murderers that they are, we can see that they pop out of these yellow and black balls with a honeycomb-like hexagon design on the inside, evoking the imagery and concept of a bee in a beehive. And speaking of Obi-Wan Kenobi's ship here, on the side of Obi-Wan's ETA-2 Actis class light interceptor is Obi-Wan's kill count as a war pilot, with each of those kills being marked with a tiny white ship in the shape of droid tri-fighters. And yes, while this does help Obi-Wan Kenobi look pretty badass, it's also not the best look. The Jedi starfighters were never supposed to be used for the purpose of war. So, while it is impressive that Obi-Wan Kenobi was able to down so many Separatist ships, it is also a symptom of how far the Jedi have strayed from their original mission of being merely peacekeepers in the galaxy rather than soldiers and generals. Also on Obi-Wan's starfighter is this red and yellow circular symbol here, a symbol for Obi-Wan Kenobi's open circle armada. And it's a symbol that usually shows up on the Star Destroyers that General Kenobi has command over. And while Anakin and Obi-Wan approach the enemy hangar while the hangar doors are being closed, Obi-Wan says that,
"Oh, I have a bad feeling about this."
A common saying in the Star Wars universe since it was first said by one of our heroes in A New Hope. And after the two Jedi just barely crash land into the hangar, they head straight for the Chancellor before we transition to our first scene with that semi-mechanical menace, General Grievous, played by Matthew Wood, the supervising sound editor for this movie, as well as the previous two prequels before it. And this isn't the first role that Matthew would play in Star Wars, as he would previously play the silent role of Jabba the Hutt's Major Domo Bib Fortuna in The Phantom Menace, before providing the voices for background aliens Magaluf and Saboka in Attack of the Clones. And one of the most notable things about General Grievous is his constant coughing, a result of his cybernetic enhancements courtesy of the Sith, with a side of directorial bronchitis. Apparently, director George Lucas was pretty damn sick with a case of bronchitis for a period of the Revenge of the Sith production, and because of this, George Lucas would come to work with a rather phlegmy cough in his chest, which Lucas would eventually record and use for General Grievous's coughing sound effects, which is quite genius. The directors that can turn a shitty situation into gold are the best types of directors in my opinion, and Grievous wasn't always a cyborg called Grievous. In fact, he used to be a flesh and blood member of the Kaleesh alien race known as Kaimane Hai Shalal. And if you ever wondered what his face looks like without his metal mask, the 2019 comic Age of Republic General Grievous gives us a good look at his ugly ass Kaleesh face. Wow, that came out a lot more racist than I intended, but just look at his face, man. If I look like a weird bad person, I too would replace my body with weird robotic spider body parts. The Kaleeshi people were actually a merciless and apathetic warrior species, and because of this, they would often wear the skeletons of their most proud kills on their faces to cover up all of that ugly. And on Grievous's path to becoming a prominent warlord on his homeworld of Kalee, he would eventually kill one of the most deadly creatures on his home planet called a Moo.
What does the moo cow say?
And wore its skeleton for a mask, and would later use this Moo skeleton mask as the basis for the metal mask that he wears as a cyborg Jedi killer. His culture's affinity for taking the body parts of their enemies is partially what fueled General Grievous's passion for collecting the lightsabers of all the Jedi that he's slain, combined with his deep hatred, disdain, and jealousy for the Jedi because of their unfair advantage of being able to use the Force to win their battles. So he hunts them for the satisfaction of conquering living beings that are naturally stronger than he is. The Kaleeshi species would eventually be visited by another warlike species of praying mantis-like insect aliens known as the Yamri, with the Yamri race making their first appearance in the background of the Mos Eisley Cantina scene in A New Hope. Their arrival would lead Grievous and his primitive people to wage years of wars with this far more technologically advanced race. But unfortunately for Grievous, the Yamri would eventually seek aid in their war against the Kaleeshi from the Galactic Republic themselves, leading to the Kaleeshi to suffer a massive loss of life on top of a heap of galactic fines and embargoes on their planet. And this being the case, Grievous's anger at the Republic and the Jedi grew exponentially, which eventually caught the attention of the Sith before Grievous would transition to working with the Intergalactic Banking Clan as their muscle. However, because the Intergalactic Banking Clan would not allow Grievous to bring his squad of Kaleeshi bodyguards with him, Grievous would request special droids be made to replace them, which would result in the creation of the IG-100 series Magna Guard combat droids that Grievous would train himself before clothing them in the Kaleeshi cloaks that his old bodyguards used to wear. Every Magna Guard combat droid was equipped with an electro staff that was able to withstand being destroyed with a lightsaber due to their near indestructibility. This is because the staffs themselves were made out of a special metal called frick.
What's the frick?
And because of its resilient properties, Darth Sidious himself would also use this strong frick metal to construct his two lightsabers, preventing his lightsaber hilts from being sliced in lightsaber combat, which is quite smart. But yeah, as Grievous fought for the Separatists, he would eventually volunteer to upgrade his body with cybernetic body parts and implants to help him become a more efficient Jedi Slayer, with Grievous becoming more and more psychologically unhinged with every surgery. Eventually, Grievous's body would evolve to such a degree that the Sith themselves would apparently grow kind of scared of him, which would lead Count Dooku to secretly arranging for one of Grievous's troop transport shuttles to crash, leaving Grievous at death's door. And in order to save his life, Grievous's already enhanced cybernetic body would be further enhanced into the nearly fully robotic state that we see in this movie, with the only remaining body organs that he still had being his eyes, heart, liver, spine, and bone marrow, along with some damaged lungs, some important chunks of his brain, and a few other vital organs.
Did you make a penis?
Dude! With General Grievous now having very little organic body parts left, he no longer possesses the same connection to the Force that other living beings have. Because with every surgery that he underwent that replaced a part of his body with lifeless metal, he became less and less connected to the Force, because those organic body parts also housed his midichlorians as well. And even though Grievous had no intention of becoming a Force user like Count Dooku, now that Dooku had most of Grievous's midichlorians removed, Dooku didn't have to really worry about Grievous somehow surpassing him as a more valuable tool to be used by Darth Sidious, because someone with no midichlorians can never truly become one of the two core Sith Lords. Before he was designed as a killer cyborg, General Grievous was initially imagined as a little blue-skinned boy genius on a floating chair with two IG-88 droids guarding him and obeying every one of his commands, almost like a little Grand Admiral Thrawn. But then Lucas would abandon that idea and try to craft Grievous into a full-on droid. And this is about when concept art of Grievous would be made that would ultimately become the design for Grievous's Magna Guard. But eventually, after some trial and error, they would arrive at the Grievous design that we all know and love. A design that would be seen in motion for the very first time in the 2D animated Clone Wars series from 2003, the non-canon series that debuted before the 3D animated Clone Wars series 5 years later in 2008. And in one of the deleted scenes for the film, General Grievous is actually seen killing a captured Jedi Master Shaak Ti as Anakin and Obi-Wan navigate their way around the Separatist cruiser.
We've been waiting for you, stinking Jedi.
But if you thought that Star Wars creators were done with murdering this poor woman, think again! Because when the Force Unleashed video game came out in 2008, gamers would experience the death of Shaak Ti once again after she loses a battle against the overpowered legend and the main character of the game, Starkiller.
The Sith always betray one another. But I'm sure you'll learn that soon enough.
However, this would not be enough for the publishers of The Force Unleashed, so they decided to make a completely new Shaak Ti death scene for their mobile port of the game for the Nokia N-Gage console. Remember the N-Gage? If you say yes, then you're probably over 30 and wondering why your back always hurts. I know I do. It's because I'm sedentary. But then when LEGO Star Wars The Complete Saga came out in 2007, we would see Anakin chopping Shaak Ti's head off as well. But all of these deaths are of course considered non-canon. The actual canonical death for Shaak Ti was shown in Season 6, Episode 11 of the Clone Wars 3D animated series, when Yoda has a vision of Shaak Ti being murdered by Darth Vader. Yoda's vision does resemble that deleted scene where Anakin stabs Shaak Ti from behind as she meditates, but we can't really see where she is in this vision, so we can't really say whether or not this vision makes that particular deleted scene 100% canon. But anyways, when Obi-Wan and Anakin finally find Supreme Chancellor Palpatine, the Chancellor can be seen in a big chair looking out into outer space. A clear bit of foreshadowing towards Emperor Palpatine's throne in the original trilogy, as he would oftentimes be staring at the darkness of the cosmos on his big old throne, contemplating on how to make everyone's life worse for his own benefit. Having Palpatine sit in this chair was a great way to illustrate and foreshadow that everything is going according to the Phantom Menace's plan. Because even though it looks like he's in uncomfortable captivity here, he's actually extremely comfortable doing one of the things that he loves to do best, staring out into the dark void of outer space. But soon after, the Jedi are greeted by Count Dooku, played once again by the late and great Sir Christopher Lee. And at the start of their fight, Anakin warns Count Dooku that his powers have doubled since the last time that they met, leading Dooku to say the words, "Good, twice the pride, double the fall." That was a terrible impression. And while this is clearly meant to be a taunt to the Jedi, Count Dooku is demonstrating how the Sith are very much aware of the pride that Jedi like Anakin Skywalker have, and how that very pride can be used to manipulate a Jedi to fall. Which is exactly what we see throughout this movie when Darth Sidious stokes Anakin's pride along with his fear in order to get him to fall to the dark side. And as their fight continues, Obi-Wan gets pinned underneath a platform after getting knocked out by Dooku, forcing Anakin to duel with Dooku all by himself. And it's also around this time that Chancellor Palpatine was originally supposed to tell Anakin that it was Count Dooku himself who ordered the Tusken Raiders to kill Anakin's mother Shmi Skywalker in Attack of the Clones, in a clear effort to get Anakin to embrace his inner dark-sided anger and strike down his apprentice Darth Tyrannus. And though director George Lucas would end up cutting out this line as well, saying such a thing to a Skywalker is definitely within Palpatine's character, as we would see Emperor Palpatine attempt to stoke Luke Skywalker's own rage when he tried to convince Luke to strike down his apprentice Darth Vader in anger in order for him to become his new apprentice. Palpatine's silver tongue truly is his most powerful weapon. But unlike in the last movie, Anakin would be doing the hand cutting this time around after taking Dooku's lightsaber and vengefully cutting both of his hands off, making up for the hand that Dooku took from him. With Dooku now at Anakin's mercy, Palpatine begins to show Anakin his true colors by encouraging Anakin to kill Dooku instead of taking Dooku prisoner to stand trial before the Galactic Senate. And I love how George Lucas symbolically has Anakin holding his blue lightsaber and Dooku's red Sith lightsaber at Dooku's neck, as it clearly reflects the internal struggle between Anakin's own light and dark sides within himself. After his previous lightsaber was destroyed in the droid factory on Geonosis during the events of Attack of the Clones, Anakin was given a new and very memorable lightsaber, once again with a blue emitter. This is of course the very same lightsaber that old Ben Kenobi would give to Luke Skywalker at the very beginning of A New Hope. But yeah, during Anakin's moment of hesitation, Count Dooku was originally supposed to beg young Skywalker to keep his head attached to his body. However, George Lucas would end up changing his mind after Christopher Lee himself objected to those lines, as Christopher Lee thought that Count Dooku would never be a bitch like that. But Anakin would of course give in to his dark-sided nature and send Dooku straight to the big cookout in the pits of hell. And even though Count Dooku was always meant to die by Anakin's hand, he was originally supposed to survive a lot longer than this, initially being the person that Anakin Skywalker was meant to kill in order to fully complete his journey to the dark side. However, George Lucas would ultimately decide to save that big moment for Mace Windu later on in the movie when Anakin would chop his hand off too. And this is mostly because Samuel L. Jackson himself specifically requested that Mace Windu not get a lame-ass death. You know, like Kit Fisto does in this movie. Dude lasted 2 seconds with Darth Sidious. That's what she said, I don't know, whatever. And speaking of Mace Windu, after Anakin gives the killing blow on Count Dooku, Palpatine congratulates him, telling him that Dooku was far too dangerous to be kept alive. A line that Mace Windu would actually say to Anakin about Darth Sidious when he had Sidious cornered a little bit later in the movie. A great way that George Lucas shows the audience how Mace Windu himself was led by his own deep fear of Darth Sidious to committing a dishonest, dark-sided action. Because much like in the case of Anakin, Mace Windu would be convinced that taking justice in his own hands by killing an unarmed opponent would be the best course of action in order to keep the Sith from growing. A deeply hypocritical action that stood against everything the Jedi and Senate stood for. And it would actually be this exact line of thinking that would end up troubling an older Luke Skywalker in the sequel trilogy. Because after Luke spent a decade of his life attempting to be exactly like Mace Windu and the Jedi of old, he too would adopt Mace Windu's fear of the dark side and the Sith and ignite his lightsaber against his nephew without thinking, acting purely on fight or flight instinct. But yeah, Anakin then frees Palpatine while expressing guilt about what he just did. But Palpatine would remind him that he has done murderous stuff like this before, referencing the time when Anakin went apeshit on a clan of Tusken Raiders who were responsible for the murder of his mother. And as soon as Palpatine brings that up, we can hear the sounds of screaming Tusken Raiders faintly in the background. A great audio cue by George Lucas to show how that slaughter still echoes in Anakin's mind. Then Palpatine the sociopath encourages Anakin to leave Obi-Wan Kenobi behind in order to save themselves. But an attached Anakin would refuse to do so, choosing to carry his unconscious body instead. And as the three of them try to make their way off of General Grievous's Providence-class carrier called the Invisible Hand, the ship begins to engage the Republic forces, leading to us getting a classic Wilhelm scream after one of the Invisible Hand's torpedoes hits one of the Venator Star Destroyers. But eventually, Obi-Wan Kenobi would wake up not too long before the three of them and R2-D2 are captured by General Grievous. But thanks to R2-D2 being the most clutch droid of all time, the Jedi are able to escape their bonds and immediately start fighting Grievous's battle droids and Magna Guards. However, because Grievous is a robo-bitch, he would jump out into the void of space, leaving Anakin to safely pilot the crashing cruiser onto the surface of Coruscant, a feat that only someone with Anakin's extremely high midichlorian count could do. And after Anakin and Obi-Wan have themselves this happy landing on Coruscant, we are shown an overhead shot of several ships docked at a local spaceport, with one of those ships being a Corellian YT-1300 light freighter, the same type of ship as the Millennium Falcon, famously flown by ace pilots Han Solo and Chewbacca in the original trilogy and beyond. This wild and highly suspenseful opening centered around the rescue of Chancellor Palpatine was actually originally cut to be a little bit over an hour long, which is absolutely crazy. Apparently, the original cut of the full Revenge of the Sith movie was supposed to be 4 hours in length, but George Lucas had the restraint to cut out a lot of the fat. But yeah, with Chancellor Palpatine now back safely on Coruscant, he has a chat with Samuel L. Jackson's Mace Windu about prioritizing the capture of General Grievous. And behind Palpatine during this moment are both of George Lucas's daughters, Amanda Lucas and Katie Lucas, with Amanda playing the red-haired Senator Tur Tonil on the left, and Katie Lucas playing the blue Pantoran Senator Chi Ikwe. Chi Ikwe is actually the daughter of one Baron Nawaliski Papanoida, played by none other than director George Lucas himself. Lucas would appear alongside Katie right outside of Palpatine's booth at the Opera House a little bit later on in the film. This Pantoran family actually plays a role in the Sphere of Influence Clone Wars episode from Season 3, Episode 4, alongside Baron Papanoida's son Ion Papanoida and his other daughter, Shay Amanwe Papanoida, whose characters were modeled after George Lucas's two other kids, Jet and Amanda Lucas. This blue-skinned Pantoran species was originally supposed to be an offshoot of the Twi'lek race, and Chi Ikwe even had an action figure of herself as a Twi'lek, but that was merely a mistake. And after this, Anakin and Senator Bail Organa have a quick chat that ends with the camera placing Natalie Portman's Padme Amidala directly behind Senator Bail Organa's shoulder, subtly foreshadowing how Bail Organa would become the adoptive father of Padme's daughter Leia. But speaking of Bail Organa and the Senate, we were actually supposed to get our first official appearance of actress Genevieve O'Reilly as Senator Mon Mothma in this movie, replacing actress Caroline Blackiston, who played the character in the original trilogy. George Lucas actually filmed O'Reilly in a few scenes where Mon Mothma, Bail Organa, Padme Amidala, and a few other senators all met in secret in order to discuss Palpatine's undemocratic hold over the Senate and how to ensure that they don't lose their galactic democracy. And this group of senators were part of an overall group called the Delegation of 2000, which consisted of 2,000 senators who would petition for Palpatine to let go of the emergency powers that the Senate gave him in Attack of the Clones.
Do you think he'll dismantle the Senate?
Why bother? As a practical matter, the Senate no longer exists.
The Constitution is in shreds, amendment after amendment.
We cannot let 1,000 years of democracy disappear without a fight.
But of course, even though Genevieve O'Reilly would be cut from Revenge of the Sith, she would be contacted to return as Mon Mothma for Disney's productions of Rogue One and Andor. But yeah, soon after Palpatine is reunited with the Senate, Anakin is reunited with his beloved Padme Amidala, who would tell Anakin of her pregnancy while wearing circular hair buns, much like Princess Leia would wear in the original trilogy. And after the two celebrate the good news, we transition to General Grievous arriving on the planet Utapau. Utapau is actually a name that George Lucas really wanted to give to one of his planets in the Star Wars universe for a long time before this movie.
But why?
In fact, Utapau was actually the name that George Lucas was originally going to give the planet Tatooine in A New Hope before he would change his mind. Then, decades later, when it came time for Lucas to write The Phantom Menace, he would mess around with the idea of naming Padme and Palpatine's homeworld Utapau before he would ultimately decide on naming it Naboo instead. And I also find it hilarious how when General Grievous arrives on Utapau, he completely ignores all the separatist leaders who all gathered to greet him, heading straight to a conference room to talk directly to Darth Sidious himself, appearing in hologram form for the first time since The Phantom Menace. We literally got no hologram Palpatine whatsoever in Attack of the Clones, which is kind of wild. Palpatine then orders Grievous to move all the separatist leaders to the volcanic planet Mustafar. Then we transition to Anakin chilling at Padme's apartment, completely ignoring Padme as she talks about her plans for their new baby because he was so focused on Padme's beauty, which in my eyes shows how much Anakin values Padme's physical beauty more than her actual words, very much in line with how he acted towards Padme in Attack of the Clones. And later that night, Anakin's midichlorians would plague his dreams with visions from the cosmic force, prophesying the coming death of his beloved Padme during childbirth, which would eventually lead him to seeking guidance from Master Yoda. And when we transition to that scene, we can see that there are 4 statues placed right outside the Jedi Temple. These are, of course, the 4 Jedi Masters who first built the Jedi Temple on Coruscant many years in the past, with 2 of these Jedi being Warrior Masters and the other 2 being classified as Sage Masters. However, their identities and backstories have yet to be explored in Star Wars canon, which is a huge shame because I feel like the story of the Jedi founders would make for an excellent movie, or at least a novel at the very least. And during Yoda's conversation with Anakin, Yoda tells him that his dreams are an indication that he is at risk of allowing his fear of loss to drive him towards the dark side, and that Anakin should merely learn to let go of everything he fears to lose, attempting to encourage Anakin by reminding him that death is something to be celebrated, because it means that someone that we love is now one with the cosmic force once again. Because from the cosmic force everyone came, and to the cosmic force everybody will return when they die. This conversation, of course, takes place within Yoda's dark chambers, with only tiny bits of light being allowed through the window blinds. I feel like this lighting was a very intentional decision by George Lucas in order to emphasize the idea of how even the brightest lights can cast shadows on our hearts if we let them. Padme Amidala was the brightest light of Anakin's life, as he literally saw Padme as some sort of angelic figure ever since he was a small boy. However, it would be Anakin's deep fear of losing Padme that would cast a shadow over his heart, and the lighting in the scene very much reflects that idea. However, although this idea of letting go of everything one fears to lose is all nice and all, it's also extremely unrealistic for most sentient living beings with emotions. And that statement from Yoda very much reflects one of the biggest problems with the Jedi cult: their misguided belief that attachments and one's emotions about their various attachments will inevitably lead to the dark side and thus complete ruin. Like I've brought up in my breakdowns of The Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, the Jedi's fear of the dark side was their biggest folly. And for all of their constant preaching against fearful emotions, they were blind to how their own fear of fear itself was leading them towards their own demise. Instead of trying to help Anakin find a better balance with his overly obsessive attachments, like Qui-Gon Jinn would have, Jedi leaders like Yoda merely told Anakin to bury those emotions and to let his strong bond with Padme fizzle out so that he wouldn't be tempted to embrace feelings of fear, anger, and hate. However, because this request is unreasonable for most people who aren't detached monks, Anakin would inevitably lose control and make the drastic decision to go from 0 to 100 with his dark side enthusiasm, especially when the possibility of using the dark side to prolong both his and Padme's lives is dangled in front of him a little bit later on. And one of my absolutely favorite moments from the recent Disney Plus series The Acolyte is when the Jedi of the High Republic era are straight up called out for this unrealistic approach to human emotions by Senator Rayancourt.
I think the Jedi are a massive system of unchecked power, posing as a religion, a delusional cult that claims to control the uncontrollable.
We don't control the Force.
Not the Force. Your emotions. You project an image of goodness and restraint. But it's only a matter of time before one of you snaps. And when, not if that happens, who will be strong enough to stop him?
Anakin then goes to catch up with his master Obi-Wan Kenobi, who gives him an update on how the battles on the Outer Rim are going. Obi-Wan then mentions Jedi Master Quinlan Vos by name, with Quinlan Vos himself having made a secret appearance on Tatooine in The Phantom Menace. If you guys want to hear more about that, be sure to check out our breakdown on The Phantom Menace here on Heavy Spoilers, after you guys subscribe and all that. Obi-Wan mentions that Quinlan Vos is stationed on a planet named Boz Pity, a planet that actually made its first appearance in Star Wars Obsession issue number 4 from 2005, a comic that is now in the non-canon Legends continuity. Obi-Wan then informs Anakin that Chancellor Palpatine wishes to see him, before expressing his deep reservations about Anakin being so close to a Chancellor rising in power, with the Senate about to vote even more power to Palpatine than he was given at the beginning of the Clone Wars. However, despite Obi-Wan's reservations, Anakin agrees with the idea of Palpatine being able to sidestep all the opinions and bickering of the Senate in order to get things done, much like he told Padme when they were on their first date in Attack of the Clones. Obi-Wan and the Jedi's growing fear of Chancellor Palpatine was actually a seed purposely implanted within them by Count Dooku in Attack of the Clones when he straight up told Obi-Wan Kenobi that Darth Sidious was secretly manipulating the Senate from the shadows. And Dooku played the Jedi brilliantly, as their fear of the boogeyman hiding amongst them has grown over the years, eventually getting them to the point of deep suspicion of the Chancellor. And that fearful suspicion would then trigger their hatred for the dark side of the Force. And it would be that hatred that would then trigger the Jedi to start embracing their own dark sides, as they were completely willing to start considering doing dishonest and illegal things like political espionage in order to make sure that their religious enemy did not take their position of galactic power, because they've had that power for like 1,000 years by this point. And that fear of the Chancellor only grew stronger following Palpatine's decision to make Anakin his chief representative to the Jedi Council, an honor typically reserved for Jedi who have reached the rank of Master, which Anakin had not done yet at that point, only being a mere Jedi Knight. And this was an excellent move by Darth Sidious, as Anakin's new position as his representative would force the Jedi Council to have a discussion on whether or not they truly believed that Anakin was worthy to have the title of Jedi Master, with Palpatine knowing damn well that the Council would never let someone as emotional and obsessive as Anakin amongst their number on the Council. And because Sidious had been spending the last few years stroking Anakin's ego and telling him how stupid the Jedi were for not recognizing his strength and talents, he also knew damn well that Anakin's deep fear of being held back by the Jedi would trigger that boy to crash out eventually. And speaking of the Jedi Council, the Council has gone through a few changes over the course of the 3 years of the Clone Wars. Obi-Wan has been given a seat on the Council, taking the seat that once belonged to Jedi Master Evan Peel, who was slain in the line of duty in Season 3, Episode 20 of the Clone Wars series. And we also have the Green Nautilin Kit Fisto on the Council, who took the spot of the Jedi Coleman Trebor, who was gunned down by Jango Fett in Attack of the Clones. But the Jedi Order would get another Jedi with the name Coleman onto their squad when Coleman Kaj of the horrifically ugly Ongri species joined the Council to fill the seat of Jedi Master Deba Balabo. Coleman Kaj was actually named after the son of the movie's animation director, Rob Coleman, whose name was Jack Coleman. So they basically just flipped the first and last name and then spelled Jack backwards. The Thalothian Jedi Adi Gallia would be slain by Darth Maul's brother Savage Opress over the course of the Clone Wars, so her seat was offered to her cousin Stas Ali. Jedi Master Ali wasn't actually intended to be a character at all, as she was actually originally supposed to be Jedi Master Adi Gallia outright. However, because the production was filming in Australia that time around, as opposed to England, instead of bringing back actress Jyn Clark, the production thought that they could be slick and recast Miss Clark without anybody knowing. But after they hired actress Lily Nyamwasa, they were like, oh shit, this woman looks nothing like Jyn Clark. So they just made a completely new character that just coincidentally dresses exactly like Jedi Master Adi Gallia in every way. And a similar thing happened with the Zabrak Jedi Master Eth Koth, who was played by actor Hassani Shapi in The Phantom Menace. They would attempt to recast him for Attack of the Clones, but realized that actor Tux Akindoyeni wasn't a convincing enough double, so they created a new character named Ajan Kolar, who also sits on the Council in this movie. Jedi Master Eth Koth would end up being removed from the Jedi Council, which would cause that Jedi to leave the Order completely to start a family of his own. A family that would be ripped apart by Darth Vader himself in Darth Vader number 19 from 2018. Then we transition to the galaxy's opera house on the planet Coruscant, where Anakin accompanies Chancellor Palpatine to watch a bunch of Mon Calamari aliens swim around giant floating bubbles of water. This entire opera sequence wasn't actually initially intended for the movie, with director George Lucas originally envisioning this conversation going down in Palpatine's office, like many of his previous conversations with Anakin tend to take place. However, it's because of that fact that George Lucas wanted this special conversation topic to take place somewhere where the two of them have never been before. The name of the ballet being performed here is called Squid Lake, and again was produced by the Mon Calamari species, the same aquatic species that the iconic Admiral Akbar belongs to. The Squid Lake name is actually a play on Swan Lake, a name of a famous Russian ballet. And it's a ballet that centers around a prince named Siegfried, who becomes infatuated with a woman named Odette that was cursed by an evil sorcerer to appear as a swan by day and a hot human lady when the sun goes down. A spell that can only be undone if this hot swan lady can get someone who has never fallen in love before to fall for her. You know, kind of like Beauty and the Beast style. Then this evil wizard would then attempt to get the prince to fall in love with his own daughter by transforming her to look like that hot swan lady, leading the prince to getting engaged to the wrong woman by accident. The swan lady sees this and has her heart absolutely shattered, eventually leading the prince to rush back to the lake where he met that hot swan lady in the first place after he realized that he was being manipulated by the wizard. However, Odette would be too heartbroken to go on, choosing to die rather than continue an existence of sadness. And seeing his true love now dead, Siegfried decides to pull a Romeo and Juliet and put an end to his own life, leading to the two of them to be happily reunited in the afterlife. That all being said, it's not very hard to find the symbolic parallels in that story that help foreshadow Anakin's own tragic romance with his own swan Padme Amidala, played by a Natalie Portman who would ironically later star in the psychological thriller of a ballet movie called Black Swan. Like Odette, Padme had a curse of her own, as the path that the Force set for her would eventually lead her to her own death. And much like how Siegfried perceived that Odette was not allowed to be her true self until the world was covered in the darkness of night, Anakin too felt like if he embraced the dark side of the Force, Padme would be allowed to live her best life. However, like Siegfried, Anakin would be manipulated by a dark wizard into committing actions that would break Odette's heart, leading to Padme losing the will to live, according to that medical droid that was monitoring Padme in labor later on in the film. And this will then lead to Anakin ending his own life and becoming the Sith Lord Darth Vader, paralleling Siegfried's own death. So, having this iconic Star Wars scene about the story of a Sith tragedy take place in front of a play inspired by a romantic tragedy that foreshadows the main character's upcoming tragedy in this film is extremely fitting. Palpatine then tells Anakin of the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise, the former Dark Lord of the Sith, who apparently learned how to use the Force in order to cheat the natural process of death. Plagueis the Wise is of course the former master of Darth Sidious, the apprentice who would ultimately kill Darth Plagueis in his sleep. George Lucas originally intended for Darth Plagueis to be a member of the Neimoidian species, as we can see with this piece of early concept art. But when Lucas would decide to not include Plagueis in Revenge of the Sith, he would change Darth Plagueis' race to the Moon Race, the same race of big-headed bald aliens that ran the Intergalactic Banking Clan, a core organization in the CIS army. And throughout Darth Sidious's entire apprenticeship, he and his master Darth Plagueis spent their time studying the science behind midichlorians, the very microscopic life forms that live in the cells of every living thing in perfect symbiosis. Much like I went over in my breakdown of The Phantom Menace that you can check out here on Heavy Spoilers anytime you want. Subscribe today, you big dingus! And because midichlorians are these tiny little sentient life forms that connect living beings to the Force itself, midichlorians can also apparently be used to create, sustain, and even transfer one's life force to keep one from death. And it seems like Emperor Palpatine would use this same midichlorian science in order to resurrect himself after making a super powerful clone body that he could transfer his life force into after his original body was destroyed by Anakin Skywalker in Return of the Jedi. Anakin Skywalker's existence is one that is primarily owed to midichlorians within his birth mother randomly creating the cells that would make up Anakin Skywalker without the need for a biological father to donate some dude goo. Like, midichlorians are powerful stuff, man. Darth Sidious wasn't the only apprentice of Darth Plagueis, as we have recently learned in the Acolyte TV series that the mysterious stranger known as Kymir seems to have some sort of close connection to the mysterious Sith Lord, as he made his first ever live-action appearance at the very end of the series. The assassination of Darth Plagueis at the hands of Darth Sidious is of course nothing new for the Sith religion, and happens quite often due to one of the core tenets of the Sith Creed called the Rule of Two.
Always two there are, no more, no less. A master and an apprentice.
This rule was established by former Dark Lord of the Sith, Darth Bane, and he made the Rule of Two for the specific purpose of allowing the Sith to rebuild their shattered order in secret under the noses of the Jedi, who were growing in influence after the Sith were defeated in the Great Jedi-Sith War about 1,000 years before the events of the prequels. Because the Sith were destroyed in large part due to them warring amongst themselves like catty teenage girls, one of the Sith's survivors named Darth Bane said enough was enough. Bro was tired of all these motherfreaking Sith and his motherfreaking cult, so he decided to limit his new Sith cult to just 2 people, a master and an apprentice. However, even though Darth Bane made this rule to stop all the Sith infighting, at the end of the day, Sith are gonna Sith. And for the past millennia, Sith masters have been assassinating their apprentices for new apprentices, and Sith apprentices have been murdering their masters to become masters themselves. And that's exactly what the Legends book, Darth Plagueis, from 2012 tells us that Darth Plagueis did to his former master, Darth Tenebrous, which would eventually lead to Plagueis getting a taste of his own karma at the hands of Darth Sidious many years later. But while the Rule of Two is definitely old as hell, it actually comes from a far older Force belief known as the Doctrine of the Dyad, which is rooted in the concept of the Force Dyad, which is a powerful bond between 2 powerful Force users that allows them to unite their very beings in the Force to become one ultra-powerful unit. A unit capable of achieving levels of power that no one Force user could ever achieve on their own. even granting the Force Dyad the power to manipulate life itself. Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, largely dealt with the concept of a Force Dyad in relation to both Rey and Ben Solo, as their connection through the Force allowed them to do dope shit like tap into each other's senses, send objects to each other across light years, and even save someone from death itself, as we saw Ben Solo do for Rey to return the favor of her saving his own life. The Sith knew about this powerful Force Dyad connection and even had it written on the walls of their Sith temples. And so, this being the case, Sith like Darth Plagueis and Darth Sidious have been trying to form dyads with their apprentices in order to be able to claim that dyad's power for themselves, especially so they could have the power over death. But unfortunately for the Sith, their connections with their apprentices would not allow them to fully achieve such a powerful bond. But even though the Sith themselves haven't seen a Force dyad in generations before Rey and Ben Solo, I believe that we, the time-traveling audience, have seen Force dyads at work in other beings outside of just those two. I mean, we were basically teased with a Force dyad in The Acolyte on Disney Plus through May and Osha Anaseya, twins who had a special connection through the Force that made them quote-unquote always one but born as two. And of course we have the twins Luke and Leia, who also had a powerful connection with one another, which we saw Luke display in The Empire Strikes Back when he used his connection with Leia to communicate with her from far away.
Hear me. Leia.
We've got to go back.
What?
I know where Luke is.
I highly recommend that you guys keep this Force dyad concept in mind for later in this breakdown, because it might just help explain a big mystery surrounding why Padme Amidala lost the will to live, quote unquote. We'll talk about that later. After this, Chancellor Palpatine tells Anakin that he totally coincidentally got word that General Grievous was hanging out on the planet Utapau and that he should be the one to go and stop him. However, the Council would elect to send Obi-Wan instead due to Obi-Wan Kenobi having more experience, a gesture that angers Anakin and strengthens his growing resentment towards his master. Meanwhile, Jedi Master Yoda has arrived on the planet Kashyyyk to address the droid attack on the Wookiees, alongside the chieftain of the Wookiees named Tarful, as well as the familiar fuzzball that is Chewbacca, played once again by the late and great Peter Mayhew for the first time since the original trilogy. And as the Wookiees begin their attack on the approaching droid army, we hear one of these Wookiees do a little Tarzan yell as they land on the side of one of the armored tank droids to blow it up, which is a little funny addition to the scene. While this, of course, is the first Star Wars movie to feature a battle with a bunch of Wookiees, George Lucas actually had plans for such an action sequence decades before, as early as the pre-production phase for Episode 4, A New Hope. George Lucas would also almost feature a big Wookiee battle in Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, but he would ultimately decide to swap out the Wookiee race for the Ewoks, a primary reason why the Ewok race are a bunch of little fuzzballs like the Wookiees. Like, they were very much inspired by the Wookiee race. And as you can imagine, wearing a giant furry suit all day can get pretty damn hot. So, to make the conditions bearable for the actors inside of these Wookiee suits, the costume design team installed a cooling apparatus that circulated ice water throughout that suit to keep things cool. And after Anakin apologizes for being arrogant and letting Obi-Wan down, Obi-Wan tells him that he's proud of him and the Jedi that he's become before telling his old friend goodbye, not knowing that this would be the last time that he would ever see Anakin before he transitions to the role of Darth Vader. And to foreshadow Anakin's upcoming fall during this goodbye, George Lucas deliberately places Anakin in the shadows while Obi-Wan stands in the light, which is a fantastic piece of cinematography. However, even though his master would give his love and praise to Anakin before he left, Anakin would soon let his appreciation for Obi-Wan be overpowered by his deep fear of losing Padme, as he would have another cosmic force vision of Padme suffering in childbirth, but this time with Obi-Wan by her side instead of him, causing deep anger and jealousy to grow within him. Meanwhile, Obi-Wan heads to Utapau with a brand new astromech in his Jedi starship named R4G9 to replace the brutally slain R4P17. R4G9 actually previously belonged to the blue Jedi Master Aayla Secura before it was given to Obi-Wan to use for this mission. The design for this astromech was actually chosen by the fans, as George Lucas would have the subscribers of StarWars.com vote on the design that they loved the best for R4G9. And before Obi-Wan leaves for Utapau, he gets intel from Clone Commander Cody, who eventually rhetorically asks Obi-Wan when he has ever let Obi-Wan down, a hilariously unfortunate bit of foreshadowing towards Commander Cody being the one to eventually order Obi-Wan to be shot down after Darth Sidious activates Order 66. And when Obi-Wan arrives on the planet, he greets one of the leaders of Utapau, who informs him that General Grievous and his droids are holding them all hostage. And what's absolutely crazy about this point in the film is how George Lucas was almost about to have the beloved Han Solo be the one to help Obi-Wan find General Grievous's hidden location in the first place. Apparently, a 10-year-old Han Solo was going to be amongst the Wookiees on Kashyyyk during their big battle when he comes across a piece of machinery that reveals General Grievous's location on Utapau, which would then lead to playing an instrumental role in the General's defeat. However, George Lucas thought that the Chewbacca cameo was more than enough. Obi-Wan then tells the Pauan leader that he's going to help them and pretends to leave. But because Obi-Wan is a sneaky boy, he secretly finds a Varactyl to ride on to get to General Grievous's location. And this isn't the first time Obi-Wan has ridden a Varactyl. In fact, Varactyls have been one of Obi-Wan's favorite creatures to ride and bond with ever since the days of his apprenticeship under his master Qui-Gon Jinn. The canon Star Wars book Master and Apprentice by Claudia Gray goes into Obi-Wan's first time riding a crimson red Varactyl while on an important mission on the planet Pygel. Like, I highly recommend this book to anyone who wants to learn more about Obi-Wan's early days or to get a deeper look into Qui-Gon Jinn's personality, because it is truly some great stuff. Obi-Wan then greets Grievous with a friendly "Hello there," a line that directly references Obi-Wan Kenobi's first lines in A New Hope.
Hello there.
Grievous then sends his Magna Guard to kill Obi-Wan, but Obi-Wan is too damn slick with the Force to die from a couple of robot Donatello wannabes and crushes them. And one of the pinned Magna droids attempts to keep fighting, but Obi-Wan chops off their heads, which oddly causes that Magna droid to die. Something that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense considering how a Magna droid was able to keep fighting Obi-Wan without a head at the beginning of the movie. And one of my favorite parts about this scene in general is how one of the battle droids in the background taps one of his buddies so that they can both marvel at Grievous igniting his stolen lightsabers together like a couple of robo bros. But speaking of Grievous, George Lucas was heavily considering Sir Gary Oldman to play the character. However, because George Lucas left the Directors Guild, Gary Oldman was not able to be part of this movie, which is totally stupid, but them's the breaks. Gotta love politics. Obi-Wan and Grievous then start beating each other with some glow sticks for a bit until Commander Cody and the Test Tube Brigade show up to give Obi-Wan some much needed backup. And because General Grievous is a career coward, he would then try to escape the situation on his TSMEU-6 personal wheel bike, leading Obi-Wan to call his Varactyl buddy Boga to give chase. And even though this wheel bike is merely a vehicle, the production did heavily consider making this bike a full sentient droid, specifically so that this droid could act as a sentient contrast to Obi-Wan's organic sentient Varactyl. But they ultimately decided against that. And the following chase sequence between Obi-Wan and Grievous was actually directed by the legend himself, Steven Spielberg, who also directed the scene of Anakin landing the crashing cruiser on Coruscant at the beginning of the film. And this would be the third time Spielberg would have some influence on a prequel film, as the Asogian alien species that appeared in The Phantom Menace were inspired by 1982's E.T. the Extraterrestrial, and the Kaminoan species from Attack of the Clones were inspired by the aliens from 1977's Close Encounters of the Third Kind. The acclaimed director also had a big hand in helping craft the intense volcanic showdown between Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi later on in the film, as George Lucas would bring him in to help him pre-visualize the fight. And this would also serve to help Steven Spielberg immensely, as he would use his time pre-visualizing with the team at Industrial Light and Magic to help him prepare to work with them on his upcoming War of the Worlds movie that Spielberg would release in 2005. But eventually Obi-Wan would give General Grievous a serious case of heartburn after he uses a blaster to shoot his exposed heart, finally putting an end to this cybernetic serial killer. And it's kind of wild to think that this showdown between Obi-Wan and General Grievous could have easily been a rematch between Obi-Wan and a cybernetically rebuilt Darth Maul, as one of the ideas that the production had for the Grievous character was to just give Maul robotic body parts in order to get his revenge on Kenobi. And while such a decision would have effectively foreshadowed Palpatine's cybernetic experiments with Darth Vader, George Lucas would opt to make Grievous his own separate character. However, we would eventually see Darth Maul get himself some fresh robotic legs when the Clone Wars animated series expanded upon his lore. And hearing of Obi-Wan's engagement with Grievous, the Council would then send Anakin to tell Palpatine of their assault. secretly with the hopes of gauging Palpatine's reaction. And when Anakin leaves, the Jedi start discussing what would happen if they convinced the Senate to forcibly remove Palpatine from his position of power, with Mace Windu recommending that the Jedi temporarily take control of the Senate until the Senate could find a new Democratic chancellor. This is of course an extremely slippery slope, as this would effectively be replacing political control of the galaxy from one religious cult to another. And as we know from real life, once you start firmly mixing in religion and politics, it is quite easy for the religious institution to be tempted into keeping that power for themselves and using it for their own ends, which is exactly what Palpatine was telling Anakin at the opera when he pointed out how the Jedi sought power just as much as the Sith did. And it's the type of thinking that Anakin was beginning to see and worry about within the Jedi. In fact, there was originally supposed to be a cut of the movie where we were to see Anakin specifically list a bunch of flaws within the Jedi that motivated his disillusionment towards the Order. However, George Lucas would take those lines out of the movie in order to more concretely make Anakin's obsession with Padme his main reason for turning to the dark side rather than the hypocrisy of the Jedi. And when Anakin gets to Palpatine's office, Palpatine can be seen looking at the Death Star plans, the same plans that were given to him by Count Dooku after they were originally made by the insectoid alien race known as the Geonosians. In fact, Palpatine was so obsessed with this idea of possessing this ultimate superweapon that we can also see the Death Star design engraved on 2 of the desks in his office, proudly displaying the killing machine that would make the entire galactic empire bend their knee to his will. And as Palpatine attempts to lure Anakin to the dark side, the 2 of them walk past these 2 giant black urns that are actually Sith spirit urns. And while we don't exactly know what a Sith spirit urn does in the current Star Wars canon, we do know that Palpatine would hold the ashes of his former master Darth Plagueis inside one of these urns in the Legends continuity. And I do find it quite interesting how these urns lie directly on the opposite side of the wall to these 2 statues of the Sages of Duarte. Like I mentioned over in my Phantom Menace breakdown, the Sages of Duarte were a group of 4 ancient philosophers from the planet Duarte that were instrumental in the formation of the Senate's constitution, despite their extremely contentious viewpoints. The 2 statues in this scene are of sages Faya Rodemos, depicted with crossed arms, and Yan John Zelmar, who has one of his hands in his sleeves. The other 2 sages, Sistros Nevid and Brata Danlos, were shown in Palpatine's office in the Phantom Menace, with Sistros Nevid's statue actually being the hiding place for Darth Sidious's 2 lightsabers. And while it hasn't officially been confirmed yet, it appears to be heavily implied that these controversial sages were actually members of the Sith cult hiding amongst the growing Republic a long time ago, as these statues were made during a period when the Sith controlled the galaxy. So having these statues be placed on the opposite wall of these urns might just imply that the spirit of these 2 sages reside within those 2 urns. However, that's just a theory of mine and not fact, of course. And also in the hallway leading to Palpatine's office is a wide carving depicting Jedi and Sith fighting in the Great Sith Wars of old, with this carving having been made around 4,000 years prior to the events in this movie and was found by a group of archaeologists on the moon Yavin 4. And with this being a piece of art depicting a war between the Jedi and Sith, it is symbolic that Palpatine revealed himself as Darth Sidious to Anakin in front of it, as this moment would mark the beginnings of the birth of Darth Vader, Palpatine's greatest weapon that would avenge the Sith of old by destroying the Jedi Order. Anakin then brings this news of Palpatine being Darth Sidious to Mace Windu, who resolves to, quote-unquote, move quickly if the Jedi Order is to survive, showing how Mace Windu's motivations are mainly focused on the Jedi Order surviving to keep their position of power in the galaxy. And after hearing this, Anakin tries to convince Windu to let him go with him, but Mace Windu rejects his offer due to detecting Anakin's inner conflict, a conflict that we see expressed a little bit later on when Anakin is seen crying in an empty Jedi Council chamber, an action unbefitting of someone on the Jedi Council who is supposed to be free of attachments. But Mace Windu isn't the only person who seems to detect Anakin's strong conflicted emotions. Padme herself appears to feel Anakin's pain as well, all the way from her apartment. And this is very likely due to the presence of 2 Force-sensitive twins inside of her, who have a high enough midichlorian count in their bloodstream to be able to connect Padme to the Force itself, allowing her to connect with her husband's feelings. And later on, when Darth Vader is going on his slicing spree at the Jedi Temple, Padme would start crying out of nowhere due to being able to detect the darkness of Anakin's actions from far away thanks to Luke and Leia. Mace Windu would then grab the Jedi Saesee Tiin, Kit Fisto, and Agent Kolar to confront Sidious. But Sidious would quickly get rid of Mace Windu's homies with almost comical ease, leaving Mace Windu to fight Sidious alone. And during this fight, the audience can actually see Sidious holding Anakin's lightsaber for a brief moment. And this is mostly because the original intention was for Sidious to actually be fighting with Anakin's lightsaber. But Lucas would end up changing it so Anakin would have his lightsaber when he confronts Mace Windu after Mace disarms Palpatine and corners him. However, Sidious would then shoot Force Lightning at Mace Windu, forcing Windu to block and reflect that lightning right back at him, which is kind of weird considering that lightsabers have not reflected Force Lightning back at all before this point, with Obi-Wan's lightsaber having merely absorbed Dooku's lightning in Attack of the Clones. However, the 2019 Star Wars book, Secret of the Jedi, would reveal that reflecting Force Lightning is something that only the most skilled Jedi could do, which would explain why a younger Attack of the Clones era Obi-Wan was not able to do so. I mean, we do see Rey Skywalker reflect Force Lightning back at Palpatine in Episode 9, but that is very likely because the spirits of all the Jedi were with Rey during that moment. But unfortunately for Windu, Anakin would arrive and slice his arm off as soon as Anakin detected that Windu was going to destroy his one ticket to save Padme, rather than just let the Senate send Palpatine to prison. And this is before a disfigured Sidious would use lightning to throw Windu out the damn window. And with Anakin unable to turn back following this massive betrayal, he then immediately pledges his allegiance to Sidious and the Sith religion and is named Darth Vader, with Vader of course meaning father in German, pointing to Anakin being the father of Luke and Leia in the original trilogy. And speaking of fathers, this monumental scene was originally supposed to reveal that Palpatine was secretly Anakin's father this entire time, as George Lucas originally intended for Sidious to reveal exactly how Anakin was born through the Force. Apparently, Darth Sidious was originally supposed to say, "I arranged for your conception. I used the power of the Force to will the midichlorians to start the cell divisions that created you." And after Anakin expresses disbelief at that statement, Darth Sidious would follow that by saying, "Ah, but you know it's true. When you clear your mind, you will see the truth. You could almost think of me as your father." A conversation that was purposely meant to mirror that of the Luke Skywalker father reveal in The Empire Strikes Back, as Darth Vader would tell Luke to search his own feelings to know that Vader was telling the truth about being his father.
Search your feelings, you know it to be true.
However, George Lucas would end up taking that line out of the movie in order to keep Anakin's special midichlorian birth circumstances a cosmic mystery. Sidious then orders Vader to wipe out all the Jedi in the Jedi Temple before going to Mustafar to eliminate all the Separatist leaders, all in the name of peace, which Vader does with extreme efficiency, even dealing with the Jedi younglings himself. And before he does deal with these younglings, a youngling named Sors Bandim asks Vader what they're going to do, with Sors Bandim's name actually being an anagram for the young actor's own name, Ross Beedman. This would then lead to that youngling taking a step back in fear as soon as Vader ignites his lightsaber, a reaction that Hayden would get out of this young actor by unexpectedly yelling boo at them in order to frighten them. So that kid's fear during that moment was actually 100% genuine. Sidious would then activate Order 66 to trigger all the clones in the battlefields across the galaxy to turn on their Jedi allies. However, because Yoda was able to detect the Jedi massacre all the way on Kashyyyk, he was ready to defend himself against a surprise clone attack before having Tarful and Chewbacca escort him to his ship. And as Tarful says goodbye to his old friend, that whale that Tarful makes is actually the same whale made by the Wookiee Itchy from the 1978 Star Wars Holiday Special. In fact, the design of the entire Wookiee home planet Kashyyyk was actually taken from the Star Wars Holiday Special as well, as that would be the first time that the Wookiee home planet would be depicted on screen. Meanwhile, Senator Bail Organa attempts to see what's going on at the Smoking Jedi Temple when he's stopped by a group of clone troopers before witnessing them gun down a Jedi youngling named Zet Jukasa, played by George Lucas's own son, Jet Lucas, a character that also appeared alongside Obi-Wan and Jocasta Nu in the Jedi Archives in Attack of the Clones. And after Senator Organa flees the scene, he boards the Organa CR-70 Corvette called the Tantive 3, a ship closely modeled after Princess Leia's Tantive 4 CR-90 Corvette that we see Darth Vader and his stormtroopers board at the beginning of A New Hope. Senator Organa would then pick up both Yoda and Obi-Wan Kenobi not long before he would get a transmission from Palpatine's right-hand man Mas Amedda telling him to report to a special emergency Senate session. The pilot that activates this message for the Senator is actually a Captain Jeremock Colton, played by actor Jeremy Bulloch, whose real-life name inspired the character's first name, as Jeremy Bulloch was shortened to Jeremock. Jeremy Bulloch, of course, played the in-suit actor for Boba Fett in both episodes 5 and 6 of the original trilogy. And with the Senate in session, Yoda and Obi-Wan take the opportunity to infiltrate the Jedi Temple in order to deactivate a misleading transmission telling all the Jedi to report to the temple. And after cutting their way through the hostile clone forces, Obi-Wan would eventually replace that transmission to a warning for all the Jedi instead. A warning that we actually see in a holocron projection in the 2019 video game Jedi Fallen Order.
This is Master Obi-Wan Kenobi. I regret to report that both our Jedi Order and the Republic have fallen.
Obi-Wan would then go to check on the Jedi Temple camera footage, where he would see his brother Anakin Skywalker slaying a bunch of his Jedi comrades, which include 2 Jedi named Sin Draylig and Benet. Sin Draylig is actually an anagram for the movie's stunt coordinator Nick Gillard, who plays the character, while Maisie McCallum, the daughter of prequel producer Rick McCallum, plays the Jedi Benet. And meanwhile, over in the Senate, Sidious decrees that the Republic be reformed into a galactic empire and that all remaining Jedi be hunted down for their betrayal. And as the Senate reacts to this with thunderous applause, Senator Amidala reacts with disgust, while wearing a piece of decor in her hair that resembles the insignia for the rebellion from the original trilogy, foreshadowing towards Padme's daughter Leia's intense involvement with the group. After the session, Obi-Wan would head to Padme's apartment to deliver the heartbreaking news of Anakin's tragically violent fall to the dark side. However, as Obi-Wan is telling Padme that he saw a recording of Anakin cutting down a bunch of Jedi younglings, we can see actor Ewan McGregor subtly cover his face during this moment. And this wasn't done to add to his performance or anything. Bro was actually just trying to hold in a laugh so that he wouldn't ruin the take, which is hilariously wild considering the seriousness of the subject matter. This would then lead Padme to sneak Obi-Wan onto her ship in order to confront Anakin on the planet Mustafar, while Yoda enters Emperor Palpatine's office to confront Darth Sidious. And as Yoda enters, he knocks out 2 of the Emperor's royal guard, dressed in deep crimson armor to represent the red color of the Sith. The Emperor's royal guard would eventually grow to replace the Senate guard, who typically wore blue, a color typically associated with the lightsaber of many Jedi like Anakin Skywalker. And much like Anakin Skywalker would transition from blue to red, so would Palpatine's security force as he slowly destroyed the Galactic Senate. Obi-Wan Kenobi actor Ewan McGregor actually desperately wanted to play one of these Crimson Guards that stand alongside Emperor Palpatine in this movie, but we don't really know whether or not George Lucas actually let him do it. But I sure as hell hope he did, because my boy Obi-Wan deserves to dance with the dark side a little bit. We of course saw these guards next to the Emperor Palpatine in Return of the Jedi, so it makes sense for them to make their first chronological appearance right before the fall of the Republic and Revenge of the Sith. This would then lead to a showdown between Yoda and Darth Sidious that would eventually transition to the Senate room itself. A fitting stage for these 2 cult leaders to fight in, considering how Senate infighting was a big reason why the Clone Wars even happened in the first place. It was actually George Lucas's original intention for this duel to be broadcasted across the galaxy after the 2 of them were caught on one of the Senate security cameras. But that of course ended up not happening. This battle would of course result in Sidious's victory after Yoda falls from one of the floating Senate platforms onto the ground below, symbolizing the fall of the Jedi Order. But let's switch things on over to the volcanic planet Mustafar, where Anakin has just murdered all of the CIS leaders. And to symbolize Anakin's fall to the dark side, Anakin's eyes change to a piercing yellow color. And in Star Wars canon, this eye color change is meant to reflect the dark side user's fiercely angry emotional state, as eyes are supposed to be windows to one's inner soul. However, because emotions are fleeting things, Darth Vader's eyes are able to change between yellow and his blue normal eyes, like they do when Padme goes to confront Anakin on Mustafar a little bit later. However, just because you are a Sith Lord doesn't mean you automatically are going to get yourself a fresh pair of yellow eyes. It all really depends on the amount of fear, anger, and hate inside of your heart in that current moment. And while Count Dooku himself was a Sith apprentice, his levels of anger never really matched that of Darth Vader or Darth Sidious. And part of me feels like that is part of the reason why Darth Sidious wanted to get rid of Darth Tyrannus as his apprentice. Count Dooku's heart just wasn't in it enough. However, this Sith eye color change wasn't originally George Lucas's intention for Anakin Skywalker, and was actually a suggestion made by Hayden Christensen himself, who thought that the change from blue to yellow would be impactful for his character. And while George Lucas initially disagreed with this idea, he would eventually come around to it. And while the planet Mustafar is known as a planet covered in ash and magma that director George Lucas specifically modeled after hell itself, it also has a reputation of one of the most dark side abundant planets in the galaxy. But this wasn't always the case. In fact, Mustafar used to be an absolutely beautiful planet covered in green grass with lots of abundant life and trees and whatnot. That is until Mustafar would accidentally be destroyed by a grieving woman named Lady Corvax while attempting to resurrect her dead husband. A little more than 1,000 years before the events of the prequels, there was a rare and super powerful artifact on this green planet of Mustafar called the Bright Star Crystal. And desperate to bring her husband back from the dead, Lady Corvax would attempt to harness the power of this crystal inside of this powerful machine called an Eon engine. Unfortunately, rather than bringing her husband back to life, this Eon engine would release a powerful burst of energy that would completely decimate the surface of Mustafar, turning it into an inhospitable volcanic planet and wiping out millions. This tragedy, of course, mirrors that of Anakin Skywalker's, as Anakin would also cause untold levels of destruction while attempting to keep the one that he loved from permanent death as well. This is all basically covered in the Star Wars virtual reality game Vader Immortal, and it's also where we learn that Darth Vader was well aware of this tragedy before he requested that the Emperor give him the planet Mustafar as his own, as Vader sought to continue Lady Corvax's quest for his own ends, specifically to bring his beloved Padme Amidala back to life after he acted like a possessive fool and tried to force choke her to keep her from leaving him. However, Vader would ultimately fail when a descendant of Lady Corvax would destroy both the Bright Star Crystal and the Eon engine, keeping Vader from Padme while also beginning the process of Mustafar's healing from its globally volcanic state. And this wouldn't be the first time that Darth Vader would attempt to use Mustafar in order to resurrect Padme, as Darth Vader also tried to resurrect Padme in a much different way back when he first acquired the planet Mustafar. In fact, Darth Vader's Mustafar castle is actually a byproduct of Darth Vader's first attempt to bring Padme back from the cosmic realm of the dead. Because you see, in issues 21 to 25 of the 2017 Darth Vader comics, we learned of a rather unique dark side user from the distant past named Darth Momin, whose consciousness was stored within an ancient helmet that Darth Sidious gave to Vader as a gift. However, when that helmet was put on a living being, that being would be completely taken over by Darth Momin's consciousness. Darth Vader would then command Momin to build a castle for him that would allow him to bring Padme back from the dead by channeling the dark side of the Force from the planet itself. And after a good amount of trial and error, Darth Momin would eventually design and build the perfect castle that could serve as a strong conduit for the Force. But as Sith are prone to do, Darth Momin would end up trying to betray Darth Vader in order to use the powers channeled by the castle to resurrect himself fully. But Darth Vader would quickly silence Momin forever. But yeah, after Vader takes care of the Separatist leaders, he reunites with Padme outside, this time with his eyes back in their normal blue state. And when Vader tells her of his plans for total galactic domination, Padme's heart shatters, and she immediately makes the decision to walk away from him. And like the toxically possessive partner that Anakin is, he chooses to ignore what Padme wants and force chokes her in order to get her to do what he wants, especially when he suspects that she was now with Obi-Wan. And one of the ideas that the production had for this particular moment was for Padme to attempt to assassinate Darth Vader right then and there, as we can see from this piece of concept art here. And at this point in the movie, Luke and Leia would have already been born, and Anakin would have been wielding the red lightsaber that Darth Vader wields in the original movies. And seeing what her beloved has become, Padme would hug Anakin before pulling out a knife to stab his crazy ass. But Padme would ultimately not have the heart to do so, and it would be that perceived betrayal that would lead Darth Vader to choking her with the Force. But yeah, Obi-Wan emerges standing like a disappointed dad and demands that Vader let Padme go before Vader eventually tells Obi-Wan, "If you're not with me, then you're my enemy." Words that can also be found in the Bible, specifically in the book of Matthew chapter 12, verse 30, which says, "Whoever is not with me is against me," which is a quote from Jesus himself. Obi-Wan then follows that by saying that only a Sith deals in absolutes, which is yet another example of how the doctrine of the Jedi cult has made them all blind to their own faults, as the Jedi were pretty damn absolutely against any emotion that could maybe send someone down the path of the dark side. Then the two of them engage in their big battle while the environment of Mustafar erupts in the background. And this explosive volcanic activity that we see in the scene was filmed from a real volcano in Italy. Mount Etna actually began erupting while they were filming, so George Lucas took the opportunity to capture some footage to be used in the background during their fight. And to prepare for this fight, these two actors spent a full 2 months training in the art of fencing. So much so that by the time the production began filming, the two of them were so locked in that their fighting movements evolved to incredible speeds that we see on screen. And to physically prepare for the demands of his role as Darth Vader, Hayden Christensen would actually eat 6 meals a day in order to gain around 24 pounds, which is some serious dedication. But of course, their big duel would end with Anakin's limbs getting lobbed off by his former best friend after he attempts to best Obi-Wan with a cool flip all the way from the low ground, like an idiot. But this would be a move that Obi-Wan would actually execute successfully to kill Darth Maul in The Phantom Menace. And right after Obi-Wan gets his legs and arm chopped off, we can see Anakin begin to slide down the hill, and as he does, his mouth moves as if he was talking, but the audience doesn't hear anything come out of his mouth. This is because Anakin was supposed to say, "Help me, Master," during that moment, which Obi-Wan was supposed to reply with, "I love you, but I can't help you." But George Lucas would end up changing those lines in order to further show how Obi-Wan no longer considered Darth Vader to be his former apprentice Anakin, instead saying that he loved Anakin in the past tense before grabbing his lightsaber, explaining why he has it in the original trilogy. And after Obi-Wan leaves, the hooded Emperor arrives to pick up what's left of his apprentice, leaning over his body to check up on him, much like a hooded old Ben Kenobi would check up on Luke Skywalker in A New Hope after he was attacked by Tusken Raiders. And the volcanic nature of Darth Vader's injuries was actually teased long before Revenge of the Sith went into production. In fact, we can see that Anakin's crispy fate was alluded to as early as the days of Return of the Jedi, specifically in the Return of the Jedi novelization, where Vader's volcanic burns would be mentioned as the source for his scarred and deformed body. Meanwhile, Yoda hides with Senator Organa on the asteroid Polis Massa, with the base on that asteroid having been inspired by the Clavius moon base from 2001 A Space Odyssey. Yoda is seen meditating before Senator Organa informs him of Obi-Wan and Padme's arrival. And during this moment of meditation, the original intent was for Yoda to hear the voice of Qui-Gon Jinn from the Cosmic Force to teach him how to become a Force ghost after death.
I made a great discovery. With my training, you will learn to merge with the Force at will. Your physical self will fade away, but you will still retain your consciousness. You will become more powerful than any Jedi could imagine.
However, because this moment never happened, Yoda would ultimately learn how to do this from Qui-Gon Jinn in the last 3 episodes of Clone Wars Season 6. And while on the operating table, the medical droid tells the group that they need to remove the babies ASAP, as Padme has inexplicably, quote-unquote, lost the will to live. I do want to talk real quick about this idea of Padme dying of a broken heart, because not only do I find that incredibly lame for a woman who has been so fiercely independent for most of her life, I also find this medical droid's assumptive diagnosis to be misleading and straight up incorrect. In my opinion, the only person that was right about the circumstances of Padme's death was Darth Sidious, when Darth Sidious tells Darth Vader that he actually killed Padme in his blind anger. And I believe that Anakin actually did physically kill Padme Amidala on the planet Mustafar, meaning that Padme's personal living force was taken from her after being choked. However, the reason why Padme didn't die is because she had 2 incredibly powerful Force-attuned twins inside of her stomach, courtesy of Anakin Skywalker. And because Anakin himself was a host of unheard of amounts of microscopic midichlorians floating in his bloodstream, when Anakin decided to shoot the goo inside a senator from Naboo after episode 2, Anakin's DNA was transferred to Padme Amidala, allowing her to create an overwhelming amount of midichlorians within her own body, as both Luke and Leia developed inside of her. This being said, although Padme's own living force was depleted by Anakin's actions, the living force of both Luke and Leia was enough to sustain Padme until they were physically removed from her body. And not only this, but this also touches on the Force dyad concept that I brought up earlier, a concept that was expounded upon in Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. Much like the resurrected Emperor Palpatine mentioned to Rey, a Force dyad is a powerful connection that 2 powerful Force users can have that grant them the power over life itself. And since Luke and Leia have been heavily implied throughout the series to have a Force dyad connection, I believe that their union in the womb is what sustained Padme after she was killed by Vader on Mustafar. Baby Luke and Leia were actually played by a singular baby actor named Aidan Barton, the son of the film's editor Roger Barton, who apparently spent 9 months in acting school in the womb. And all those acting lessons must have paid off because he played Princess Leia flawlessly. What a performance! Those Goo-Goos and Gagas truly spoke to me on a human level. But after giving birth to Luke and Leia, Padme tells Obi-Wan to not give up on Anakin's inner light before passing away. And meanwhile on Coruscant, Darth Vader is also on the operating table, with the ground around the table purposely being designed after the logo for the Galactic Empire, which is a nice touch. And as Vader is being operated on, we can hear his heartbeat thudding slowly in the background, getting slower and slower until it briefly stops when the iconic Darth Vader helmet is being put on, a symbolic audio cue alluding to the death of Anakin Skywalker and the birth of Darth Vader as we know him best. And after his operation, we see Darth Vader joining his master and overlooking the construction of his ultimate superweapon, the Death Star. And standing next to Darth Sidious as Darth Vader approaches is none other than Grand Moff Tarkin himself. Tarkin was of course played by actor Peter Cushing in A New Hope, an actor who would unfortunately pass away on August 11th, 1994 after a battle with prostate cancer at the age of 81. Apparently, George Lucas's original plan for Tarkin in this movie was to reuse old footage of Peter Cushing in order to effectively bring the actor back to life using movie magic. However, after some trial and error, Lucas would ultimately decide to cover actor Wayne Pygram in makeup to make him look like Tarkin instead. And this scene was actually the first scene that was shot for Revenge of the Sith, as it was actually filmed on the set of Attack of the Clones years before, which is kind of wild. And it is actually Hayden Christensen himself inside of the suit. Originally, George Lucas was going to get a tall actor to portray Darth Vader, as the suit of Darth Vader is significantly taller than Hayden Christensen in real life, but after Hayden begged George Lucas to let him wear the suit instead, George Lucas just let him do it. However, since Hayden was no NBA basketball player, he would be forced to wear a fake torso on the top of his body. This meant that Hayden was completely unable to look through Darth Vader's red eye holes, forcing him to have to look through Darth Vader's grated mouth area instead. Lucas would also intentionally make the helmet a little bit heavy so Hayden would purposely have trouble balancing his head, a subtle way of showing Vader getting adjusted to his new armor. And while this is happening, Obi-Wan, Yoda, and Bail Organa agree that Leia should go with the Organas while Luke be thrown in the trash on Tatooine to live with his aunt and uncle while Obi-Wan watches over him. And this is before Yoda would tell Obi-Wan how to commune with his master Qui-Gon through the Force, like Qui-Gon taught Yoda during the Clone Wars. This would actually be the last time we see Yoda in this movie, which is kind of a bummer because apparently there was a deleted scene that was shot that shows Yoda's arrival on the planet Dagobah in order to begin his years of isolation on that swampy planet. And I really wish they kept that scene in the movie because of how much of an integral role Yoda and the planet Dagobah play in the original trilogy, but no big deal. And finally, the movie ends with Obi-Wan delivering Luke to Luke's Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru, with the two of them holding Luke while looking out at the suns of Tatooine, a scene meant to call back to a teenage Luke looking out at the two suns in A New Hope. Thank you guys so much for watching this breakdown for all of these Star Wars prequel movies. You guys are amazing for watching this super long video. Like always, you guys can follow me at Mastertainment on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, wherever I am on the internet. But most importantly, follow Heavy Spoilers here by hitting that subscribe button and also hitting that like button if you guys enjoyed this video. But like always, I've been MT, you guys have been amazing, and I'll catch you guys later. Bye.